Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D in WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the movie of what if Deku is hit by a quirk that stops him from sleeping. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The air is cold as Izuku steps outside 1A's common room. He had volunteered to go get some snack for Class 1A's movie night at the nearest store. After moving in the dorms, they had started this tradition of watching movies on Sundays as a way to keep their minds off of everything happening, to relax. Perhaps it hadn't been the most rational idea, seeing as they have classes the following morning, but they knew it was exactly what they needed to get through their week. After a few minutes, he reaches the gates of UA and leaves the campus. Izuku slows his pace, enjoying the nice breeze. His friends could wait a bit longer. The sun had already set a few hours ago, and now the stars shine brightly in the sky. When he arrives at the store, he takes out his phone and opens his note app. He had asked his classmates if they had any special requests, and had quickly typed everything down so he wouldn't forget anything. Izuku is familiar with the place, which makes it easier to find everything that's on his list. He used to come here a lot when he was younger to buy hero cards and candies, and later in middle school for band-aids and painkillers. Now, he's here for his snacks and only that, which brings a smile to his face. He wonders if he'll keep coming here after he's graduated, and what he'll buy then. The cashier looks at him with a strange look while he scans all the items, obviously trying to be polite by staying quiet. Izuku realizes he's been smiling to himself, and maybe muttering about some of his classmates' odd tastes, so he pays for everything and thanks the guy behind the counter who replies to him with a slight nod. Izuku's eyes are glued to his phone as he opens the door, making sure he didn't forget anything. There's a step he remembers right where the door is, so he leans on it to push it open, but at the same time, someone else pulls it open. Izuku crashes into someone, almost dropping his phone and falling in the process. "I'm so sorry," Izuku exclaims as he looks up at the stranger who had caught his arm to stop him from falling. The man has curly dark hair and wears a trench coat. He must not be older than 30, and his grip on Izuku's arm is firm. A moment passes where the stranger doesn't reply, and then his eyes soften and he smiles. "Be careful." He drops Izuku's arm and steps to the side to let the teenager pass. Izuku shuffles out of the way, an uncomfortable feeling settling in his stomach that makes him want to leave as soon as possible. He starts to make his way back to UAS campus, and glances back one last time to where the stranger was just a moment ago only to find the man staring at him. Izuku awkwardly continues walking, though a little bit faster, and doesn't think more of it after that. When he finally enters the common room again, he feels pride swelling his heart for not getting himself into trouble for once. The movie Class 1 had settled on was some random series on Netflix. Some of Izuku's classmates had fallen asleep halfway through, and the rest felt ready for bed by the time it was over. Izuku had been starting to get tired as well. It's a Sunday, meaning they had classes tomorrow. People started going up in their rooms and wishing each other good night as they did. When Izuku reaches his own room, he closes the door behind him and plops down on his bed, letting exhaustion wash over him. Izuku closes his eyes and waits for sleep to come, as he normally would. After a few minutes of waiting, he doesn't fall asleep. Izuku had never really had issues with sleep, never needed pills. It was something that came easily to him. Normally, he tosses and turns. He tries every trick he knows. He counts from 1,000 to 0. He does breathing exercises, tries multiple ones, even. Minutes turn into an hour, which turns into 2 and 5. At some point during the night, Izuku decides to sit up. 4:26, his phone reads. Izuku can work with that. He stands up on shaky legs and changes into his sports clothes. He usually went on a jog with Todoroki early in the morning, though never this early. Izuku thinks maybe it will help wake himself up. Grabbing his shoes, he steps out of his room feeling more tired than when he had entered it and heads for the boys' bathroom. Izuku looks at himself in the mirror and brings a hand to his face. It doesn't look too bad, Izuku thinks. His eyes were puffy and had dark under-eye circles. Izuku splashes some cold water onto his face hoping it would wake him up, which it did, and goes on with his day. He runs faster than usual, fighting against his exhaustion. "I can't afford to slack off today," Izuku reminds himself. He's panting, but he keeps running faster because he's upset with himself. Izuku knows he needs as much sleep as he can get so his muscle can properly grow to sustain one for all. Exhausted, Izuku finally slows his steps. His legs are shaking from fatigue, so he plops down on the running track. The artificial turf is cold underneath his hands, and Izuku takes a moment to catch his breath. Footsteps approach Izuku. Midoriya. Todoroki greets him as he continues to make his way toward him. He looks surprised to see him, and Izuku understands why. Todoroki is always the first to arrive. Izuku offers him a small smile, still out of breath. "You're here early," notes Todoroki as he offers Izuku some water. Grateful, he accepts the bottle and drinks down most of its content rapidly. Yeah, Izuku hands the water back to the other student. He hesitates on saying more but settles with "I didn't sleep so well last night." Todoroki furrows his brows. It looks as if he wants to add something, but instead decides to stay silent. Izuku doesn't want his friends to start worrying over him. It's not like it was anything serious. Plus, it wasn't entirely a lie. He truly hadn't slept well. Izuku slowly rises to his feet even though his limbs already ache. He and Todoroki start jogging again, though their pace is more relaxed than usual. The fresh morning air is gentle against Izuku's face. He can't wait to sleep tonight. The morning classes come around. Izuku finds himself distracted most of the time. Their first period is homeroom, and a lot of students want to show up more tired than usual. It doesn't take long before their teacher notices this. Aizawa had been made aware of their movie night, as he was the one to give them permission to go out and buy some snack. He sighs, pinching the bridge of his nose. "If you start showing up to class tired because of those movie nights, I won't allow them anymore," their tired teacher says. Most of the class straighten up at the threat. Aizawa looks at a few students, but his gaze lingers on Izuku. Izuku feels his face flush and breaks the eye contact, embarrassed that his teacher had seen through him so quickly. Normally, he wasn't one of the students to be tired in the morning. On the contrary, he often was very energetic. Still, he feels a bit relieved to see he wasn't the only one who'd had trouble sleeping. Classes are uneventful after this. During English, Izuku finds himself distracted most of the time, and as a result, has a hard time keeping up with the notes. He reminds himself to borrow Uraraka or Todoroki's notes later today. Time seems to go by slower, but eventually lunchtime comes around. Izuku is seated at his usual table and quickly eats his bowl of katsudon. Uraraka and Ida are talking about some homeworks they have, but Izuku doesn't really listen. He can feel Todoroki's gaze lingering on him from time to time, and it doesn't take long for the other two to notice. Ida is the first to voice his concerns. "Are you feeling all right, Midoriya?" Izuku looks up to see his friend's troubled expression and feels guilt building up in his throat. He doesn't want his friends to worry over him like that, but he knows he would do the same for them, so he can't really blame them. Uraraka must have known what he was thinking because she was the next one to speak up. "We're here for you, Deku-kun. You can talk to us, you know." She shoots him a reassuring smile. Izuku starts waving his hands in front of his face dismissingly. "And nothing's wrong, I promise," he says. "I just had trouble sleeping last night. Sorry for worrying you all. I wouldn't want to be a bother to you guys over something so small." He trails off. "You're not a bother," Todoroki replies bluntly, as if it were a fact, something that wasn't questionable. Izuku wants to argue, but he decides against it. "I know, it's just," he looks down at his empty bowl. "It's all right. I'm all right." They don't ask him any more questions after that, and Izuku is grateful for that. He doesn't have the energy to explain himself again. In Midnight's Modern Hero Art History class, Izuku finishes his work early. He crosses his arms on his desk and rests his face on them. If he could only get a few minutes of sleep, he'd be happy. He closes his eyes, expecting sleep to find him almost instantly with how tired he feels. But it doesn't. He jumps when he feels a hand land on his shoulder. The hand quickly retreats, and he looks up to see Uraraka looking at him with that same worried look she had worn earlier. Izuku was starting to feel a bit irritated with his friend's persistent behavior. Did they think Izuku couldn't care for himself? Could they stop being so? "Sorry, the day is about to be over, so I thought I'd wake you up." She sounded apologetic, obviously having noticed how tired he looked today. "Oh, I wasn't sleeping, don't worry about it," he says as he starts gathering his things and putting them in his backpack. Now he feels bad for being annoyed with her. He knows Uraraka is just looking after him. Not only is Izuku very tired, he is also very hungry. As he makes his way back to the dorms, his stomach rumbles. When he and his classmates finally arrive, Izuku goes straight to the kitchen to grab himself some food. It's not even dinner yet, he knows this, but the lack of sleep is catching up to him and he doesn't want to fall asleep on an empty stomach. He settles on an energy bar UA is providing. As Izuku eats without even taking the time to sit down, Shiro and Kirishima see him and remind him not to eat too much before dinner. He nods and keeps on chewing. The effect of the snack is almost instantaneous. His legs feel lighter, and it's easier to keep his eyelids open. This is the most energy he's had today. He suddenly feels stupid for not having thought of taking this earlier. He finishes eating and decides he would work on his homeworks and finish taking the notes he missed today. He enters the elevator and heads for the second floor. It doesn't take very long before he exits and goes straight to his room. Although Izuku feels more energized now, he can't quite stay focused. The bar has its limit of just how much it can help him. All he can think about is sleep. This kept interrupting his attention as he tries to work on assignments. He couldn't remember simple material, and there was a fog clouding his head. At some point, he closes his books in frustration. He can't think. He can't focus. He can't get anything done. He runs a hand down his face and leans back in his chair. He finally lets all those thoughts he's been ignoring for the past hour flood his mind. For how long have I been awake? He thinks. Izuku has never been good at staying up late. Never managed to pull an all-nighter all the way until the end. So in a way, he's surprised he hasn't slept at all last night. And during class today, he doesn't know exactly what had caused this. Maybe it was the food, or the snack he bought, or maybe all the stress about UA and One for All was finally catching up to him. He wasn't sure. He takes out his calculator, not trusting his brain to do basic math, and counts how many hours have passed since he'd woken up on Sunday. He had gotten up at 7 a.m. yesterday, and now it was around 6 p.m. Izuku has been awake for the past 35 hours. There's a knock on his door. Midoriya, dinner is ready. Ada spoke loudly, and Izuku could almost see him doing the chopping motion with his arms behind the door. The thought made him smile. I'll be there soon, he assured. The energy bar had been enough to keep him awake and nourished, but his stomach still had an unfamiliar emptiness for which food couldn't fill. He hopes he will be able to sleep soon. When Izuku sits down, he puts his arm on the table for support. His friends look at each other and then at him, clearly alarmed by his state, but he shoots them a smile, again, as to not make them worry. He listens to people talk. He even adds a few comments here and there to show he was listening. As he eats, his eyelids keep becoming heavier. He's constantly blinking to stay awake, but it's proving to be difficult. He doesn't fall asleep, though he certainly wouldn't mind. But after some time he starts having trouble following the conversation. Izuku doesn't remember when he closed his eyes, nor what he and his classmates were talking about. Ria.mid.ri. His body jerks abruptly and he lifts his head up only to be greeted by hushed voices, disturbed looks and a few snorts. Midoriya. Kaminari looks at him with an amused yet friendly face, the corner of his mouth turning up. Are you impatient to go to sleep? Izuku feels his face heat up and he looks away in embarrassment. He swallows. You have no idea. A few chuckled erupt at the table, easing his anxious friends. You gave us quite a scare, Midoriya, Asui says. We called out to you, but you weren't responding. She trails off. He gives her a sheepish look and apologizes before turning back to his food. He's a bit confused, to say the least. One moment he was looking at his friends, and the next everyone was looking at him. It had happened so fast, he'd only had enough time to blink. It probably didn't last more than a few seconds, but it was still unnerving. People start getting up to wash the dishes, and soon after Izuku joins in to help. He keeps yawning and his steps are clumsy. He often misses his classmates calling out to him and jumps when they put their hands on his shoulder to get his attention. He is tired, exhausted. Izuku enters his room. He changes out of his uniform but doesn't bother putting it away, instead leaving it on the floor. His head hurts and his limbs are heavy. Almost as heavy as when he trains to gain control on his quirk. He thinks if he sleeps he will feel better, and he's right. So that's what he does. He lies down on his bed and closes his eyes and sleeps. Well, he tries to. He really wants to sleep, but there's something stopping him from getting the rest he needs. Izuku doesn't know what to do. He's angry because he needs this sleep but can't get it. He's been looking forward to this all day. It doesn't take long for his annoyance to turn into sadness, and then despair. Will he ever be able to sleep? He'll do anything at this point, even if it's just for a few minutes. Izuku sits up in his bed tonight again, but this time he decides to get up and head for the bathroom. He goes barefoot, too out of it to even think about putting his slippers on. He almost collapses in the elevator, his legs trembling from the effort of standing up. His mind might not be able to sleep, but that doesn't make his body any more awake. Finally, he makes it to the boys' bathroom. His steps are slow and sluggish, but once he reaches the sinks, he grips the counter and lifts his head up to get a better look at himself. The bright fluorescent light makes him look sick, giving his skin a greenish color, though Izuku thinks it would look bad under any light. His eye bags have darkened and his eyes are bloodshot. His face is sweaty and hot. It's so sudden, Izuku doesn't even know when he starts crying. At first, it's just tears. But that's all it takes for Izuku to start sobbing. The flashing lights turn a different shade of green and it only serves for Izuku to shed more tears. The room starts spinning, and now it's not just green he sees, it's also blues and pinks, and it's too much. Izuku feels nauseous. He wants to sleep. Now he's on the floor, miserable. His mind is too tired to think properly. Izuku doesn't register the sound of footsteps down the hall, nor the creaking of door opening. He's too preoccupied catching his breath in between quiet sobs. The smell of burnt sugar is easier to make out now, but Izuku doesn't react, not fully alert of his surroundings. Someone behind him speaks up. It's soft, strangely so, and quiet, but Izuku catches it anyways. Deku. Izuku is on the floor, and his breath catches in his throat. He turns to look at the person who just entered the bathroom and the action makes him lightheaded. The lights are still flickering, and the room is spinning. Even so, he would recognize that figure anywhere. Keikaken, he says, just barely above a whisper. He knows someone is there, and that this someone is Kaken of all people, watching him, yet his eyes keep shedding tears. Neither of them say anything. A heavy silence settling between the two. Izuku never thought silence could be so loud. His head throbs and he winces. At this, Katsuki takes a step his way but stops abruptly when Izuku jerks backwards, his back hitting the cabinet behind him in the process. They both continue to stare at each other for a moment before the blonde finally speaks. Deku, what the fuck? It's almost indistinguishable from his usual tone, but Izuku doesn't miss the way his voice is shaking a bit. It takes him by surprise to see his childhood friend look so distraught over this. Izuku grabs for the counter to help himself up while maintaining his gaze. Kaken, he says again. He thinks he must look pathetic. He doesn't know what else to say. Help me, Kaken. Go away. His mouth stays open, as if it were stuck like this, just gaping. Kaken, he repeats, but now he sounds desperate, because he is. I think I'm dying. Tears start gathering in the corner of his eyes again. And Izuku is almost angry at himself because heroes don't cry. Katsuki's eyes widen, and his posture stiffen, but he doesn't move an inch, as if he were frozen in place. He looks over Izuku, searching for something. He probably doesn't find what he's looking for because after a little while he frowns. Izuku hears him click his tongue. You're not dying. He sounds upset, and maybe worried. It's hard to tell. Izuku doesn't think he's ever seen Katsuki worried before. Not over him, but he thinks if he were it would look like this. What the fuck happened? Izuku would like to know, too. I don't Kaken. It's not he can't manage to form a proper sentence. What is there to say? You don't understand, he breathes out. The fuck I don't. You're not telling me shit. Katsuki takes another step forward and crouches down a few feet in front of Izuku. He doesn't say anything, which annoys Izuku a little because he doesn't like the silence. Now that he's closer, Izuku notices the lights aren't flashing as much. Instead, they're back to their original glow. I can't sleep, he says softly, scared for a moment Katsuki didn't hear him. But he must have because the blonde scoffs. Yeah, no shit. It's not funny, yet Izuku lets out a small laugh. He sounds tired. No, Kaken, he says in a hushed tone, as though someone was eavesdropping on them. I can't sleep. Izuku repeats, but now he sounds more anxious. He doesn't feel like he needs to hide this from Katsuki. He doesn't try to reassure him or tell him he's fine. Maybe it's the lack of sleep. Maybe it's always been like this. Izuku isn't sure. That's what's got you looking like shit. Katsuki answers like he doesn't quite believe it. Yes, Izuku wants to say, but he knows it won't be enough to make the blonde understand. I tried, but it's been 2 days now and I don't know what to do and I can't think. I can't do anything and Kaken can't either. He's frantic now, his breaths are coming out ragged. Fuck. Kaken lifts his hands toward Izuku but stops himself halfway there. 2 days you said. Izuku nods. All right. Okay, shit. Katsuki seems to be thinking for a moment before his face contorts into something sour. I know you're not gonna like this, but you need to tell Aizawa. Izuku opens his mouth to disagree, but Katsuki interrupts him before he can. This is serious. Shit, Deku. Katsuki continues. If you don't tell him, I'll do it. No, Izuku cries out. No, Kaken, you can't tell him. Both him and Katsuki look taken aback by his sudden outburst. He grabs Katsuki's arms as though he feared he might run out of the bathroom if he let go. Izuku trusts Aizawa, he really does. But he's also terrified that this fragile trust might be broken if he's not careful enough. He doesn't know what Aizawa might say or do, maybe expel him for being so troublesome. He doesn't want to find out. Please. He tightens his grip on Katsuki and holds his breath. His childhood friend looks at him with a wince. He turns his head in thought and lets out a frustrated sigh. All right. Izuku feels relief instantly. But if you don't sleep tonight either, he continues, you have to go see him tomorrow, or I'll bring you myself. Izuku doesn't try to argue. He thinks it's fair. He's made Katsuki worry enough. It's the least he can do. Okay is all Izuku says. He lets go of Katsuki. Okay, Katsuki says, too, because there isn't much else to say. The blonde starts rising to his feet. For a moment, Izuku thinks he's going to leave him there, go back to his room. It must be late by now. It would be understandable. Instead, Katsuki heads for one of the sinks and opens the cabinet behind one of the mirrors. There are a few clacking sounds of bottles knocking against each other. Izuku gets to his feet as well, curious about what the other is looking for. Katsuki closes the cabinet and turns to look at Izuku. Here, he puts a pill bottle in Izuku's hand. Sometimes I can't sleep, because of everything. Katsuki trails off. His eyes seem distant, looking at something that isn't there. Izuku can understand. They've all had their fair share of bad moments during the last few months. Katsuki the most. He had been kidnapped, but he seemed fine. Izuku had never really thought much of it. Kaken is amazing after all. But looking at him now, Izuku finds himself stupid for having overlooked this. How had no one seen this before? Was he the only one to have failed to notice? What is it? Izuku takes the bottle. Although he already has a pretty good idea of what it is, he wants to make sure he isn't mistaken. Fog still clouds his brain, making it hard to think properly. They're sleeping pills, Katsuki explains. 2 should be able to knock you out for the rest of the night. Usually you'd need to take them earlier so you can wake up on time. But that doesn't matter now. Izuku's eyes widen. Is that why you go to sleep so early? He'd never thought about this before, but it makes sense. If Katsuki uses strong sleeping pills and wakes up early in the morning, he has to go to bed before everyone else. Yeah, he scowls. Don't tell the idiots. I'll kill you. Izuku smiles despite the situation. Katsuki has grown a lot, but some things will probably always stay the same. Izuku doesn't mind. They both walk back to the elevator, clicking on the button for second floor. Izuku is glad, so much he almost wants to cry. He'll be able to sleep, he's sure. Katsuki walks him all the way to the door of Izuku's room. Just as Katsuki turns to leave, the greenette lifts the pill bottle. Wait, won't you need it? He asks. Katsuki looks at him and scoffs. Keep it for now, I can do just fine without it. Izuku thinks he should thank Katsuki tomorrow as he enters his bedroom. He's worn out, and sleep is all he can think about. He struggles to open the cap of the bottle, his hands shaking. Katsuki had said to take 2. He reminds himself, so that's what he does. He sits on his bed and puts the bottle on his nightstand, not bothering to close it. Luckily for him, he always keeps a glass of water close. He swallows both pills so fast he almost chokes, but he can't wait anymore. He lies down on top of his comforter and waits for the pills to take effect. His eyes are heavy. His whole body is. A few minutes have passed already, and Izuku still doesn't fall asleep. He's aware he should be asleep by now. And although his eyelids are closed, he knows this is not sleep. Sleeping doesn't feel like waiting. Izuku is hopeless. He was so sure this would work, he shouldn't have gotten his hopes up. 2 days it's been now, and despite the fact that it might not sound like a lot, Izuku has never gone so long without sleep. His body is constantly demanding that he rests, but his mind won't listen. He turns so he's on his side, facing the alarm clock on his bedside table. He watches as the minutes go by. Sometimes he blinks, and 2 minutes have passed. Izuku doesn't think much of it. After an hour, Izuku reaches for the bottle of pills that had been left open and takes another one. Maybe he just needs more. What other options were left at this point? He swallows the pill dry, which he regrets a moment later when it gets stuck in his throat and makes him cough. He rests his head on his pillow. He doesn't think about anything. His head mostly feels empty and tired. He tosses and turns, waits for something, anything, to happen. Izuku feels something or someone touch his shoulder, shaking him awake. He sits up, alert but also confused. His curtains are open, letting the moonlight flood his room. Izuku doesn't dare move, but he stays alert. He skims over the place searching for a potential intruder. He doesn't find anyone. He tries to convince himself he must have imagined it. It's way past 2 a.m. now, but Izuku wants to believe he can still get a few hours of sleep if he falls asleep soon. Very soon, preferably. So he closes his eyes, like he's done so many times today, except this time he squeezes them shut. The ghost keeps brushing against him. It's so uncomfortable, it makes him shudder. It feels real, but Izuku doesn't really know what is and what isn't anymore. Despite everything, Izuku keeps his eyes closed. What a long night this will be. Izuku brushes his teeth with a few other people beside him. He's standing in front of the same sink he was at when Katsuki found him last night. It might as well be his sink at this point. In the end, the pills hadn't worked. His body feels weary, and he doesn't bother brushing his hair, making him look like even more of a mess. His eye bags had worsened again, so much they could rival Shinsu's. When the sun had started rising up, Izuku had stayed in bed. He was still desperately hoping to get even just a few minutes of sleep, which was irrational, but Izuku didn't care. He hadn't joined Todoroki on their usual morning jog. And although he feels bad about it, the thought of exercising today makes him sick. He's going to be a hero, damn it. Yet here he is, having trouble standing on his feet. He gets a few concerned stares from his classmates. Some look like they want to say something, but everyone stays quiet. Izuku starts making his way toward the common room where he's left his things. He's halfway down the hall when suddenly he finds himself standing in front of the main door. When did he get there? His backpack is on his back. It wasn't a moment ago. How much time has passed? Surely it can't have been much more than a minute. It's maddening. Izuku thinks it happened yesterday during dinner and multiple times last night, but he hadn't really done anything during those times compared to now. His body had moved on its own, and he has no memory of it. Midoriya, Izuku hears Asui say behind him. He turns and sees Uraraka standing beside her. Are you headed for class, too? She asks, holding one finger to her chin and tilting her head slightly. It takes him a moment to realize he's supposed to answer, and he catches the confused looks his friends give him. Why, yes, I am. They don't ask if he's all right. The answer is already clear enough. Izuku can tell they're trying their best to hold back their questions, and he's thankful for that. The three of them walk toward the main building, the morning breeze cold against their skin. It's been over 48 hours since he last slept. Izuku really wants to sleep. During homeroom, Aizawa announces they'll be going to Gym Gamma today. Izuku almost starts crying right there on the spot. He's conscious of every little action he does, holding his pencil, standing, turning his head. It's all exhausting. He doesn't want to imagine what it'll be like to train. Izuku grabs his hero costume anyways. He doesn't have much of a choice. He can't slack off now. He takes his time while changing, and soon he's the only one left. Or well, he thinks he is. But when he goes to leave, he sees Todoroki standing behind him. Todoroki, he stammers. The other teen looks surprised, as if he wasn't expecting to be seen. Izuku stops in his tracks. What are you doing here? He knows his friend is probably just worried. Izuku never missed their morning run. Midoriya, you don't. Todoroki stops, as though he were looking to find the right words, which he probably was. Have you been sleeping? He frowns, a bit like when someone makes a joke he doesn't quite understand, leaving him lost. Izuku looks down. He doesn't want to answer his friend. Doing so would mean admitting there was a problem. He knows this isn't all right, but he can't bring himself to say it out loud. Midoriya, you can't keep. I'm all right. Izuku cuts him off. He's not sure whether he says this to reassure the other, or to convince himself. You can't expect me to believe that. In this moment, Todoroki looks desperate. Midoriya, he says again, but with more emphasis. Listen, we can help you if only you'd let us. Izuku purses his lips. Todoroki, Kaken, anyone they can't help him. No one can. Don't they understand? There is no we, there is only him. Izuku pushes past him. We're going to be late, is all he says. Todoroki falls into step beside him, and, thankfully, drops the subject, though reluctantly. They both stay silent until they reach the gym, where their friends are waiting for them. All right, Aizawa says, now that everyone's here, we can begin. He looks at Todoroki and Izuku with an accusing look but maintains his gaze on the latter for a moment longer. It's barely noticeable. Izuku almost misses it, but Aizawa has a worried look in his eyes before looking away. You'll be doing an obstacle course, their teacher starts. There are a few disappointed sighs, and Izuku can relate with them. I'll be timing you, meaning this is a speed test. As heroes, you are expected to get to the scene as fast as possible. Lives will be on the line. There's no place for excuses, so take this training seriously. They go in batches, and soon enough it's Izuku's turn. The parkour is simple enough. They begin on a running track, make a few jumps and end with climbing a wall. He clenches his hands to stop them from shaking. He gets ready, crouches a bit because the first thing he needs to do is sprint. He thinks if he can get this done quickly enough, he'll be fine. Aizawa gives them the signal to start. Izuku tries to activate one for all, but nothing happens. He starts running anyways, his classmates already in front of him. His legs throb, but he ignores it. He tries to grab a spark of his quirk, even the tiniest bit, but there's nothing. It scares Izuku, but he has other worries at the moment. He knows his teacher, and probably a few people too, must have noticed he wasn't using his quirk. Izuku doesn't have much time to think about it though because now he has to jump. The closer he gets, the more he realizes how much he's underestimated just how big the leaps would be. If he slows down even just a little, he'll fall in the cracks separating each cement blocks. So he gathers what force is left in him and jumps. His legs almost buckle under him, but he pushes past the fatigue, runs as much as he can on the small platform and springs onto the next one. There are only 2 jumps left, but he's already starting to slow down. All these months he's spent training turning out to be useless in Izuku's sleep-deprived state. He jumps again, and he feels relieved there's only one left to go. He steps once, twice, and as he goes to leap something doesn't go quite right. He doesn't have time to stop. He almost falls in the space between the last platform and the ground leading to the climbing wall, but at the last second his chest hits the side of the crack. He tries to lift himself up with his arms. He's not high enough from the floor that he could die, but certainly high enough that it wouldn't be pleasant. He doesn't lose time, and soon enough he's on the ground crouching, one knee touching the floor. He's out of breath, but he won't give up now. He gets to his feet and continues running. He lifts his head, and his gaze meets his teacher's. There's no way he hasn't seen Izuku's fall. It's likely his entire class saw it. He pushes the thought away. He grabs the first climbing hold and proceeds to make his way up. His grip is weak, but he can't find any more strength in him. His entire body is sweaty, it's uncomfortable. Izuku's will isn't enough anymore. He's used everything that was left in him. He's panting now, and he has slowed down considerably. The climbing wall must be about 40 feet tall. He's midway to the top, which seems impossibly far to him. Izuku thinks he sees Aizawa and a few of his friends looking at him from up there. As he reaches for a higher climbing hold, his other hand slips. He doesn't have time to grab onto anything. He doesn't try to. He wanted to be done with this, so in a way this works, too. Izuku supposes he'll be able to sleep in a moment. Everything is slow. He thinks he hears someone shout his name, but he doesn't pay much attention to the world around him. He lets himself fall. Something wraps around Izuku's waist, knocking the breath out of him. He isn't asleep, but not quite awake either. This is the closest to sleeping he's managed to get for the past 2 days. He was so close. There's movement around him and voices that sound familiar, but he can't tell who they belong to. Someone's calling to him, he realizes. Replying would require energy, which Izuku currently doesn't have. He's on the ground now, the concrete cold against his exposed skin. His position is uncomfortable, but he can't move much. Izuku's ears are filled with static as he opens his eyes slightly and winces at the bright light. Slowly, just as things start to clear, he can make out his teacher hunching over him. Midoriya, Aizawa says, "Are you with us?" There's concern hidden behind the soft look his teacher is giving him. Izuku doesn't respond right away, his brain taking a while to process everything. He licks his lips, finding them to be dry. What happened? Izuku's words come out ragged, but he doesn't pay it much mind. He tries to sit up, but a hand on his shoulder keeps him in place. It's then he notices the thing wrapped around his waist is his teacher's capture weapon. "You slipped." Aizawa doesn't elaborate further. The teen thinks it's fair. He remembers falling and not trying to grab onto something. The thought makes him grimace. "We're going to get you to recovery, girl." At this, Izuku tries to protest. "I am fine, Aizawa-sensei." He doesn't know why he says that. Maybe it's out of habit, or maybe he thinks if he says it enough, it might come true. His teacher looks at him with a downcast expression, clearly not believing what Izuku just said. "I'll go with him." He turns his head slightly to see Katsuki standing a few feet away from him. Izuku knows his childhood friend well enough to be able to tell he's not asking. Aizawa must notice too, but he just hums in response. Some time passes before a pair of mini transport robots arrive. He's placed on a stretcher and then lifted by the machines. Izuku isn't aware of his surroundings much as he's being moved outside the gym, but the sound of footsteps makes him think Aizawa and Katsuki are following close behind. Soon enough, they arrive at Recovery Girl's nurse's office. Izuku feels bad he's wasting everyone's time like that. He just needs sleeps, really. And they can't give that to him, so what's the point? The elderly woman sighs as he's placed on one of the beds. What did he get himself into this time? She looks at Izuku, but he knows the question isn't directed at him. "He slipped from the climbing wall and became unresponsive after I caught him." Aizawa answers for him. Izuku finds himself stupid. He was so close to finishing the Parker, but his lack of sleep had rendered him useless. They wouldn't be here now if he had been strong enough. Recovery Girl hums and proceeds to examine him. While she looks over him, Izuku realizes he doesn't know what the tests she makes him pass actually do. He doesn't have time to think about it for too long before the woman is done. "Do you sleep well, dearie?" she asks. Izuku's gaze meets Katsuki's from the corner of his eye and is met with an encouraging look. He hadn't thought about it before, but Katsuki is the only one who knows Izuku hasn't been sleeping at all. He had promised Katsuki he would tell Aizawa if he couldn't fall asleep for another night, which is exactly what happened. Now he regrets it, because in the end, the pills hadn't worked. He still hadn't slept. He's scared his childhood friend will expose him if he doesn't tell someone. "I am well, and not really," he stammers out. The woman nods while writing something down. "And do you take any medications?" "And no, I don't, not usually, at least." Izuku replies, just yesterday. I'm not as sure what." He looks at Katsuki, not sure what he should say. "Melatonin. I gave him some yesterday," the blonde says. Aizawa arches an eyebrow at that. Katsuki doesn't take his eyes off of him though, as if he were waiting for Izuku to say something. "Had you ever taken melatonin before yesterday?" Recovery Girl asks. "No," the teen replies. She hums again. "I see," she says. "Do you remember how much you've taken?" Katsuki had said to take 2, but Izuku remembers taking another one and feeling his body become terribly heavy. "T3. They're the 5 milligram ones," Katsuki clarifies. The greenette doesn't know if it's a lot, but he thinks it is because the woman's eyes widen. "Oh dear, and you've had trouble falling asleep after that?" She puts her notepad on her desk. When Izuku nods, she turns to look at Aizawa. "This is very unusual. I've never seen anything quite like it." The man frowns. "Midoriya." The teen looks up at the mention of his name. "How long has this been going on for?" He looks away, and not very long. "Bullshit." Everyone in the room turns their heads to look at Katsuki, surprised by his harsh language, though they really should be used to it by now. He looks a bit angry or worried. Maybe both. It's hard to tell. Izuku bites his lower lip. He tilts his head up to look at the clock hung up on the wall in front of him. 10:23, it reads. Katsuki opens his mouth to say something when Izuku speaks. Around 51 hours. It hits him then, just how tired he really is. Tears start to well up in his eyes. He had felt exhaustion wash over his body, but he hadn't really understood. "Sensei," his voice cracks, "I'm so tired." No one speaks. The air is heavy, and the only thing breaking the silence is Izuku's small hiccups. He can't bear to look at his teacher, or anyone really. He had gone against powerful villains, had broken himself beyond repair at multiple occasions, but never before had he felt so defeated. Aizawa comes closer to him and crouches to look at Izuku while grabbing the side of the bed. Midoriya, he says softly, this isn't your fault. This only makes the teen want to cry even more. He tries and fails to choke his tears back. Because of course it's Izuku's fault. Who else could be to blame for his incapacity to sleep? We're going to help you, Aizawa continues, his tone calm. Izuku turns his head abruptly to face the man. I'm going to die like this, aren't I? He asks barely above a whisper. He had imagined his death 1,000 times before, an unhealthy habit he never bothered to try and get rid of. He figured if he was going to be a pro hero someday, he would need to make peace with the fact he would probably die at a young age. But that's the thing. There is no way to prepare for death. Most of the time, it's unexpected and insignificant. He would be lying if he said he hadn't thought his death would be more meaningful though, saving the world, or even just a single life, making a difference. Aizawa gives him a serious look. No problem, child. There's something kind in his voice. You're not going to die. Not anytime soon. He says with such certainty Izuku almost believes him. I think a quirk might be causing this. I have to make a few calls, but I'll be fast. He explains. Izuku bites his lip and nods. His teacher gets to his feet and turns to the other people in the room. Shio, see if you can do anything. And Bakugo, he stops and considers the student for a moment. Stay with him. You're excused from class for the rest of the day. Don't get used to it. As Aizawa goes to grab the doorknob, Izuku speaks up. Sensei, I'm sorry. He's been taking so much of everyone's time. He thinks it's only reasonable he apologizes. Apologies refused. He replies without hesitation. His answer takes Izuku aback. But there is no anger in the statement, which makes him relax a bit. I'll be back soon. The hallway is quiet except for the rushed footsteps of Shouta. He takes his phone out and presses on one of the few contacts he has saved on his device. The Racerhead. The man sounds surprised on the other end. Tsukachi, he replies, a hint of urgency in his voice. Something came up and I need you to look through some files for me. The detective doesn't lose time. The sound of paper ruffling and a pen clicking on the other end. All right, I'm gonna need you to be a little more specific than that. One of my students hasn't been able to sleep for over 2 days, and he doesn't know why. He explains, I suspect a quirk might be to blame for this. 2 days, you say. Okay, I'll see what I can do, but don't get your hopes up. Shouta lets out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. He's worked enough time with the man to know he'll at least find something they can work with. Thanks, I owe you one, he responds. Sure, can you give me your student's name? I'll probably need it. Right, sorry, Shouta says as he opens the doors of the school's main building. It's Midoriya Izuku. That kid again. Damn, Tsukachi mumbles. At that, the pro hero scoffs, because of course the detective would already have met the problem child before. Maybe even more than once. Shouta reaches his car. Yeah, I'm on my way right now. I'll see you in 10. The man on the other line chuckles. I should have expected it. All right, see you soon. After hanging up, the man sends a quick text to Nedzu to inform him he wouldn't be there for the rest of the day and drives off. Recovery hadn't been able to do much in the end, giving Izuku a few gummies and telling him to do as little as possible. Now there's only Katsuki and him left in the room. There's a silence sitting between them, and Izuku doesn't know if he should break it or stay quiet. He doesn't think it's awkward, but maybe Katsuki does. Sometimes he looks up and is met by ruby eyes staring at him. Izuku opens his mouth to speak, unsure what to say, but is cut off before he can even get a single word out. Stop that, Katsuki says. What? He asks, genuinely confused. His childhood friend clicks his tongue. I can leave if you don't want me here, he answers. I didn't leave you with much of a choice to begin with. Izuku shakes his hand in front of his face. No. It's not like that. I thought maybe Kaken-D didn't want to be here. Huh? The fuck I wouldn't want to be here. The blonde questions. Izuku hadn't expected him to say that, but he feels relieved a bit. He smiles softly. The conversation is easier now. They talk about ordinary things. Izuku tells him how Ida and Uraraka got into an argument not too long ago about white chocolate, and how Asui had unexpectedly joined in eventually. Katsuki mentions how sometimes he and the idiots, as he calls them, help Kirishima dye his hair. It's weird how easy it is to talk to his childhood friend now. Izuku thinks it's nice. A few months ago, he would have never thought he could have a decent conversation with the other teen. Silence settles between them again at some point, but now it's comfortable. Kaken, he says in a soft voice. The blonde hums. He's scrolling on his phone, but the greenette knows he's paying attention. Izuku swallows. My quirk. His childhood friend lifts his head to look at him. He knows this is important. If something were to happen to me, Izuku turns to face Katsuki. I want you to have it. Katsuki just stares at him. His expression is hard to read, and Izuku had expected an immediate response. Why, you don't have to. It's just I. There isn't anyone else who, you know. No, Izuku goes to speak but the blonde interrupts him. I won't take it, and neither will some random extra. Izuku frowns, unsure what the other is trying to say. I won't, he continues, because you'll need it for when you're stuck being the number 2 hero. Under different circumstances, Izuku might smile or laugh. But right now, there's no way for him to know if he'll die tomorrow or the day after. He's often heard people compare sleep to death, a long slumber, but it's staying awake that's killing him. Kaken, he answers. It's just in case. Please, why you have to promise me? He finishes his sentence in a whisper. Deku, I'm not. There's a soft knock on the door, cutting him off. Katsuki gets up to open the door, relief clear in his eyes that their conversation was interrupted. Izuku catches sight of red and white. Half and half. The fuck are you doing here? The blonde asks. Todoroki looks past him, and his eyes widen a fraction at the sight of Izuku. I want to see Midoriya. Katsuki clicks his tongue and looks back at the figure sitting up on the bed. He moves to the side to let the other teen walk in the room. None of them talk, which quickly becomes awkward. A few moments pass before his childhood friend understands Todoroki had wanted to see him alone. It's almost lunch. I'll go grab some food. Don't do any stupid shit while I'm gone, he says. Katsuki closes the door behind him, and the two are left alone in the room. Todoroki, what are you doing here? Izuku asks, unsure what else to say. Todoroki frowns. I wanted to see you, he repeats again, as if the answer was already very clear. Izuku remembers the last time he talked with him today, and suddenly he feels bad. Even if the teen won't say it, Izuku knows his friend has probably been really worried about him all day. He had even tried to help him. Todoroki clenches his fists, a habit Izuku noticed he did when he was upset. Back there, at the gym, he says, I watched you fall, and I just stood there. Izuku hadn't realized before just how much his state had affected his friends. He had brushed them off, hadn't wanted their help. He purses his lips. After we talked in the changing room, Todoroki licks his lips. I knew I should probably tell Aizawa that you weren't well, but I was afraid that if I did you wouldn't. He stops himself, as if scared to continue. I thought you wouldn't want to be my friend anymore. Izuku wants to say something, but he knows his friend isn't finished. It wouldn't be fair. He knows Todoroki needs this. This is the most emotion he's seen his friend express since the sports festival, and it makes his heart clench. I couldn't afford to lose my only friend, he says in a whisper, but now I feel selfish, because maybe I could have helped you sooner. Izuku had been his very first friend, but he didn't know if Todoroki really considered anyone else in their class his friend, even if they saw him that way. There's no undoing what he's done now, but Izuku still wants to try and fix things. I am sorry, too, he replies. I didn't consider your feelings, and it wasn't right of me. He sighs and does what he should have done a while ago, which is explain the situation to his friend, even if it'll make him worry, because he deserves to know. I couldn't sleep yesterday or the day before. They think it might be a quirk, but I want to sleep, but I can't. He slumps forward and presses his palms on his eyes to stop himself from crying again. I don't think there's a solution. Todoroki draws a sharp breath. There has to be, he declares. There always is. Izuku is scared of dying because he knows if he does, it'll be alone, before any of his friends, without anyone to go with him. So he lets himself believe what everyone has been telling him, that he won't die. It's irrational, he thinks, but Izuku doesn't care. He went against much worse. He reminds himself. He decides he will survive this, too. And after that, Izuku will sleep, as Katsuki makes his way to the cafeteria. He replays the conversation he had with Deku in his head, and everything before that. It's painful, watching someone who needs help and not being able to do anything. Deku had told him of all people about being tired and dying, but Katsuki had kept his mouth shut. When the USJ happened, Katsuki started having a hard time falling asleep. He searched for a solution online and found taking melatonin supplements was the best place to start. He had heard about it before, but he had never needed to take any. He took them sometimes at first, but then he started taking them more often, in higher doses, and soon enough he was taking them every night. It was after he was kidnapped by the League of Villains that he started having nightmares. He would wake up in the middle of the night and at waking hours, gasping for air. Sometimes he didn't even notice he was crying before he put his face in his hands and he'd feel the tears. When the school put in place the dorm system, Aizawa had talked him into going to therapy. At first, he wasn't too keen on the idea, but his recurring bad dreams and thoughts had been enough to get him to give it a try. Here, he puts a pill bottle in Izuku's hand. Sometimes I can't sleep because of everything. Katsuki thought it was stupid in the beginning, but the more he went, the more he started to open up. Eventually, he mentioned his struggle about sleep to his therapist, and she suggested he tries a more specific kind of medication for PTSD or some shit called prazosin. They're sleeping pills. Katsuki explains. 2 should be able to knock you out for the rest of the night. Usually, you need to take them earlier so you can wake up on time. But that doesn't matter now. He had been surprised to see Deku lying on bathroom floor. When the other teen broke down and cried about being so tired and unable to sleep, Katsuki had felt relief. Everyone was acting like everything was fine, but it wasn't, still isn't. And now that he knew he wasn't the only one feeling like this, it made him feel less alone. Melatonin. I gave him some yesterday, the blonde says. Aizawa arches an eyebrow at that. Katsuki hadn't given Deku melatonin. He had given him his prazosin. His teacher was aware of his medication. It was Aizawa who had offered to go get his refill when he was close to running out. When the other teen had cried for him not to tell anyone, he had recognized himself in those defeated eyes, even if it hurt to admit. Maybe that's why he had lied about giving Deku melatonin. As much as he trusted Aizawa, he was scared the man might take the pills away from him for being irresponsible. It was such an irrational thought, but it didn't shake the feeling away. Katsuki didn't want to go back to having nightmares or restless nights. It made him feel so weak. Just as Katsuki turns to leave, the greenette lifts the pill bottle. Wait, won't you need it? He asks. Katsuki looks at him and scoffs. Keep it for now, I can do just fine without it. He had been lying when he said he could do fine without the pills, but Deku needed them more than him. Katsuki had tried and failed to help him, because in the end, it didn't change anything at all. It's lunchtime now, but he hasn't eaten anything yet. The hall is mostly empty except for a few people. There are quick footsteps behind him, coming his way. Bakugo. He turns his head and sees Round-Face waving her hand at him. He clicks his tongue and continues walking. He has other things to do. She catches up to him, out of breath. Bakugo, she repeats. The fuck you want? She hesitates a moment before speaking. It's Deku, is he doing all right? Katsuki should have expected something like that. She and Deku were friends, after all. He's fine, he says. Why don't you just go see him yourself? She purses her lips and looks down. I'm not sure. He wants me to. It's none of the blonde's business, but he'd be lying if he said he wasn't intrigued now, or at least curious. He gives her a silent look as if asking her to elaborate. She looks surprised by this. Oh, it's just, she stumbles over her words. He gets all upset when we worry over him, and I know if I go see how he's doing myself, he'll see right through me. She lets out a nervous chuckle. You're his friend, aren't you? His classmate looks taken aback. Of course, why are you? He cuts her off. Then it'd be good for you to know Deku doesn't like to ask for help, he comments, but he needs it. She frowns. Katsuki doesn't like doing all this sappy bullshit about friendship, but he feels like this is important, so just be there for him and trust him. He looks right in front of him, and when he turns his head slightly, he sees the stunned look on her face. She slows down, and then she says with a determined voice, I will. The open window beside Izuku's bed lets a soothing breeze fill the air in the room. Izuku doesn't have anything to do. He hadn't brought anything. Even if he had, Izuku's only interest right now is sleeping, which he can't do. So instead, he looks outside, like he's been doing for a while now. His peace is interrupted when Recovery Girl walks in. The teen turns to face her, and she gives him a reassuring smile. Hello dearie, how are you feeling? She asks. I am fine, just tired. Izuku has been saying this a lot lately. He thinks. The elderly woman hums. I'm going to keep you here until we have more information on what exactly might be causing this. The greenette doesn't have the energy to protest. He doesn't mind staying here if that means he doesn't have to move. There is very little we know about the effects of sleep deprivation over a long period of time, so I want to be able to keep an eye on you in case anything serious happens. She continues. Izuku thinks that makes sense, or maybe it doesn't. Everything is fuzzy in his head, and it's hard to keep up with what he's being told. He just nods. A few minutes later, there's a quick knock on the door. The person doesn't wait for an answer before entering. Young Midoriya, the man says, worry evident in his eyes. All might. Izuku hasn't had the chance to talk to his mentor during the last few days, so he's glad to see him. I'll leave you two alone now. Just press the red button on your right if you need me, the woman says as she walks past the blonde man. All Might is the first to speak up. I heard about what happened. Izuku bites his lip. He feels pathetic, helpless to do anything at all. He's also terrified everything he's built for himself will crumble, and everything he has been able to achieve will have been for nothing. He had asked Kaken to take one for all if something were to happen to him, but that doesn't mean he's ready to part from it. It's his quirk now. What if All Might no longer saw any potential in him? Would he ask Izuku to give the quirk back? The thought made him uneasy, making him shift nervously in his bed. I am sorry, he answers, looking away. The retired pro hero frowns. It's not your fault, my boy. Izuku knows All Might is lying. It is his fault. There's no denying that. Why is it always him that gets into trouble? His mentor must be getting tired of it. Of him. I'll do better, I promise, the teen stutters. He's anxious now. He's sure the man regrets giving him one for all. Still, he wants to prove him he's worthy of it. It's too late now. All Might's voice sounds distant, and for a moment Izuku thinks he might have misheard him. He turns his head abruptly, but it's as if his mentor hadn't even said anything, which confuses Izuku. He had expected an angry face or a disappointed expression, but instead he is met with troubled eyes. He doesn't understand. What? I said it was too bad I couldn't be there, but I'm here now. No, Jay, just now you said Izuku's breath are coming out faster, and his ears are ringing. Please, All Might, I'll do anything. He offers, because he's desperate. He starts sitting up, but All Might puts a gentle hand on his arm, pushing him down again. Or maybe it's not gentle at all. Maybe it's forceful, and the man is probably mad at him for something. Young Midoriya, his mentor, was he still Izuku's mentor? Was it already too late to call him that? Says more, but the words coming out of his mouth fall on deaf ears. The teen's head throbs, and he wants to disappear. He tries to fight against the hand holding him in place, but he feels drained of all his energy. He tries to call to One for All, like he had failed to do earlier today. But he hadn't felt so terrified then. Not like now. Izuku shuts his eyes. And the rest happens so fast he doesn't realize what's happening before it's too late. He lifts his left arm and grabs the hand keeping him from moving, activating his quirk. The other person lets out a curse and struggles to get out of the hold. Now that there's power flowing through his member, and no more threat to direct it at, he's not sure what to do with it. He panics, although he already was since a few minutes ago. He still has his quirk, which is good, but Izuku knows he's useless if he doesn't know how to use it. Or in this case, stop using it. He opens his eyelids, his head pounding even harder now at the sound of his own frantic heartbeat filling his ears. He ends up striking something, or multiple things, on his left. He accidentally hits the side of his bed too, making him fall off the bed. Izuku feels disoriented, lost, disconnected from the world, as if he were in a different dimension. He's on the floor now, but he feels like he's floating. He wonders if the body he's in is his. But then he sees the shattered glass scattered across the ground, and he knows he did this. Izuku reaches out to pick up the broken pieces. All Might is standing a few feet away from him. Izuku knows the man is speaking to him, but he doesn't understand a single word. The hero takes a careful step forward, and Izuku flinches. The growing pile of glass resting in his hand is cutting his palm. But it doesn't matter, so he keeps going. I am sorry, he really is. He's been feeling like a burden to everyone in the last 2 days, which doesn't sound like a lot the more he thinks about it. But his heart makes it seem like it's been going on for longer than that. And maybe it has. My boy, it's all right. Now that All Might is closer, it's easier to make out the words. No, it's not. Izuku's voice cracks. Please, I can fix this. He sees now that it's the open window he's broken. He'll probably get into trouble if he doesn't clean it up. Though he probably will, either way. You're hurt, the man adds. There's blood seeping through his finger, tainting the white tiles of the floor. Izuku doesn't think it hurts that much. He doesn't meet the hero's eyes. Why, you can't take back One for All, he declares weakly. His quirk had been the first good thing that ever happened to him. If it were to be taken away from him, Izuku doesn't know what he would become. Is that what you've been thinking? All Might whispers, but the question doesn't seem directed at him. He lifts his hands slowly, as if the teen was some small and scared creature. The thought makes Izuku cringe. He braces himself for whatever might be coming. Maybe the man will get angry or mad. It's your quirk now. I won't try to take it back, he says instead, and Izuku blinks. He hadn't expected that, and for a moment he thinks it might just be a trick to get him to let his guard down. So he doesn't speak, and neither does the hero. Izuku's pounding heart is so loud, he wonders if All Might can hear it. The man seems to think for a moment. He looks at Izuku's bloodied palm and asks, do you want me to leave? And then, I'll call Recovery Girl so she can take a look at your hand. Izuku doesn't really want to be alone, so he shakes his head. All right, I'll stay. The man sits down on the floor with him, exactly where he had been standing. They're silent again, and Izuku is grateful for that. Eventually, he calms down. He feels embarrassed that All Might had seen him like this. The man is his hero, the first to have seen something in him, even before Izuku's own mother. But somehow, seeing the man he's looked up to his entire life, just sitting in front of him and being patient and calm, makes everything feel a little more alright. Shout arrived at the police station 5 minutes after he left the campus, like he had said he would. He opens the door and walks past the front desk, startling the receptionist. The woman gets up from her chair and calls out to him to wait. He stops in his tracks at the same time as Tsukachi opens the door of his office. He's with me, the detective says. She nods and sits back down. Shouta walks in the room and slumps in the chair. Found anything yet? He says, pinching the bridge of his nose. Aizawa, it's been 5 minutes since you've called me. The pro-hero lets out a groan and lets his hand slide down his face. That child is going to be the death of me. Tsukachi ignores him and goes to sit on the other side of the desk. In those 5 minutes I've had, I started trying to find something that might be helpful to us. At this, Shouta looks up, and he raises an eyebrow. The officer shakes his head. I couldn't find anyone reporting feeling unable to sleep, or anything like it, which honestly isn't surprising. People think about a lot of things before considering the cause of their problem might potentially be a quirk. They go see doctors first, or they try to deal with it on their own. Shouta hadn't thought of that before, but now that he does, he realizes he's underestimated just how hard this would be. The detective starts writing something down but then stops and looks up at him, frowning. Have you tried using erasure on him? No, he answers, and even if I did, it wouldn't actually do anything. Erasure stops the quirk genes of the user from functioning temporarily. It doesn't work on cases like Midoriya's, since it's not their quirk gene that's being affected. Shouta explains. He feels pretty useless to the situation right now, just sitting there and not doing anything. What do you suggest we do? He says. First, we need to find out where and when your student could have possibly been hit with a quirk like that. Midoriya had said it had been around 50 hours since he last slept. Doing the math in his head, Shouta figured it was when he had woken up on Sunday morning. Sunday movie nights. He remembers the first time Kaminari and Mina had come to see him in the teacher's room after class ended. Aizawa-sensei, Kaminari said. You're looking extra good today. Mina nodding beside him. Shouta deadpanned. What do you want? He turned back to his computer, already too tired to even begin to imagine what they were about to ask for. Mina cleared her throat. We were, wondering if you'd let us go get some snacks at the convenience store close to the school. They both bowed. Please, will be really quick. Shouta had expected far worse. Maybe that's why he had agreed. But then, they came back every week. And soon it became a tradition for his class to watch movies on Sundays. What an irrational idea. People took turns in going, so that it would be fair. At this point, his students came to get a permission slip and he didn't even bother checking whose turn it was. He just signed the paper and got back to work. I have to check something really quick, Shouta said, taking his phone out and clicking on one of his contacts. He puts it on speaker so that Tsukachi can follow the conversation as well. The phone rings but it doesn't take long before the person picks up. Shouta, what's going on? Hisashi's concerned voice answers. Shouta knows the other pro hero is teaching his English class right now. And if he's correct, it should be with class 1A. Are you teaching my class right now? He asks to make sure. The man on the other end says yes. The underground hero thinks for a moment. Ask them who went to the convenience store on Sunday. Shouta can hear Hisashi asking the question to the teenagers, and farther he thinks he can make out Mina's muffled voice. They say Midoriya went. Tsukachi gets closer to the phone. Do they know when he left? A few seconds later Hisashi answers it was around 7 p.m. Shouta is glad they have some kind of lead, but also wonders how it's always Midoriya who gets himself into this kind of trouble. He thanks his friend and promises to explain more later. Then he hangs up. The detective sits back in his chair and bounces the tip of his pen on the sheet of paper he uses to take notes. We should take a look at the security cameras, if there are any at all, that is. He sighs. This just got a lot more complicated. Shouta lifts an eyebrow. How so? He questions. Do you think it might be something other than a quirk? No, that's the thing, Tsukachi says. I think it was a quirk, but I don't think it was an accident. He puts his elbows on the desk and intertwines his fingers. Shouta turns his head to the side a bit, not quite understanding what the other man might mean by that. The detective gives him a serious look. I think someone planned this. Izuku sits on the side of his bed. Recovery Girl had walked in on him and All Might discussing calmly, sitting on the floor. She had seen the dried blood smeared on his hand and had let out a small gasp. She had scolded the hero for not calling her sooner, and then she had asked him to sit back on the bed so she could take a look at his injury. The woman had wiped all the blood and gently bandaged his palm. When he had asked her why she went out of her way to wrap his hand instead of just using her quirk, she told him that she was scared his body didn't have any energy to spare at the moment. Izuku hadn't thought about it before, but it hit him then, just how much of a disadvantage he is at because of this quirk. Had his teacher not been able to catch him when he had fallen from the climbing wall, Recovery Girl probably wouldn't have been able to help him much. It had felt nice, being cared for like this, more than he would like to admit. Some time had passed before Katsuki came back with food for Izuku. It was katsudon he had brought, which made the greenette hearts warm a little. Katsuki had looked at his damaged hand, but hadn't asked any question. He had ended up going back to class after All Might reassured him he would stay with Izuku. The broken glass is still scattered across the floor, but Recovery Girl hasn't said anything about it yet. All Might is sitting on a plastic chair across from Izuku, looking at the elderly woman expectantly. All right, dear, I have some good news for you, she says. This perks the teen's curiosity. I was able to find someone with a quirk that might be able to help you. Izuku's eyes widen. She's on her way right now. Izuku almost bursts out in tears right there and then. He hadn't expected a solution so soon. In fact, he hadn't expected anything at all, which is enough to make him start thinking this is too good to be true. As if reading his mind, All Might speaks up. How did you manage to find someone so soon? I'll have you know I've been making calls ever since he's been in this room, she says while motioning at Izuku. After some time, I got referred to a young lady working in Tokyo's Central Hospital. Thank you, Izuku says just barely above a whisper. He's not thanking anyone in particular. Maybe All Might, or Recovery Girl, or maybe the woman whose quirk will help him, he's not sure. The elder probably thinks it's directed at her because she gives him a soft smile. Izuku knows the ride from Tokyo to Musutafu is about 2 hours long, but he thinks it's worth the wait if he can sleep afterwards. The man gets up from his seat and excuses himself, saying he'll call Aizawa to inform him of the situation. The teen blinks and suddenly All Might isn't standing where he was just a moment before, and now the door opens again. Izuku doesn't really know when the man had stepped out, but now he's back again. He keeps missing bits and pieces of moments during the day, and he finds it a bit unnerving. It's like he stops existing during those split seconds, and he doesn't where he goes or what happens when he leaves. He shakes the thought away and reminds himself it will be over soon. About half an hour later, Aizawa walks in. Izuku isn't sure where he had gone to earlier today, but he figures the man probably had work to do. He has a lot on his mind, but he still wonders if perhaps his teacher had finished correcting the essay they had to write a few weeks prior. No one talks or tries to start a conversation. Everyone is just doing their thing, or in Izuku's case, nothing. And so they wait like this. There isn't really anything to do. All they can do is wait and hope. So they do. There's a knock on the door. Everyone turns their head in the direction of the sound, and Izuku sits up abruptly. It's been a little over 2 hours now since Recovery Girl said she had found someone able to help him. All Might rises from his seat, his coat crumpled against the chair. When he opens the door, the woman behind it lets out a small squeak. All Might, she says. Izuku still isn't used, and probably never will, to people recognizing his mentor while in his true form. The man smiles at her in greeting and steps to the side to let her in. Izuku takes a moment to look at her. She looks a bit taller than him, and she's wearing a beige sweater under her gray overcoat. Her long hair is dark and wavy, and her deep blue eyes are strangely warm. He's surprised a bit. Izuku hadn't known what to expect, but he had imagined the person who would end his burden to look less plain. She's beautiful, he thinks, but she looks so ordinary, like someone he would pass on the street and not pay any attention to. She looks around the room and then her gaze falls on Izuku. Ah, you must be Midoriya. She bows slightly. My name is Ayumu Miyako. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you too, Izuku replies, inclining his head slightly toward her. She takes a chair leaning against the wall and brings it closer to Izuku's bed, and then sits down in it. All right, she starts. I don't know much about the whole situation, so I want to clarify some things. Izuku nods. She asks her question, and Izuku answers them all. It's easy, he thinks, since they're the same he's been asked over and over today. After she's done, she leans back in her chair and speaks a little louder, addressing everyone in the room. My quirk is called slumber. I can decide to put anyone into a dreamless sleep-like state, but I need to have physical contact with them to activate or disable it. This means I can only disable it. She pauses. Normally, I would use it on a patient to induce an artificial coma or to put them to sleep during a surgery. Aizawa speaks up. So you would have to be there to put him to sleep and to wake him up is what I understand. Ayumu hums. Yes, which might become a problem in the long term if the quirk affecting Midoriya doesn't go away after one night of sleep. I would need to be close by twice a day, every day. She sounds apologetic, and Izuku understands. He doesn't know how long he'll be stuck like this, unable to sleep on his own. Another day, a week, a month, more. He bites his lip. It could only be every few days, he offers. Aizawa cuts him off. No problem, child. You will not get sleep just every few days. Izuku feels himself redden. It had sounded a lot better in his head, but now that he had said it out loud he felt embarrassed. The black-haired woman gives her a soft smile. No, that's not what I mean. I don't mind helping you until we find a better solution. Izuku frowns. Since you're not in mortal danger, I'll need parental approval to use my quirk on you over the long term. The teen feels a knot form in the pit of his stomach. His mom. She doesn't know anything about this, and the thought of telling her hadn't even crossed Izuku's mind. If she learned the truth, would she pull him out of UA? Is it necessary? The woman goes to answer, but All Might replies first. The hero shoots him a reassuring smile. My boy, it'll be all right. Izuku relaxes a little at that. All Might had convinced his mom to let him be a hero before, and the teen hopes he'll be able to do it again. He swallows and nods. So Aizawa calls her and explains the whole situation all over again. Izuku hadn't been able to bring himself to talk to her, couldn't bring himself to. And now his mom is on her way here, and he can only wait and see where this will bring him. All Might had volunteered to go meet Izuku's mom at the gate, so now they were just waiting for him to come back with here. The Greenette wonders if the number of people in the room will ever stop increasing. The place feels cramped, but for some reason it's not uncomfortable. He thinks the people he's surrounded with make his lack of sleep more bearable. The door bursts open, and a small green-haired woman walks in. Izuku. Behind her, All Might looks a bit out of breath. Oh, my baby, Izuku. It looks like she's about to break down into tears, and clearly she's already cried not too long ago judging by the red tint of her eyes. She cups one of his cheeks with her hand, tracing the section just under his left eye with her thumb. Suddenly, she turns around to face Aizawa. How could you let this happen to my son? She doesn't raise her voice, but Izuku can feel the anger behind it. She sounds tired, and Izuku wonders if maybe it's his fault. Mom, it's not their fault. His teacher raises his hand to interrupt whatever he had been about to say. This is Midoriya. I owe you an apology. He starts. I have failed your son times and times again, and I'm afraid words won't be enough to express how sorry I am. He bows deeply, making Izuku's heart clench. But I still ask of you to trust this is the best thing we can do for him now. The room stays still, as if everyone was frozen in place, until finally his mom takes a small step back and looks down. I never had the intention to keep this treatment from my Izuku. Of course I'll give you my approval, she says, but you need to understand that as his mother, I worry. And I will keep worrying for the rest of my life. She lifts her head slightly but keeps her gaze to the floor. Izuku always gets into trouble. He's always been like this. Even if I pulled him out of this school, he would find another way, one less safe, to get himself hurt. She lets out a small sigh. Stand up, don't stay like this, she says to Aizawa, and he does. It reminds him of the time All Might came to their house for the dorms. He wants to cry now, just like he had back then. His teachers are going out of their way for him, and he's never had that before UA. It's getting late now, he notices. School had ended some time ago, and the sky outside was starting to get darker. Izuku feels tired, more and more. He's reached a point where he's tired of being tired. He almost wants to ask them to stop talking and just use the quirk already, but he doesn't. He knows he has to wait a little longer, because this is important. For his mother, but also for everyone him. She turns back to him and sees the pleading look in his eyes, and then she hugs him, and Izuku hugs her back. She puts her hands on his shoulders. Let's get you to sleep, she says, softly, and then shuffles to the side to let MahouMou take her place. Under any other circumstances, maybe the fact there are so many people around him would have unnerved him. But right now, seeing All Might, his childhood hero, alongside the best teacher he could have ever dreamed of having, his mom who had always taken care of him, and the elderly nurse he had grown fond of, Izuku doesn't think it could be any better. All right, Midoriya, she says, do you want to change into something more comfortable before I use my quirk? Izuku is still wearing his gym uniform, and now he feels grateful for just how soft it is. And no, this is fine. The woman nods. She asks him to lie down, and he does. Izuku feels so drained, both mentally and physically. He thinks this might as well be the most comfortable bed he's ever been in. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'll activate it. Is that fine with you? He nods, but then he starts to feel anxious again. What if it didn't work? There's no guarantee. So far, nothing had worked to get him to sleep, and every time he had hoped it would. For a second he thinks maybe if he hopes that it works, it won't. And so he shouldn't hope to make it work. He pushes the thought away and clenches his fists under the covers. She starts counting, very slowly. Or maybe it's in Izuku's head, he can't tell. Right when she's about to say 3. He grabs her wrist in a panic. Wait. He sounds so small, almost like when he was a child. Is it will it hurt? She shakes her head and smiles at him. There's something calming about her eyes, and maybe that's what makes him believe her. And, is it going to work? He asks in a whisper. I'm pretty confident it will, she reassures him. She squeezes his arm a bit, as if to say it's okay now, and he lets go of her. She starts counting again, but now Izuku feels calmer, like there had never even been an issue in the first place. 3, she breathes at last. At first, nothing happens. It's barely been a few seconds, but Izuku already worries maybe it won't work at all. And then, his eyelids become heavier, so much that he can't keep them open. He closes his eyes, without a single thought on his mind, and falls into a deep slumber. When Izuku wakes again, the sky is still dark outside. The only light in the room comes from the warm desk lamp. It keeps flickering every few seconds because of how dim it is. He feels someone's hand slip from his arm. He looks up and his eyes meet blue ones. And then, he remembers how MahouMou had used her quirk on him. Izuku already misses the piece from a moment ago, and he has to stop himself from asking the other woman to let him sleep just a little longer. What time is it? He asks instead. She looks at her watch. It's just about 6 a.m., she says with a smile. I put you to sleep quite early yesterday, and I thought it was a nice time for you to start your day. Izuku doesn't blame her. He knows what she means. When he turns to look outside, he notices the window had been fixed, probably when he was asleep. He feels a lot better than the previous day, and now he has more energy. He wants to move or do something. Thank you, he breathes out. No need to thank me. I'm just doing my job, she says with a smile. Izuku looks around and notices they're the only ones in the room. He guesses it makes sense. Everyone must have gone to bed eventually. He had thought maybe his mom would stay, or someone, along with MahouMou. In truth, he hadn't even expected her to stay. As if reading his mind, she spoke up. They left soon after you fell asleep, she explains. And then, in a softer voice, I'm sorry. Izuku frowns. It's not your fault. I mean, everyone was probably tired. She looks surprised. By her own apology or by his answer, he can't tell. She smiles as she shakes her head. That's not what I mean, she says, searching for her words. It's just, I've had to put a lot of people to sleep, for different reasons. But I've never had to do something like this. Like what? The teen asks, confused. Maybe because he just woke up, and he doesn't quite understand. The quirk that's affecting you, keeping you awake. Right, Izuku feels stupid for almost forgetting. He's still stuck like this, or at least he thinks he is. Yesterday, his teachers weren't sure if there was a way to stop the quirk other than by the user disabling it, or a time limit, or even just a night of sleep. You think it's not gone yet. It comes out more like a statement than a question, because he already knows the answer. Now it's Ayumu's turn to frown. I don't know, she says bluntly, but I'll stay here for another day just in case. I hope it is gone, though. Izuku hopes that, too. Neither of them says anything after that, which quickly becomes awkward. She's very nice, but he still only met her a few hours ago. He thinks of Todoroki, and then of their morning run. He missed yesterday's, but it feels like longer than that. If he leaves now, he can probably still meet up with his friends. The room he's in, Recovery Girl's nurse's office, is starting to get boring. The thought of going on a run before the sun rises and into the morning air sounds incredible. And so that's what he does. He's still in his gym uniform, which is convenient. Izuku quickly says goodbye to the woman and shuffles out the room. Todoroki. Izuku jogs to the other teen, already out of breath. He had almost sprinted all the way to the running track. The halls had been empty, so he had figured it would be all right to run just this time. Midoriya, his friend, answers, slowing down just a bit to let him catch up. I wasn't sure you would come today. Izuku shoots him a smile, a real one for the first time this week. Yeah, me neither, he admits, but I'm here now. Todoroki nods once, but the freckled teen doesn't miss the relieved look in his eyes. They keep running like that, in a comfortable silence. The sun starts to rise as more people arrive to do their own morning jogs. Eventually, they make their way to the dorms. There are a few people already up, and they all seem surprised to see him. He's not sure how to feel about having all that attention on him, so he quickly goes to his room. Yesterday, all he could think about was sleeping, so he didn't worry about much else. But now that he has gotten some rest, Izuku realizes he could really use a shower. He likes to bring the clothes he'll wear for the day along with him so that he can change right away. When he opens the door to his room, he goes to get his uniform, but then remembers he left it in the changing room. His day was going so well, but this little inconvenience makes Izuku feel like it's the end of the world, or at least his world, which it might as well be. But then, he looked around a bit more and finds his backpack, which had also been left in the changing room. He opens it, and inside he finds exactly what he was searching for, his uniform. The feeling of doom he had felt moments ago is soon forgotten, replaced instead by his heart warming. It's probably Todoroki that had brought back his bag. Izuku makes a mental note to thank him later. After he grabs everything he needs, he makes his way downstairs to the boys' bathroom. He remembers how he had sat right there, on the floor, when Katsuki had come in. The memory makes him cringe. Hopefully he won't have to go without sleep for so many hours again. He enters a stall and locks the door before turning the shower on. His thoughts are much clearer than they were yesterday. Izuku keeps comparing his state from the day before to today's. It's not really the lack of sleep that had made him feel like this. He thinks if he had done it willingly, it wouldn't have been half as bad. It's more because he had tried desperately to sleep and hadn't been able to. He had been scared it would be the end of him. If he's being honest, a part of him is still scared it will be. He turns the handle of the shower, making the water even hotter. It burns his skin, but it's strangely soothing. He stays like this a moment longer before turning it off and wrapping himself in a towel. The bandage cloth around his palm is wet now, but Izuku doesn't pay it any attention. He dries himself and puts his uniform on. He doesn't know how, or if, his friends will react to seeing him, and thinking about it makes him anxious. Will they have noticed his absence? Did they even care? He shakes his head, as if to push the thoughts away. When he steps into the hallway, a sweet scent fills his nostrils. The closer he gets, the easier it gets to make out the voices coming from the kitchen. You idiots, don't touch that. He hears Katsuki shout. And then Izuku's there, and he sees everyone but his gaze meets his childhood friends. Deku, the fuck are you doing here? He says. Izuku is about to reply when Mina speaks. Oh my god, Midoriya, we were so worried about you. Especially Bakugo, she comments, while putting both her hands on the blonde's shoulder to emphasize her point. Shut up, Katsuki snarls, making Izuku chuckle a bit. He can see now that the angry teen is actually cooking, and even though Izuku isn't sure what, he thinks it smells amazing. Katsuki is still looking at him, waiting for an answer. I just woke up, he says, as if it explained everything. And it does, for his childhood friend at least. Izuku looks around and sees Uraraka and Isui doing homework, along with Ida helping them. There's a bunch of paper scattered everywhere on the table they're sitting at, but his friend's attention is on him now, he notices. Uraraka seems to hesitate for a moment before speaking. "Good morning, Deku-kun." She twists in her chair so that she can face him, and waves. Izuku figures that's his cue to go towards them. He places his folded blazer that he had been holding in his arms on the backrested chair, an empty seat where he usually sat, one that had been saved for him. Izuku can see the questions on the tip of their tongues, and how everyone is trying to make out what is all right to ask him. After a moment without anyone talking, Isui offers him a smile. "You look more rested than yesterday," she says. After that, the conversation flows easily. It's all very normal. Everything is going as it always does. But Izuku knows it's more complicated than that, even if it doesn't look that way. At some point, Todoroki joins them. He's silent for the most part, but he slips a few comments here and there. Izuku is proud of the progress his friend has made so far this year. Then breakfast is ready, and the sugary scent turns out to have been pancakes. They're fluffy and soft, the complete opposite of the person who has made them. Or so everyone thinks. And then, as everyone settles down and talks, the inevitable, happens. "Deku-kun," Uraraka begins, calling him like she always does, but this time she sounds serious, or worried maybe. She licks her lips before continuing, her eyes not quite meeting his. Yesterday, what happened?" The whole class stops talking, just to hear what he's about to say. Izuku's not sure whether it's because they're concerned, or just curious. He doesn't care or mind. He guesses it's only fair he actually tells them the truth. He doesn't feel as hungry anymore now. He drinks some water, trying to buy himself some time before answering. "I couldn't sleep," he starts. He sees the confused looks on the face of his friends and knows it won't be enough. "At all, Aizawa and the others, they think it's a quirk, keeping me from sleeping. I guess the lack of sleep caught up to me quickly and I fell from the climbing wall." The room falls completely silent. Everyone is looking at him, and he can't really tell the looks on their face. They must hate him, he thinks. "Man," Kirishima breaks the silence, rubbing the back of his neck and laughing a bit. "How do these things keep happening to you?" The tension in the common room dissolves at that. "Yeah, Midoriya, leave some for the rest of us," Kaminari says. A few people chuckle, and Izuku does as well. Yaoyorozu frowns. "Are you still under the quirk's influence?" I don't know. Someone had to come here yesterday to put me to sleep," he explains. Uraraka nudges his shoulder. "You'll get through this," she reassures him. "We're here for you." His class agrees with her, and somehow he believes them. Izuku's friends got his back. The day had gone by rather smoothly after the morning events. In class, it had been easier to concentrate. Izuku is still tired, obviously, but he doesn't complain. It's bearable, so he ignores it. The only thing that had happened really was in homeroom. Aizawa had walked in, and when he saw Izuku there, sitting at his desk, his eyes widened a bit. He looked surprised to see him. It made the freckled teen squirm in his seat a bit. Was he supposed to be here? Had he done something wrong? "Midoriya," his teacher says, startling Izuku, and grabbing the attention of some other students. "Come see me after class." It had bothered him all day long. There was always this thought at the back of his head telling him he had done something terrible. Maybe he should have stayed in Recovery Girl's office, he doesn't know. Everyone is packing their bags to leave now, but the knot in his stomach only becomes tighter. Katsuki is standing right beside him, looking at him as if he was waiting for something. Or someone. Soon enough, Izuku realizes his childhood friend is waiting after him. The confusion must show on his face, because the blonde clicks his tongue. "Are you coming or what?" he grumbles. Izuku is surprised by that, even though he really shouldn't be by now. Katsuki isn't asking to tag along, just stating he is. And so they leave, headed for the teacher's room. The walk there is short, although Izuku wishes it were longer. The door is already open, so he knocks on the doorframe. Aizawa's head turns to look at him, and then he sees Katsuki. He gestures at them to come in. "I have sensitive information about your situation, Midoriya," he starts. His teacher casts a glance at Katsuki, and then at him. "It might be better if Bakugo isn't here." "I'm fucking staying," the explosive teen answers. "Bakugo, it's alright, if it's Kakin." Izuku interrupts in a small voice. Aizawa purses his lips, but doesn't add anything. He leads them to a green couch and sits on a stool, a dark wooden coffee table between them. "There's an investigation going on to find who could be responsible," he says, going straight to the point. "We think you were targeted, and that there was no accident." Izuku pales a little at that. He knows the risk of being the holder of one for all, but these kinds of situations still scare him. Could it be the League? Or someone else? "We don't know much yet," the man continues. "But we think something might have happened while you went out at the convenience store on Sunday." The teen's eyes widen. He remembers the strange encounter he had with the stranger that had left him feeling odd. I'm so sorry. Izuku looks up at the stranger who had caught his arm to stop him from falling. He must be in his 30s, and his grip is firm. A moment passes where the stranger doesn't reply, and then his mouth forms a small smile. It's no worries. He drops Izuku's arm and steps to the side to let the teenager pass. Yes, there was someone right before I left. It was weird. His words are all over the place, but Aizawa understands anyways and nods. We tried to find some footage, but the face of the person you're talking about was blurred. His teacher sounds upset at this. Katsuki speaks up for the first time, his voice strangely calm, like he was trying to contain himself. So there's some asshole running around that's trying to keep Deku from sleeping is what I'm getting. Izuku frowns. It doesn't make much sense when put like this. Why not outright kill him? He thinks, but quickly shakes the thought away. If they wanted to get rid of him, this certainly wasn't the best way. So it couldn't be their goal. But then, if it isn't, what is? Pretty much, he replies honestly. We don't know what they're trying to achieve, whoever they are. And then he looks straight into Izuku's eyes, which is the most dangerous part. What do you mean? He asks, because he doesn't understand. Already knowing their goal would give us a lead, or at least something to work with. But now, we know almost nothing. Maybe it's not you they're targeting, but your class, or even the school. He hadn't thought about that. But it's then that it dawns on him just how terrible it is that his friends, the people he loves, could be in danger. And he can't do anything about it. The hell are we supposed to do then? Katsuki asks, and under his displeased tone, there's worry evident in his voice. There's not much we can do as of now, their teacher starts. But luckily, we were able to follow the man, who we suspect used his quirk on you, with the cameras in the district. He stands up. For now, I can't tell you more than that, but I'll let you know when we have new information. The man is about to say something else when Izuku speaks. As sensei, he says, his eyes glued to the floor. This quirk, what if it's more complicated than we thought? Or if it doesn't go away? Quirks are always complicated, he answers plainly. As for it never going away, I can assure you we'll find a way to get rid of it. Izuku's eyes snap up. But what if it really was an accident? That'd be the best scenario, Katsuki says, looking forward at no one in particular. His elbows are propped on his knees, and his head is resting on the back of his hands. He turns to face him. But we all know that's not the case. He's right, Aizawa says before he can protest. It would be too much of a coincidence. But right now there's nothing you can do about it. So I just need you all to stay put until we catch whoever did this. It's fair, he thinks. He's caused enough problems as it is. He doesn't want to make it worse. Aizawa had said they had a lead, but Izuku feels like there's more to it than what he's told them. And he's probably right. This is after all a serious investigation, and although he's aware his teacher can't say much more, he would really like to be done with this already. He's found a way to sleep now, which is good, but he would still like to be able to do it on his own. He should be grateful, he thinks. Izuku wants to be a hero, more than anything. But that doesn't mean all those incidents he's had with villains so far don't exhaust him. He really hopes this whole thing will be over soon. The teacher's room is silent until a phone starts ringing. Aizawa fumbles with his pockets and pulls out the device. The man frowns but quickly answers. Yes, Izuku can't hear what's being said on the other end. But he stays still, casting a glance at Katsuki. The pro hero looks up at Izuku for a split second before saying, "He's with me right now." It's obvious they're talking about him, but Izuku wants to know about what. He feels irritated, being talked about like that right in front of him. He doesn't know what this is about, and it kind of makes it worse. Fortunately, he doesn't have to wait much longer, or at least, he guesses so, because the next thing Aizawa says is, "I'll let him know," concern written all over his face. Izuku looks at his teacher expectantly. The man takes a moment before meeting his eyes. "MahouMou, the woman who used her quirk on you. She won't be able to make it tonight. She had an emergency." The freckled teen smiles the best he can. It's wobbly, but he keeps it anyway. That's fine, he starts, but then he realizes he doesn't know what to say next. Aizawa frowns but doesn't comment on it. "If you need anything tonight, just come see me." Izuku nods, though he's already made up his mind about the fact he wouldn't go bother his teacher. He still has hopes that maybe the quirk is already be gone, somehow. Katsuki gets up without uttering a single word, which is unusual, but Izuku isn't sure what he could say. He doesn't know if there's anything to be said, really. His childhood friend turns to look at him as if telling him to follow. And so he does. As both students make their way back to the dorms, they pass Recovery Girl's office. Izuku looks at the door and thinks how he wouldn't mind spending another night there if it meant he could sleep. He shakes his head. It's selfish. People have more important things to do than make sure he gets some sleep. And now he knows he only has to go one night and day without it. It could be worse. The days are starting to get shorter now, and the sky is already starting to get darker through the windows of the common room. Dinner was rather uneventful but pleasant. Izuku is helping wash the dishes with everyone else now. Some people complain about the task, but he finds it relaxing. Some of his classmates start going back to their room, and some stay in the common room. He decides to make himself some tea because it usually made him feel better. He brings his tea to the table where most of the people are sitting at. Some people are reading, others doing homework. Some are having small conversations or playing on their phone. It makes Izuku smile. "Midoriya, shouldn't you be sleeping?" Yaoyorozu asks from her seat, her own cup of tea in front of her. Izuku gives her a sheepish smile. "I don't know if I'll be able to," he admits. It's true, he doesn't. But he thinks maybe this will help him, or at least make him relax to compensate for the sleep he won't get. Izuku had never really been good at going without enough sleep for too long. Sometimes he would stay up until 1 or 2 a.m. to do homework, hero analysis, but he'd be tired the next day, and so he'd make up for it the following night. But now, he hadn't been able to sleep for 2 entire nights, then slept for probably 12 hours, and tonight he would have to go without rest again. It's exhausting, always thinking about when you're going to sleep next. It hasn't been a week, but Izuku doesn't know if it'll last longer than that. He had never had to really think about it much before. He sips his tea, letting the hot liquid sit in his mouth for a moment before swallowing, and then repeating the action. He listens to the hushed conversations around him, not paying attention to what is being said and letting the sounds fall in the background. His classmates glance at him from time to time, unsure whether they should say something or not. Izuku hates it. The way everyone's been so careful around him lately, like he's going to break down any moment. Starts sobbing his heart out in front of them, right there on the spot. They treat him like he's so fragile, but Izuku knows he's not. He's seen worst. He's tired, obviously, but that doesn't mean he can't be useful anymore. He's fought powerful villains before, and he won. Thinking about it now, Izuku thinks he would prefer fighting instead of whatever quirk is affecting him. Izuku had meant to do some work, catch up on what he'd missed yesterday, but his limbs feel heavy. He tries to uncurl his fingers away from the cup in his hands, but he can't. He can't move at all, or maybe he doesn't want to. He tries to will himself to reach out for his bag, or simply twitch his legs, but he doesn't find the strength. Just then, some people start getting up, announcing they're going to bed. This breaks Izuku out of whatever trance he was in. He lifts his eyes to see everyone that's left and is surprised to see just how many there are, more than usual. "Shouldn't you guys go too?" he asks. Uraraka, Todoroki, Kaminari, Asui, and Yaoyorozu turn to him. Izuku feels his face redden. This is the first time he spoke up tonight since he sat down. Kaminari grins. "We're staying with you, man." Izuku frowns. His friends, some he's not even that close with, turn back to doing their things. They don't say anything more, which tells Izuku they all agree with what Kaminari had said. Had they planned this? Izuku wants to say something, to tell them they don't have to do this, that he doesn't need them to. But a part of him wants it, even though he would never admit it. "I'm going to go make some more tea," Uraraka tells them as she stands up from her seat. They stay like this for a while. Some of them yawn from time to time. And Izuku wants to tell them they can go back to their room if they want, that he won't mind. But he knows they would stay here anyways. Soft footsteps echo down the hall. They all turn their heads in direction of the sound. It's late, but not late enough for someone to be up to be unusual. But then they see Kaken standing there. It's fairly normal for people to get up at random hours during the night. But they all know Katsuki had fixed himself a strict bedtime. And then Izuku remembers the pills his childhood friend had given him 2 nights ago. Izuku hadn't given them back yet, had forgotten about them. He wonders if that's the reason he's standing there. If maybe the blonde was looking for him. Maybe he had gone to Izuku's room, knocked on the door, and hadn't been answered. Izuku feels bad now. Katsuki had gone to all this trouble to help him and he hadn't even bothered to give back something the other needed. They stare at him, and Katsuki clicks his tongue. "I had a feeling you idiots might do something like this." He makes his way to the empty table across from theirs. For a moment, Izuku thinks he's going to sit there, but Katsuki takes a chair and drags it to the end of the table everyone is sitting. He plops down in his seat and speaks before anyone can say anything. "So, what now?" They look at each other, and Izuku is glad to see he's not the only one who's confused. "What now?" Todoroki repeats, furrowing his eyebrows and tilting his head slightly. Clearly, no one knows what Katsuki is talking about. His childhood friend points his chin in Izuku's direction. "The quirk affecting Deku," he says as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We gotta find the fucker who did this." Kaminari slams his hands on the table and sits on the edge of his chair, kind of like solving a murder mystery. He seems to think better of it because not long after he adds, "Without the murder part, obviously." "Not yet, at least." "Ribbit," Asui replies bluntly. Izuku swallows. He remembers Aizawa had mentioned something about not knowing the motive of the holder of the quirk. A man, he had said. That asshole could have killed the nerd already if he had wanted to. Or tried to, anyway. Izuku agrees with what Katsuki says. He could have killed him, but he had chosen not to. "Hey," Uraraka says. "How do they know it's a guy?" Izuku turns to face his friends, not quite meeting any of their eyes. "They think, Aizawa and the police, that I got hit by this quirk on my run to the convenience store." on Sunday, and I ran into someone. They saw him on the security cameras. This story is all he's been talking about lately, so it's easy to tell. Maybe it wasn't intentional, too, Uraraka says in a low voice. She's the first other than him to acknowledge that maybe it is an accident. They're all sitting at the table, deep in thought. The wind outside makes the leaves of the trees rustling against the window. The atmosphere inside is comfortable, warm, despite the subject of their conversation. Katsuki props his elbows on the table. We already thought of that, he says, casting a side glance to Izuku. There's no way, out of everyone here, that it's Deku who got hit by that quirk, and that it was a coincidence. Izuku doesn't know why, but at this moment he thinks it's so out of character for his childhood friend to act like this. All worried, concerned. For him. Or maybe he couldn't. Yaoyorozu suggests tentatively, as if she had been thinking for a few minutes now. The small group gives her a look telling her to expand on that. She straightens up in her seat. I mean, it's totally hypothetical, but maybe he was initially going to kill or kidnap you, and something made it impossible. She licks her lips and looks away in thought. I just don't see the point of this quirk, exactly. It's so much information, and ideas he hadn't thought about. Lately, Izuku had been less set on finding out who did this, or why. The only thing on his mind had been getting some sleep. The rest would come after, and the after, unfortunately for him, was now. I'd help if we knew who the guy was. Todoroki hadn't really said anything so far, so it takes them by surprise to hear him speak. Asui is sprawled out on her chair. She presses on the tip of her retractable pen a few times. Maybe he's not working alone, though. Everyone deflates at this. She's right, there could be more than one person behind this whole thing. But it would make the entire thing a lot more complicated. Kaminari chuckles a bit. It's uncalled for, and his friends all look at each other with questioning looks. Kaminari presses his eyes against the heel of his palm. I'm so sorry, Midoriya, he says. But now Izuku can see that his smile is strained. Somehow I feel like this is my fault. I mean, he continues, sliding his hands up his face and pulling his bangs back, as if he were shielding his eyes from the sun. It was my idea to do the Sunday movie nights, and then to take turns when going out. Izuku half sits up from his chair. This isn't your fault. I don't blame you. At that moment, Kaminari looks so guilty, ashamed, but Izuku doesn't blame him for anything at all. It's not his friend's fault. He did this to himself. He's the one who got himself in trouble. Still, Kaminari shakes his head, not listening to what the freckled teen is saying. He blinks for a long moment before opening his eyes again. Izuku can see the unshed tears gathering in the corner of those yellow eyes, trying their best to keep them from falling. Mina and we were the ones to decide whose turn it is to go out to get the snacks. He lets his eyelids close again, a tear escaping and hitting the table. And it was my turn, but I asked you to go instead because I'm lazy. His voice cracks. It's hard to figure out the right thing to say in this situation. So they stay quiet. They wait for someone else to say something, anything. The only thing breaking the silence is the ragged breath coming from Kaminari. I feel terrible because I know it could have been me. And I feel relieved that it wasn't. Izuku can't find the words to comfort him, but he understands. He's relieved, too, that it was him instead of anyone else in his class who got hit by this quirk. It's so heartbreaking to see his friend, usually so energized and optimistic, look so defeated. Stop sulking, Pikachu. This isn't your fault, it's no one's, except that bastard's. Kaminari lets out a small laugh and looks away. His voice sounds upset, but mostly tired. Of course it's mine, what are you? Just think about it. Katsuki cuts him off. He moves forward in his chair. Our classes have been leaked during the sports festival. For a few weeks now there have been teens, all from the same class, ours, going out at the same store, and around the same time every Sunday. He looks at each and every one of them. If they were targeting someone, they could easily fucking wait for them to show up eventually. If you're right about this, then Deku-kun would have ended up like this in any case scenario. She looks down at her laps. It's maddening to think this was inevitable. So we're back at square one, Izuku says just barely above a whisper. I know you guys want to help, but there's just so little we can do while sitting here. We barely know anything, not who or why. He trails off. He knows they're doing their best, but he doesn't think it'll amount to anything in the end. They should go sleep instead of wasting their time here. We won't let you do this alone, Todoroki says from his spot. Izuku snaps his head up to look at his friend. He goes to argue, but Katsuki cuts him off before he can. Stop with your self-sacrificing bullshit. His tone is surprisingly soft, but no one says a thing about it. He opens and closes his mouth, hesitating whether he should talk or not. There's one thing you're right about. We can't sit still and wait for this shit to solve itself. Uraraka looks at the blonde and frowns, crossing her arms. So what? We should just, she vaguely motions at the air, go out there and try to find the bad guys. The two stare at each other for a split second, but it's enough for Izuku to notice. Izuku gets the feeling they know something he doesn't, but he can't tell exactly what it might be about. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Asui straightens up and places her pen down on the table. We can't do that, Ribbit. And even if we could, we don't have a plan or even an idea of where to begin looking. This whole conversation is about him, but for some reason, Izuku feels excluded from it. Maybe that's just him, he doesn't know. They haven't really asked him anything at all yet, and Izuku feels kind of annoyed because they should have by now. Guys, stop, please. Just stop. It's not worth it. He presses his eyes shut. The cup in his palm is cold now, still filled halfway with the tea Uraraka had made. Kaminari speaks for the first time since breaking down, stumbling over his words. If it was me, or anyone, really, you wouldn't say that. What? He asks, because he doesn't really understand what Kaminari is trying to say. I mean, if it had been MahouMou, or Tsuyu, or anyone that was hit by the quirk, would you say that? That it's not worth it? Izuku's eyes widen a bit. What? And no, of course not, but that's different, Todoroki offers, and Izuku wants to say yes because it is different. They're worth it, and he's not. Yaoyorozu stands up, the tip of her fingers touching the table. As the vice president of Class 1A, I won't stand by and do nothing as I watch one of my classmates get hurt, physically or mentally. They're all looking at her, and Izuku finds himself unable to tear his eyes away. It's been hard on him, this quirk, more than he'd like to admit. But it hasn't been easy for his friends either, he realizes. He doesn't think he could stand it either, watching someone suffer and not try to help. He purses his lips. Izuku understands it, but that doesn't make him want their help more. Uraraka clears her throat. Sue, we need a plan. Izuku knows she had meant it to be a statement, but it comes out more like a question. His friends are set on doing this, there's no going back now. If you give me time, I think I could come up with something to help us. Yaoyorozu flattens her palms on the surface of the table and sits back down. We still need to know what we're going to do, exactly. Todoroki reaches for an empty sheet of paper, and Asui hands him the pen she's been fumbling with for the past hour. And so they talk. They write down what they know, and what they don't. What they need, what they should do. It's far from perfect, it's messy, but after a while, they're satisfied with their work. There are a few papers scattered on the table, multiple handwritings and arrows pointing in every direction. It's the middle of the night now, but for some reason, Izuku doesn't feel as tired as earlier. Like he'd passed the stage of being sleepy and now he could go about his day. When he looks at his friends, he can tell they're in a similar state. Izuku is excited now, and he tries to tell himself it's selfish, keeping his friends from sleeping and getting their hopes up. But a small part of him wishes it'll work, and so he lets himself forget everything else. They'll be tired tomorrow, but that's a problem for later. The roads were practically empty at this time of the night. Shouta had just finished his patrol when he had felt his phone vibrate in his pocket, and so he doesn't go back to UA right away. Instead, he heads for the police station. Heavy rain had started pouring down on the city as he was walking, making him hurry his pace. He knocks on the door frame of the detective's office. I got your text, he says, lifting his phone up to the other man. Tsukachi looks up at him and notices the pro hero's drenched clothes and hair, water dripping on the ceramic floor. He gives him an apologetic smile. Sorry for making you come here at this hour. He turns back to his computer. I thought you might want to see this. Shouta steps into the room and around the desk to see the screen more clearly. His eyes widen slightly when he realizes the video playing is taking place at the convenience store his students usually go to. The one where Midoriya could have potentially been hit by that quirk. Soon enough the said student appears, the street lamp making his green hair shine. He pushes the glass doors open and Tsukachi pauses the video and fast forwards it a bit. A few seconds later, a man enters the frame. He looks behind him quickly and then takes his phone out. He stops in his tracks, just before passing the windows of the store. He puts his phone to his ear, calling someone. The stranger turns his head to the right, and then the left, and hangs up. And then he puts his phone back in his coat and draws closer to the door. And when he pushes it open, he walks right into Midoriya. The camera is positioned so that they can't see the inside of the store, but enough to see the scene unfold. You've already shown me this. Shouta had seen the footage the day before, but it hadn't been helpful at all. The man's face was blurred, and for what he could see, it still was. Tsukachi ignores him, closing and opening tabs. I thought it was weird how bad the footage looked. Usually, they'd change the lenses if they were damaged, or at least clean them. He zooms on the paused image of Midoriya apologizing to the man, where both their faces are visible. Or should be. It just looks like a mix of blurred colors and shapes. So I looked more into it, and I found this. He drags a screenshot of his student's face and places it beside the other picture. This one is clear. Shouta frowns. Where are you getting at? He asks. The detective clicks his tongue and lets out a displeased sigh. Look, he says and replays the part where the stranger had first appeared. He hadn't noticed before, but now it seems obvious. The footage becomes fuzzier the more the stranger approaches the store. No, not the store. The camera. Do you think it's that guy's quirk? Shouta tears his eyes away from the screen to face the officer. It was right in front of their eyes. He doesn't know how they'd managed to miss it before. I'm not sure. If it is, it doesn't explain how Midoriya got hit by that insomnia quirk. Shouta frowns and turns back to the blurred image. Unless he has 2 quirks, he suggests. It's rare, but he's seen it before. They're too unrelated to both belong to him. The pro hero gets the feeling the detective already went through all those possibilities. He knows the other probably already has an idea in mind. He tries to hide the impatience in his tone. What do you think, then? Tsukachi leans back in his chair and stays quiet for a moment. I think, he says, finally meeting Shouta's eyes, that more than one person was in on this. Shouta purses his lips and grips the side of the desk harder. Of course, he had known this was a possibility, but for some reason, he hadn't wanted to think this could be something big, dangerous. He straightens up, pushing himself from his hunched position. He places a hand over his mouth, letting the realization dawn on him. This keeps getting more complicated. Problem child, he thinks to himself. For example, Tsukachi reaches for the mouse of his computer and plays the part where the stranger lingers in front of the store. Here, he's on the phone with someone, right before he collides with your student. And if he was working with someone that had a quirk too, blur the security cameras, it'd make more sense. This whole thing looks too sketchy to be a coincidence. And Shouta agrees. I just don't get, how did they plan this? It's been bothering him for the past few days. He doesn't understand how they were able to target Midoriya. And he knew it certainly wasn't luck. It's almost as if they had known he would show up eventually, the moments the words fall out of his mouth. He meets the detective's eyes. Unless they did know. Tsukachi's eyes widen, an idea forming in his head. Aizawa, you said your students went there, that store, every Sunday. Shouta hums in response and watches as the officer types a few things on the computer. Okay, he says, okay. That's last Sunday, around the same time. The screen shows Shouta's student. This time it's Kirishima. And then they see it, their suspect. But this time after hanging up, he turns around and leaves. They check a few weeks back, and it's the same thing over and over again. This had been going on for longer than Shouta had thought. And suddenly he feels guilty for not noticing sooner. It's irrational. He knows he couldn't have known, but he still feels terrible about it. Stop there. He puts a hand on Tsukachi's shoulder and stares at the screen. The detective gapes. Oh shit. And yeah, Shouta relates to that. Right there, they see the sketchy man's face, although this time it's not blurred. It's clear, and the sun that hasn't set yet at the time the footage was taken makes it even easier to see his face. He's looking right at the camera as if it was the first time he noticed it, and it probably was. The detective passes a hand through his hair in disbelief. We got our guy. The next day, a few students arrive in class looking more tired than usual. Izuku yawns, covering his mouth with his hand as he does. Some of his friends give him a sympathetic smile. When their homeroom teacher walks in, the students fall silent. They notice he looks worn out as well. Aizawa looks over the class, and Izuku doesn't miss how the man's gaze meets his longer than the others. Their teacher ends up giving them a free period to work on assignments and homework. Groups form, people move their chairs to other people's desks, and everyone starts talking. Katsuki turns around first, which surprises a few people because normally his childhood friend prefers to work alone. Then Asui and Uraraka join, too, followed by Todoroki. They all brought some papers in their pencil cases, but Izuku's desk isn't big enough for them all, so most of them just put their belongings on their laps or on the floor. Yaoyorozu holds her chair in front of her. Bakugo, you should move your desk so we can have more space, she suggests. Katsuki replies with his usual don't tell me what to do. But it doesn't hold its usual heat, and he ends up doing it anyway. Maybe it's the lack of sleep, catching up to everyone, but no one questions it. Kaminari mutters an apology to Kirishima, Mina, and a few others before joining Izuku's table. They're an odd set of people, and it doesn't go unnoticed by the others. It's unexpected, perhaps some find it weird. Izuku had meant to get some work done, his head hunched over his sheet of paper. He holds his hand in his hair, fingers gripping his curls as if to keep his head in place. His leg bounces quickly from the anxiety swarming him, a familiar knot forming in his stomach. It had seemed like a good idea yesterday, doing that plan. But now it feels stupid, reckless. Why had he agreed to this? Had he even been okay with this to begin with? A million thoughts are going through his head right now, and he can't think. He keeps writing the same word, doing the same mistake over and over again. Izuku feels his eyes start to water and he closes them, trying to stop this unpleasant feeling from growing. Katsuki kicks him under the table to get his attention. The freckled teen looks up and meets ruby eyes. It's going to work, Katsuki says, and Izuku feels himself start to relax a little because the blonde is always right. Kaken is amazing, but he's not. He's scared he'll mess everything up. Izuku doesn't answer. Instead, he goes back to looking at his homework. The words printed out on the sheet don't make any sense at all. He can read them individually, but he doesn't understand what they mean, and it's frustrating. He leans back in his chair, knowing his attempt at staying focused are useless. Aizawa is looking in his direction. At their table, he notices. Izuku feels nervous again. Was it all right for them to all be together? Would his teacher call them out on being unproductive? It wouldn't be a big deal, he tries to convince himself. But he's scared Aizawa might be mad at him for some reason. And then his teacher starts walking towards them. Now the teen is convinced he did something wrong. Will Aizawa yell at them? At him? Midoriya, his voice is soft. But it still makes Izuku flinch. Did you get some rest last night? The question takes him by surprise. He had expected harsh words, a loud voice. It takes him a moment to understand the pro-hero's words. He fumbles over his words. I couldn't fall asleep, it's true, in a way. When he and his friends had gone back to their room in the early morning hours to try and at least nap, Izuku hadn't been able to sleep. The class tries to act as if they're not paying attention. But the green-haired student isn't blind. He can see, almost sense, all their eyes on him. Aizawa puts a hand on his chin. So the quirk isn't gone, he says to himself, and Izuku doesn't know if he should reply. As if breaking out of his thoughts, his teacher looks back at him. I'll get in touch with MahouMou to make sure she'll be there tonight, he says. Izuku wants to argue. Tell him he doesn't mind waiting longer, but he stops himself before he can. He doesn't want to bother her, but he still feels exhausted. Instead, he just nods. His friends are looking between him and their teacher, but the topic of the conversation reminds them of their own drowsiness. Aizawa notes his students' unusual lack of energy and their tired eyes who keep blinking too much. You all should rest too, unless there's something you're not telling me. Kaminari opens his mouth to say something, but Yaoyorozu puts a gentle hand on his forearm to interrupt him. No, sensei, there's nothing. She looks up at the man confidently, unlike everyone else who looks away. Very well. Izuku lets out a breath once Aizawa is back at the front of the class, his back turned to them. Todoroki leans forward in his seat and puts his palms against each other, resting his forehead on the side of his hands and closing his eyes. I really hope this works. The days go by slowly, even though the sun stays up for a shorter amount of time every day, as Izuku makes his way to the infirmary. He thinks it's weird, walking the halls of UA without his usual uniform and wearing some simple but comfortable clothes instead. He slowly opens the door to Recovery Girl's office, not bothering to knock. He peers inside and sees MahouMou talking softly with the old woman. They both turn to him at the sound of the door cracking. Midoriya, the younger woman says, I'm really sorry about not being here yesterday. Izuku waves his hands in front of his face. It's no problem at all. The youthful heroine leaves the room after he's settled in the bed. He didn't mind spending the night here, and it's not like he had a choice anyways. MahouMou wasn't going to come to his dorm room to use her quirk on him and then come back to wake him up later. This was easier, more convenient. The doctor, or nurse, Izuku doesn't really know much about her except that she works in a hospital, announces she'll be back in a minute, going inside the other room connected to the infirmary, and so he waits. It hasn't been a week yet, but it feels like much longer than that. Or shorter. It's like days go by so slowly. But then tomorrow comes and it feels like the day before never happened. He knows it did, but it's hard to remember what he did, or when. Earlier today, he had no idea what day it was, and he had looked at the board at the front of the class hoping to see it written there, but it wasn't. When he had checked his phone later, he'd seen Thursday written under the time. Days are slow, but they're gone before he has the chance to live them. MahouMou comes back and smiles at him while settling some of her things on the table beside Izuku's bed. She hands him a paper cup filled with water and he utters a small thanks. As he drinks, she pulls a chair closer to his bed and sits down in it. All right, this is the same thing as last time, so now you know what to expect. She gives him a reassuring look. Right, Izuku thinks. Last time, he'd been panicking, scared. But he reminds himself that it's okay now. He feels sleepy and tired. He hadn't done any physical training today, or barely. He was able to go to bed at 1 or 2 in the morning last week, and get up when the sky was still dark outside. He's never really bothered to think about his sleep schedule before, but now he wishes he'd slept more. Maybe it would have made this week more bearable. Izuku doesn't know. Just let me know whenever you're ready. MahouMou's voice is soothing. Could it be part of her quirk? Now is not the time to make quirk theories. He wants to sleep first. I'm ready, he mumbles, but she hears him anyways. She lifts her hands slowly, and her palm hovers over his forearm for a moment. They look at each other, and Izuku isn't sure what's that in her eyes. Concern, pity. Izuku figures she's waiting to make sure he's all right, and so he nods. She touches his arm and then he feels something in him. Change. It probably happened the last time, too, but he had fallen asleep right away then. This time, it takes a few seconds before sleep overtakes him, and then he falls into unconsciousness. Shouda's footsteps echo in the vacant streets of the city. Tsukachi had continued to look for pieces of information that could be helpful to them after the pro hero went to teach his class. Later, he'd received a text from the detective. He'd found something, a place. It might end up leading them nowhere at all, but Shouta will take it over nothing. The police officer had to work alone with him on this. They couldn't make this public. Otherwise, it would put his students, especially Midoriya, who was in a vulnerable position at the moment, at risk. It's so close to UA, and no one had noticed before. His students hadn't seen or felt anything suspicious, and he didn't blame them. He wonders if there are other things like this and he just hasn't been attentive enough yet. It had been right under his nose and he'd failed to see the signs, if there are any at all, and now one of his students was paying the price. He's almost there. The building Tsukachi had told him to check out. He doesn't know what to expect, but he knows better than to go inside unprepared. The place is poorly lit and gloomy, but it doesn't really stand out. It looks so ordinary, and that's what sets Shouta off. His eyes widen a bit. People live there, he realizes. It's a building, an apartment building. He goes to open the main door, expecting to have to pick the lock or even break it down, but there is no lock. He opens it and sneaks inside the place. An apartment complex, and one in terrible condition. He closes the metal door behind him, looking to the hallway. It's empty and cramped at the same time. The doors are plain, like they would be in a normal building, but it's sinister. He takes out his phone to look at the address again, wanting to make sure this is the right place. He'd find himself stupid if this turned out to be the wrong building. Unfortunately, Shouta was exactly where he should be. He steps further into the corridor until he finds the door he's looking for. The white paint is peeling off the wood, and the handle is badly set. The pro hero positions his ear against the door to see if he can make out any sound, but instead, it cracks open the moment his cheek comes in contact with it. It's too easy, he thinks. This has to be a trap. Shouta presses his fingertips to the door to push it open anyway, ignoring his bad feeling, because what other options does he have? He tenses, and then he's met with silence. There's no one else in the room, or at least it looks like it. The lights are off, but the open curtains leave space for the moonlight to flood the room. The place is in terrible condition. There's broken glass on the floor, and beside it trashed furniture. Most of the disorder looks recent, but after taking a closer look, Shouta can see it looked bad before that. There are crumbs of food all over the counter, and the sink is crammed with dirty dishes. There's paper, files, and newspaper in the corner of the room, and on the table, piles of them. They were placed there initially, but he figures whatever happened to the place made it so that a few fell off. Shouta is aware of what pushes people to villainy, that sometimes it's inevitable. This doesn't look like the place an average civilian would live in. This seems more like a bad situation turned worse. He takes pictures of the place with his phone, unsure what is important and what isn't. Shouta is under the impression there's something more to this entire thing. He's going to solve this. Izuku opens his eyes, just like he had 2 days prior. He turns his head to the side where he feels a hand. MahouMou's, he reminds himself, slide off his arm. She has a book on her lap flipped upside down to the page she was reading. She looks tired, and Izuku wonders if she's gotten any sleep at all while he slept soundly. Had she left him alone at all? Stayed by his side all night? Did it have something to do with? She starts talking before he has a chance to ask his questions. I forgot to check the time, so right now it's a little past 6, she says. She probably thought he was going to ask the time, which honestly, he was. He feels like he's forgetting something, so he searches his mind, and then his eyes widen. The plan. I'm sorry, I just remembered I had something. He pushes the covers off his legs and slides off the bed. MahouMou gets up at the same time, startled by his sudden movement. She folds the corner of her page and places the book on the table behind her. Okay. Do you need anything else? She asks. The teen shakes his head and grabs his jacket before hurrying to the door, closing it behind him. Izuku breathes in the cool air. This is going to be a good day. He thinks. He'd been feeling so low lately, and this is the last day before the weekend, so he wants it to go well. His lack of sleep had made him feel miserable, but now he's all right. He jogs until he arrives in front of 1A's Height Alliance dormitory, and, as expected, his friends are all there. Yaoyorozu reading a small pocketbook under the lamp post, Todoroki standing by, Kaminari and Uraraka are on their phones, and Asui is watching them. He's still far enough that they don't notice him right away. He feels his phone vibrates in his pocket. He slows down to look at who's calling him, and at the same time he hears the dorm's front door open, Katsuki stepping out. The blonde holds his phone to his ear, and Izuku presses the green button on his device to answer the call. Where the fuck are you? Katsuki closes the door quietly, his back turned to him. He approaches them and enters the lit part of the ground. I'm right here, Izuku says with a smile. They all turn to him in surprise and then relax at the sight of him. His childhood friend hangs up and scowls. About time. Katsuki walks past Izuku and soon everyone follows after him. The freckled teen clears his throat. So, what exactly are we doing? Don't tell me you didn't fucking listen to what we said when we were talking about the plan. And no, I know the plan. It's just, Izuku fumbles over his words. Now that he thinks about it, he doesn't really know what they're doing. He knows they're trying to find the man who'd used his quirk on him, but he wasn't sure how they would do it. Fortunately for him, Kaminari speaks up, scratching the back of his neck. Yeah, I'm a bit confused too, not gonna lie. We need a paper slip to go outside the school grounds, Yaoyorozu explains. There are droplets of sweat on her forehead, and she's not looking at any of them as she talks. She looks nervous, and it reminds Izuku of the time they went to save Katsuki from the League of Villains. He looks around and sees that everyone is in a similar state, which is making him feel anxious. Maybe it's because they know what they're doing is against the rule, or maybe it's something else entirely. For some reason, Izuku doubts the police will actually find anything or help him. That's why he's glad his friends are helping him, even if he won't say it. But he feels guilt at seeing them like this, tired and agitated. Once we have it, Izuku says softly. What then? If we have it, Todoroki answers absently. Katsuki clicks his tongue, clenching his fists. That's for later. Right now we just need to get to Aizawa. The air is tense. Every word they speak breaks the heavy silence settled between them. It's uncomfortable, so unlike 2 nights before, when they were all talking so freely. How do you know he'll be there? Izuku can't stand the uncomfortable ambience. So unlike 2 nights before, when they were all talking so freely. The blonde walking in front of them all abruptly stops. He turns around to face Izuku, his eyes wide and raising his voice. Don't you ever just stop asking fucking questions? Everyone stops in their track, too, and Izuku stumbles back. He closes his mouth shut, the sound of his teeth clacking echoing. His childhood friend's eyebrows are low and drawn together. He blinks. His eyes seem to relax for a moment before widening. Realizing what he'd just said, Izuku thinks he can see what looks like guilt behind those red irises, but he doesn't know. He had thought things were all right, he really had. His friend had been telling him everything would work out just fine, that it'd be fine, but now he sees it was probably to convince themselves more than him. The night they'd made the plan hadn't been easy, but Izuku had believed his classmates were doing fine, that they'd been enthusiastic, even, about this whole thing. And maybe they had been. What does he know anymore? He'd been so preoccupied with himself yesterday, stuck in his own little world, not paying attention to his friends. Had he even looked at them? He wonders. The stress, tension, suspense must all have built up during the day. From the moment they'd woken up, if they had slept, to this very moment, it had been on their mind. They'd been thinking about Izuku, and he hadn't spared a single thought about them. God, he's so selfish. He feels like throwing up or walking away. He wishes MahouMou hadn't woken him up at all. He wouldn't have to stand there like this so awkwardly. Tears start building in the corner of his eyes, because of course there are. He always feels bad for himself, always crying and whining about it. He wants to leave, but he won't, because his friends have been putting up with him for the entire week and he hasn't done anything for them in return. Being tired is no excuse. They'll hate him if he keeps acting like this, if they don't already. Uraraka is the first to move as if they'd all been frozen there, their feet glued to the ground. Bakugo, you. No, he said, startled by the volume of his own voice. He licks his dried lips. No, he's right. I'm not useful at all right now. He looks up to find the conflicted look on Katsuki's face, debating on what to say. The other student's eyes flicker back and forth between them, waiting for the blonde's answer as if he were a ticking bomb, and in a way, he might as well be. Katsuki turns halfway back, his head looking in Izuku's direction but not quite meeting his eyes. We should hurry, he says before starting to walk again. They follow again, and it feels weird. His friends keep glancing at him, unlike earlier when they had been avoiding his eyes entirely. They're still worried, so this whole interaction didn't change much, but he can understand why Katsuki snapped at him like that. Izuku isn't blind. He sees the sluggish steps his friends take as if their limbs were carrying double their usual weight. Those eyes who blink too much, like they had stayed open for too long. He thinks some of them might collapse the moment they see a bed. So yes, he thinks it's understandable their patience has shortened. Before Izuku knows it, they've made it to the front door of the teacher's quarter. Being closest to the door, Katsuki lifts his hand to knock, but someone speaks. What are you all doing here? A tired voice says behind them. Aizawa-sensei, Kaminari exclaims. They had all been taken by surprise by their teacher, thinking they would have more time to mentally prepare themselves. The man comes closer to them, and the moment Izuku's eyes meet his, he really regrets coming along. Aizawa raises an eyebrow, waiting for an answer. They wait for someone to answer, but they all stay quiet, until Isui takes a step forward. Aizawa-sensei, we wanted to ask you to sign a paper slip, she says. She's probably the calmest in their group right now, along with Todoroki, or maybe they just hide how they really feel. Either way, it's convenient in this situation. Their teacher looks at them with an unbelieving look. And you all needed to be here for that. I asked them to, sir. Yaoyorozu puts a hand on her chest. And what for? The man said, pinching the bridge of his nose. Izuku holds his breath. They can't tell him, it would ruin their plan, if they even have one at this point. Whatever it is they were supposed to say, whatever excuse they had, no one speaks it. Walking past them to the door, Aizawa sighs. Katsuki had moved out of the way and doesn't say a word, though Izuku wishes he would. It's obvious there's something you're not telling me. I don't care what it is, and I won't let you go outside until the police and I are sure it's safe, especially you, Midoriya. He adds as Izuku was about to protest. The teen watches as Katsuki clenches and unclenches his fist, and then wipes his palm on his lap. It's a habit he does when he's nervous, when the sweat in his palms starts being too much that he might explode something without meaning to. We would be quick, and if we're all together, wouldn't it be safer? Todoroki questions. Aizawa opens his mouth, but it's Uraraka who interrupts him. It's for Sunday movie night, sensei, she says. And then she lifts her head to look directly into the man's eyes. Since the class has been feeling down this week because of, she vaguely gestures in Izuku's direction. We just want things to feel normal. He seems to consider her words for a moment, wondering whether they were true or not. He puts his hand on the door handle, his back turned to the students. I don't know what you're all trying to achieve, but I can assure you I'm already taking care of this. He turns his head slightly to look at them. Yaoyorozu, as Class 1A's vice president, I hadn't expected you to encourage such behavior. Izuku doesn't miss the way the girl winces at that. Class starts in 2 hours. I'll see you all then. Aizawa opens the door and as he goes to close it, he stops himself. You don't need to do this. He looks at Katsuki first for some reason, and then Izuku. The police and I are taking care of everything. He waits a bit longer as if expecting some kind of reaction. They're all staring at their mentor, as if in a daze. You're right, his childhood friend's voice is soft, too soft, but it doesn't sound defeated. Izuku has known him for long enough to know that much, but he's not sure what it is exactly that Katsuki's feeling. We don't need to do this. He turns around and starts walking back to their dorms, just like that. Their teacher finally closes the door and the Kaminari jogs to catch up to Katsuki. Hey man, you can't actually be serious. We spent an entire night planning this thing and you're just, giving up? I'm not giving up shit, the explosive teen says. But we don't need to ask Aizawa for permission. It's fucking obvious he won't let us do anything. Uraraka takes a few quick steps to walk beside him. Well, what do you suggest then? We can't just leave like that. We'll get expelled. Kaminari adds. Katsuki clicks his tongue. Of fucking course we can, just have to not get caught. Can't be that hard. Plus ultra or some shit, right? Maybe we should let Aizawa-sensei take care of it. Yaoyorozu whispers, and Izuku thinks he might have been the only one to hear her, but then Katsuki turns to her. Don't tell me you're quitting just because of what he said. Ponytail, she draws her eyebrows in confusion. Izuku knows Yaoyorozu values their teacher's opinion a lot, but he hadn't thought she would back down so easily. He wonders how he would react if he were in her shoes. Ponytail, what? That's not the point. She shakes her head. Kaminari is right. We could get expelled for this, and maybe it won't even change anything because Aizawa will still find whoever is responsible for the quirk affecting Midoriya. Yaoyorozu looks away, lowering her voice. Honestly, there's a lot that could go wrong and I don't know if I. Another silence settles between them, and Izuku thinks he'd been foolish to think this would be a good day. Seeing all his friends argue like that, because of him, he wonders how much time he has left before they realize it's all his fault, before they start hating him. He can see the moment his classmates begin to doubt. Picking sides. This entire situation revolves around Izuku, yet he feels so left out. You didn't hesitate half as much before coming to rescue me, Katsuki says bluntly. Yaoyorozu scoffs in disbelief. We almost got expelled. And you saved me, Katsuki says. Izuku wasn't expecting that, and he sees the surprise in everyone else's faces. His childhood friend never brought up the topic of his kidnapping. He hated being reminded of it. Hearing him admit to having been saved when he has refused any kind of help his entire life, perceiving it as people looking down on him, is quite unusual. I would be dead, probably, with or without the pros. He watches as Yaoyorozu's shoulders slump in defeat. Or perhaps not defeat, because she doesn't look as if she'd just lost an argument or a battle. She looks relieved. Well, what should we do now? Our plan is ruined anyway. For the first time in a while, Katsuki grins, just like when he's getting ready to fight. To win. I've already got an idea. The newly formed group of friends are in Izuku's room, discussing the new version of their plan. Yaoyorozu and Todoroki are placing the papers from 2 nights before on which they had scribbled words and small drawings to express their ideas and brainstorm. Sitting on Izuku's bed, Kaminari lets his head fall back on the mattress. Honestly, when you said idea, I didn't think it'd be that bad. Asui is seated in his office chair, her knees pulled to her chest. For once I think I have to agree with Kaminari. For fuck's sake, it's going to work, Katsuki snarled. You said that last time, too, Todoroki says whilst continuing to organize the papers on the floor. A few seconds pass where no one talks, which makes him look up to find them all staring at him. Sorry, he says before picking up another stack of paper. Izuku is sitting on the floor, some sheets of paper in front of him and his back against the frame of his bed, Kaminari's legs dangling beside him. He can see his childhood friend doing his best to contain his anger, and failing. During homeroom today, they had noticed Aizawa watching them more closely than usual. Izuku isn't sure just how much their teacher knows, if anything at all, or what he suspects, but he thinks they'd been good enough at getting through the day. They had done sparring exercise, and surprisingly they had been good. In Izuku's opinion, it was nothing like when they'd done Parker and he had slipped, when he had let go of the climbing hold. Today, Izuku had been able to fight and win a few rounds. He could feel his teacher's gaze on him. Maybe it had only been his imagination, boring a hole in his back. Taking a test had proven to be more difficult. He had studied for this since before the quirk accident, but he had had a hard time sorting his thoughts out and making sense of the questions he was being asked. He doesn't think he'll fail, not necessarily, but he doesn't believe he'll get a good grade either. With or without a quirk that keeps him from falling asleep on his own, Izuku still worries about school. When he's done with this quirk, it'll all be back to normal, and so he can't allow himself to fall behind. Kaken, maybe we should look over it again, Jay, just to make sure. No, it's fine as it is. The blonde took a pen and wrote little notes down on the paper sitting across the floor. The police could, and probably has by now, do all of this. The security cameras, finding clues, and, I don't know, but we don't have the upper hand here, Uraraka says. Todoroki stops writing his own notes on the sheet of paper across from him, the ink under the tip of his pen spreading. The police, he says just barely above a whisper. Kaminari sits up. Okay, I take it back. Bakugo, your plan can't be worse than whatever idea Todoroki just had. No, hear me out, the dual-haired teen says with a serious look, lifting his hands up as if to keep their attention. The police, they might already have all that information. If we could hack their system, it'd save us a lot of time. Yaoyorozu tilts her head. You want to hack the police? She gasps and puts a hand to her mouth. Wouldn't that be a crime? Surprisingly, it's Izuku who speaks up. Not if they don't find out. There are sheets of paper strewn all over Izuku's floor and bed. He and his friends are sitting awkwardly on the empty spots. Asui had brought them all dinner to eat in his room earlier tonight, telling the rest of their classmates they were studying. It's almost time for him to go meet MahouMou again tonight. It's become a routine at this point, but Izuku doesn't mind if it means he gets to sleep. Or well, he wishes he could have a night to himself, without a quirk helping him fall asleep, but he knows he can't. He stands up, his feet crumpling the corner of the lined sheet he had written on earlier that night. We should probably get going. To sleep, he says. It feels weird, saying he should leave his room. Oh, right, sorry about the mess we made. I didn't think. Yaoyorozu reaches for the closest sheet of paper in her reach. Izuku waves his hand in front of him. You can leave it like this. I am not sleeping here, anyways. He sees the crease between her eyebrows frown, and he speaks before she can open her mouth. In Recovery Girl's office. That's where I'm sleeping, for the meantime. The class's vice president smacks her forehead. I don't know how I forgot about this. Sorry, Midoriya. One by one, his friends shuffle clumsily around the papers plastered on the floor and out of his room. Izuku eyes Katsuki silently, eyeing the bottle of pills that he'd left on his bedside table. It's not hidden, but no one noticed it or commented on it. He hasn't touched it since Katsuki gave it to him, and it's exactly how he's left it. Knocked on the side, the light making the orange plastic reflect on the wood. His childhood friend understands his message and takes it subtly. Io, Bakugo, you coming? Kaminari asks from the doorway, waiting for him before going to the elevator. You go ahead, I'm going with Deku first. The electric teen gives him a thumbs up before leaving the two of them alone. Kaken, I can go by myself, Izuku says, rubbing the back of his neck and stepping to the side when Katsuki walks past him. He stops to look at Izuku, not saying anything, just staring. Either it's because he hasn't heard what Izuku has just said, or he chooses to ignore him, and it's most likely the latter. The freckled teen sighs and closes the door behind him. They make their way to the main building, talking quietly. They take the stairs up to the floor where MahouMou is. He realizes he doesn't know why Katsuki is coming along with him. He'll have to walk all the way back to Hyde Alliance by himself, and for what? Why'd you want to come with me, anyway? Izuku asks casually, though he really wants to know now. Katsuki shakes his head and clicks his tongue. I don't know. Just gotta see something for myself. He doesn't explain further, and he wouldn't be able to even if Izuku asked because they've finally arrived. He knocks once and opens the door, just like the last time. And just like yesterday, the only person in the room is MahouMou, though she's on the phone this time. She's sitting in the chair right by Izuku's bed. Well, not his bed, but it might as well be by now, exactly in the same place where it was this morning. She turns her head around and meets his eyes. Then Katsuki. She seems surprised to see the other teen, although his childhood friend had been there when Izuku had met her for the first time. She gives them a polite smile and cups the bottom part of her phone. Gotta go. I'll talk to you later, she says before hanging up. Midoriya, I didn't know you had a friend coming along with you. And no, Kaken was just walking me here. I see. She looks in the blonde's direction. I don't think we've met before. My name is Ayumu Miyako. Bakugo Katsuki, he replies bluntly. She smiles at him and gets to her feet, putting her phone in the back pockets of her jeans. Bakugo, she repeats almost to herself as if to memorize the name. You can wait here while I go get my things. I won't take long. She gestures to the chair she was just sitting in moments ago. As she draws closer to the door connecting the office to another small room, she looks at Izuku. And as always, make yourself comfortable, she says playfully. Katsuki sits down on the edge of the chair, looking over his shoulder while the green-haired teen removes his shoes. Ayumu comes back a few seconds later with a cone-shaped paper cup of water, like yesterday, and hands it to Izuku while setting down the same book she had this morning. I didn't think about bringing water for you. She makes eye contact with Katsuki whilst taking a step back and pointing towards the door she came out of. Do you want me to bring you some? Izuku can see his friend opening his mouth to refuse by the look on his face, but then he stops himself. Sure. She comes back again with 2 glasses of water. She hands one to Katsuki, takes a sip from her own, and then puts it down on the desk beside Izuku's bed. Once he's settled in the bed, Katsuki puts his now empty glass beside Ayumu's and pushes himself off the chair, wiping his hands on his thighs. I'll be there tomorrow morning. After saying goodbye to each other, Katsuki leaves the room. Izuku is now alone with the nurse. Doctor, what is she? And his fingers twitch unconsciously. He kind of wishes his childhood friend had stayed until he fell asleep. It's not that he doesn't trust Ayumu, it's just that sleeping puts him in a vulnerable position, and he can't wake up while under the effect of her quirk. It's nerve-wracking. He started associating this bed with sleeping, so now every time he gets under the covers, tiredness overwhelms his body. But even with that, he still has some questions he'd like to ask the woman who's been caring for him lately. She's settling down in her chair when Izuku debates whether he should say anything. Why your quirk? Slumber. I think it's really cool. I was just wondering how it, worked. He already regrets opening his mouth, but he can't just stop now. I like quirks a lot, he adds. She looks taken aback by this. Ayumu blinks and smiles at him. My quirk, she repeats, lifting a hand to her chin in thought. He nods. Well, when I have physical contact with someone, there's how to explain? A string that I can decide if I want to pull or not. It puts people in a dreamless sleep-like state until I release my hold. Izuku frowns, a bit confused. He hadn't seen it that way, but now he guesses it makes sense. Release your hold, she hums. It doesn't go away on its own. I have to undo it myself. Her eyes look distant. It could be a dangerous quirk in the wrong hands. She seems surprised by her own words. Every quirk is, Izuku says without thinking. But the opposite is also true. She blinks and then unexpectedly starts laughing. Sorry, she wipes the corner of her eye. I agree with you. It's just, you're still very optimistic despite the whole situation. I like that. Izuku feels his face heat up. Well, it's mainly thanks to you. I'm just doing my job, she tells him. Izuku remembers her saying the exact same thing to morning before. Speaking of which, I should really be putting you to sleep soon, otherwise you'll feel tired tomorrow. He doesn't want to bother her more than he already has, so simply nods. He feels exhausted, too. He hadn't noticed it before, but now that he's getting ready to rest, he feels just how heavy his limbs feel and how impatient he is to sleep. She touches his arm, just like she's done the previous nights. A few seconds pass and nothing happens. It's not working, he says, but it comes out more like a question. It takes more time to take effect when I use it on the same person multiple times, she explains. And yay, it makes sense. Every quirk has some kind of drawback or consequence, so this must be it. Izuku doesn't have time to say anything else before he falls asleep. Izuku wakes up the next day, and when he turns to Ayumu, he notices another figure behind her, sitting in a chair beside the door. Kaken. He's on his phone, sprawled out on the chair, one foot resting on his knee. He looks up at the mention of his name. Ayumu looks over her shoulder. He just arrived and I thought I'd wake you up, she explains. He's grateful. He wouldn't have wanted to keep Katsuki waiting for. Well, why was he here? Did they have something planned and Izuku forgot? Kaken, what are you doing here? It's Saturday. I told you I'd be here this morning. The blonde answers, as if that explained everything. Which it doesn't, and now Izuku is even more confused. It must show on his face because Katsuki clicks his tongue. We said we'd train. Train? Izuku doesn't remember that. Did they plan this yesterday? Earlier this week? Before he has the chance to open his mouth, Katsuki looks at Ayumu. You mind if I go get some water? He vaguely gestures to the door on the left with his head. He's already halfway there when the woman lets him. It takes him a moment, but then he realizes he didn't actually forget anything. There simply never was anything to remember. Katsuki made this up, then. Why is the question? Had something happened while he was sleeping? Did they need to leave? Now. He spends a minute or two going over the possible scenarios, but then Katsuki is back. He sits up abruptly, making his head spin, but he ignores it and puts his shoes on. Izuku isn't wearing a pajama. His clothes are comfortable enough for him to sleep in them. Plus, he would be lying if he said he wasn't a little bit embarrassed at the idea of someone else, especially an adult, seeing him dressed like that. It just doesn't feel right. He feels bad for rushing out the door again today, not taking the time to properly thank MahouMou, instead just waving his hand. Once they're alone in the hallway, Izuku struggles to catch up to Katsuki while trying to put on his other shoe. Kaken, did something happen? Quit worrying, nothing happened. Izuku frowns. What? Then why'd you say we had training? Katsuki purses his lips. I found something. He looks around him as if he were being watched. I can't tell you here. It's irritating, frustrating, and Izuku has to calm himself before doing something he'll regret. He considers himself rather patient, but after having been woken up so early in the morning and then quickly forced out of bed, he thinks he has the right to feel annoyed. Once they're outside, the wind hits Izuku's face, making his eyes water. So, he asks, a little impatient. Katsuki had thought something seemed off about MahouMou from the moment he first heard about her. He wonders how they've managed to find her. If it was just pure luck. He'd learn later that she worked in Tokyo's Central Hospital, and that it was Recovery Girl who'd found her. If all they had needed was someone to put Deku to sleep, why make someone come all the way from Tokyo when they already had midnight? She could put people to sleep instantly, too. And so, Katsuki had decided to investigate himself. He'd stayed behind in their modern hero art history class and had gone up to his teacher. Bakugo, did you need help with anything? She'd given him a soft smile. Why didn't Recovery Girl ask you to help Deku? She blinked and her eyes softened. Ah, you mean Midoriya. Midnight had turned on her office chair to face him. She did ask me. I refused. Katsuki thought it'd be stupid if the school had needed to call someone from another city just because the hero had said no. You know how the quirk affecting Midoriya works? She had asked him, ignoring his rude tone. He hadn't said anything then, and she must have assumed his lack of answer meant no. She had leaned forward in her seat like she was talking to a child. I don't either. Not exactly, at least. Since we don't know whose quirk it is, it's hard to guess, but we assumed it was something keeping Midoriya from falling asleep or being unconscious. Kind of like the opposite of a coma. Katsuki had put his hands in his pocket, hiding his clenched fist. And that quirk of yours couldn't solve that. She shook her head and snorted, but he could tell she was upset about the situation. My quirk is able to make people feel tired to the point of falling asleep, but it works better on some people than others. If I'd used it on Midoriya, the exhaustion, or so I assume that's what he felt, would have been unbearable. But even then he wouldn't have fallen asleep. It's the best theory we have, and the only one. I didn't want to take the risk. Fortunately, they found someone else who would be able to help him. It made sense, but he still hadn't understood how MahouMou's quirk was different from his teacher's. As if she had heard his thought, she continued talking. I was curious, too, so I went to check with Recovery Girl to make sure it was completely safe. She stopped, glanced at the empty desks, and then said in a low tone, I don't think I'm supposed to be telling you details on her quirk, so don't go repeating that to your friends or anyone. Confidential information and all. This perked Katsuki's interest and he nodded. The woman, I think her name is MahouMou, explained it to me herself. Instead of making people feel tired, her quirk basically lets her skip the step of falling asleep and instantly goes to the first stage of sleep and stays there until she turns it off. She had then slumped back in her chair. He had muttered small thanks and turned around to leave, but then Midnight had called out his name. Bakugo, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish. The look on her face had been serious, her eyebrows drawn together. Just don't do anything stupid. If someone asks, we've never had this conversation. The corner of his mouth had turned up, and he had left without saying a thing. Now he and Deku are walking outside, heading to the dorms. Katsuki doesn't reply right away. And it seems to be the wrong thing to do because after a moment, the green-haired teen steps in front of him and blocks his way. So, he repeats, are you going to tell me or just keep ignoring me? The hell's wrong with you? Katsuki retorts. He scoffs. What's wrong with me? Katsuki watches as Deku looks around them and laughs while passing a hand through his hair. You woke me up just to do what? Not answer my questions. He's never seen his childhood friend mad like this. He stares at him, and then he realizes it's not anger behind those watery eyes. Deku blinks and shakes his head. Before he can open his mouth, Katsuki decides to speak up. It's about MahouMou, he says. Deku stills for a moment before softening his voice. What do you mean? He hadn't been supposed to say anything, but he knows the other teen will be annoying him the whole way back. He walks past Deku, had some suspicions about her for a while. He says when he hears footsteps following behind him. Thought it was weird how they found the right quirk to help you so quickly. Katsuki guesses the silence that follows means Deku is listening. The idiot should be waiting in your room by now, so I'll tell everyone then. He can tell Deku is trying really hard not to ask anything else, biting his lip. Katsuki isn't sure whether the whole situation just got easier or more difficult, but he figures they'll find out soon enough. Every pair of eyes in the room turns to them the moment they open the door. The moment Izuku steps inside the room, he wants to take Katsuki by the shoulders, sit him down and force him to tell him what's going on. He tells himself to calm down, that he's overreacting, but his heart is beating fast and he thinks he'll snap any moment now. Yaoyorozu sits legs crossed on the floor, passing her fingers through her hair. She yawns before tilting her head to Katsuki. Why did you want to meet up so early? Everyone looks worn out, as they just got out of bed, which they did. The most put together in the room is Katsuki, by the way he stands and moves, or at least, that's what he thinks. But when a second later he catches a glimpse of his friend's eyes, he wonders if maybe Katsuki is the most tired of them all. He points at Izuku with his head. Something's not right about the woman using her quirk on Deku to let him sleep, he says bluntly as he walks to the balcony doors. I've been thinking for a while. He lets his shoulder rest on the window door. There's no way it'd be that fucking simple, finding a counter quirk. You think MahouMou's really to blame for this? Izuku asks barely above a whisper. Katsuki turns back to him, breaking out of his thoughts. Maybe not to blame, but she's definitely got something to do with it. Uraraka straightens up from her place, frowning. We finally find some kind of solution to help Deku-kun and you just accuse that person to be a villain. You don't even have any proof. She sounds confused and upset. And honestly, Izuku feels the same. He'd only just met MahouMou, but he already trusted her. He wanted to reject anything Katsuki would have to say about her, but a more rational part of him knew what Katsuki said made sense. He had noticed the way she phrased her words, and her small habits too, but he had chosen to ignore them. I do have proof, he retorts. Kind of, anyway. What do you mean kind of? Ribitasui asks, looking at Uraraka sideways. I thought it was weird how they found her so quickly. So, he's speaking to everyone in the room but his eyes are looking at Izuku. I went to see for myself yesterday. Denki snaps his fingers and points at Katsuki. That's where you went yesterday. What did you find? Izuku almost startles at the sound of Todoroki's voice on his right. Deku, did she give you something to drink before sleeping? Izuku is taken aback by this. What? Yeah, water yesterday and the day before, but he licks his lips, now suddenly dry. What does this have to do with anything? Now that Katsuki's spoken up, anxiety starts to bubble in his chest. He doesn't know what his childhood friend is thinking, but he doesn't think it can be anything good. You think she put something in his glass? Uraraka asks, putting a hand over her mouth and glancing at him. Katsuki is still looking at him intensively. You remember how she brought one for me too, yesterday? He says, took a glass instead of one like you. Izuku doesn't miss the slight tremble in Katsuki's voice, as if he didn't want to be right, which is unusual, enough for it to catch the freckled teen off guard. The paper cup, right. The white cones. He feels the blood drain from his face, the realization of what the blonde is implying. The kind you can't put down until you've drank everything, Yaoyorozu says in a low voice. Shit, Denki laughs humorlessly. Todoroki turns to him, worry evident in his eyes. Midoriya, are you feeling unwell? I'm fine. I am not feeling any different, he reassures them. Not poison then. Maybe, ribbit. How can we be sure? There's no fucking poison. Katsuki shouts. When I went to check where she'd made his water this morning, I found this. He reached into his pocket and takes out a transparent bottle of white pills. I didn't have a lot of time, but they were the only ones out of place, so it was my best bet. He turns to Uraraka, crossing his arms. So, that good enough proof for you, round face? I guess you're right. She sighs. But what now? Even if we know who she is, we can't do much about it. Katsuki pushes himself off the glass door and sits down a few steps from where he had been standing a moment ago. Yeah, about that. I couldn't find shit about her. It's all classified or something. They stay like that, trying to figure out what to do. He tells them her name and they do their own small investigation but end up at the exact same place. It's meaning most people will sleep in. They don't have to worry about time, but more about their classmates noticing their absence eventually if they took too long. Denki is lying on his back when he abruptly sits up. Oh my god, I have an idea. He almost slips on some sheets of paper on his way to the door, closing it behind him. They stare at the spot where the electric student had been, wondering what exactly just happened. A few minutes later, there's a knock on the door. The first thing they see is Denki, as expected, and then someone else right behind him. Izuku watches as Kaminari steps to the side. He puts one arm up and the other down, framing the new arrival. He lets out an unsure ta-da and everyone just stares. What the hell's going on here? Gyro says, stunned. It takes a moment for everyone to reply, still unaware of what Kaminari's idea is. When you said you had an idea, I didn't think you meant blowing our cover, Katsuki scowls. The air gets very uncomfortable, very quickly. Gyro sighs and pinches the bridge of her nose. I had my suspicions you guys were up to something, acting all weird and secretive. Todoroki looks down, looking genuinely upset. I thought we were subtle. She snorts and shakes her head. It's fine, she reassures them. I'm not gonna tell on you guys. Most of the tension in the room washes away at this. No one speaks. Instead, they all look at Kaminari expectantly. It takes a few seconds before the blonde understands they're waiting for him to say something. Well, you know, we couldn't really find anything on MahouMou. And Gyro's the best person I know for this kind of thing. He gestures to her. She's super good at hacking stuff. One time she even... Gyro sticks one of her earphone jacks in his ear. Don't bring that up. She looks to the side, her cheeks red. Yaoyorozu fidgets in her place. Do you think you could help us? Gyro turns to her and glances at Kaminari. Well, Kaminari didn't explain what he needed me for, but I can try. She pulls out her laptop from her bag and Izuku gets up from his chair to let her sit at his desk. The action makes his head spin and he grabs the back of the chair for support. No one comments on it though, because it looks like he's just holding the seat for Gyro. Midoriya, do you want to sit down? Asui asks, and Izuku thinks, so they did notice. He reassures her he's fine and they don't push it. Izuku doesn't know how he'll thank everyone once this is over. Well, that's only if they manage to figure it out, but he doesn't want to think about what's going to happen to him if they fail. Gyro takes his chair and opens her laptop. Alright, so, MahouMou Miyako, Katsuki tells her, works at Tokyo's Central Hospital. She nods and turns back to the screen. Izuku looks over Gyro's shoulder to see her open a bunch of different tabs and other programs he doesn't recognize. She works fast, but he knows it might take a while anyway. He hears Uraraka and Katsuki argue with each other, and when he turns around he sees them pointing and showing their phones. Katsuki holds up the bottle of pills in his other hand. It doesn't fucking look like the picture at all. It's written right here. For fuck's sake, what's wrong? Izuku asks, cutting them off. His childhood friend clicks his tongue and shows an article on his phone about some unrelated medication. The freckled teen looks at the picture on the screen and then at the bottle in Katsuki's hand. They're not the same thing, obviously. The ones in the blonde's hand are round and white whereas those in the pictures are two colored capsules. He frowns. See, even the nerd gets it, Katsuki says, glaring at Uraraka. Well, I don't know. She throws her hands in the air. Read the label. Their fight starts to get a little out of hand, catching the attention of the other students in the room. If you talk too loudly you'll wake everyone else. Ribbit, Asui says from behind Izuku, startling him when he notices how close she is. Can I see? Katsuki hands her the bottle and she turns it around, inspecting the label. She opens the lids and lets a few pills fall into her palm. She takes one between her thumb and index. They look familiar. No shit, Katsuki scoffs. They're the plainest pills ever. It could be 1,000 things. She shakes her head, immune to the teen's rude tone. No, look, she points to the center of the pill where the faint silhouette of a carved star sits. My mom used to take these for a little while when I was younger to sleep. She breaks the pill in half, and Uraraka lifts her hand about to protest when she sees the glitter powder hit the inside of Asui's palm. She smiles as if having expected it to happen. She'd put it in water and then it would dissolve, making the liquid sparkle. She tosses the shimmering dust around with her finger. From his spot, Izuku can now see that the pill is actually hollow, and the outside layer is actually quite thin. I didn't know what it was or did back then, so one time I got curious and drank my mom's glass when she wasn't looking. She found me right before I dropped on the floor, just a few minutes after I'd drowned the whole thing. Asui chuckles a little. You remember what they're called? Katsuki asks, and Izuku hears something like relief in his voice. She tells them that no, she never got the name, but that she'll text her mother to ask. They have an answer within minutes, and they start their research right away. Why would MahouMou need pills like that for? Uraraka asks, a frown on her face. I mean, they're not to be used in the long term, to not get addicted, so, unless she is addicted. Kaminari offers from the other side of the room, having listened to their conversation. I don't think that's it. Izuku says carefully, she didn't sleep when she was with me. Or, well, I don't think she did. She was always in the same spot when I fell asleep and woke up, and she'd bring things to pass the time, like a book or something. He swallowed. It's nothing concrete, though. Just a hunch. Asui hums. And Midoriya didn't drop on the floor like I did. She turns to him, did you? He shakes his head. Katsuki slides his hand down his face. He wouldn't need to. She always uses her quirk right away before he has a chance to. Izuku looks at him with a questioning look. Is stayed behind the door or recovery girl's office yesterday for a while, but I didn't hear anything after she used her quirk on you. Izuku hadn't thought about it before, but now he's very much aware of the fact that someone had put something in his drink without him knowing. At this rate, he'll die before he has the chance to graduate. At first, this whole investigation thing with his friends had sounded thrilling, exciting, even. Now he just wants it to be over soon. He wants to sleep in his own bed, without someone trying to drug him for who knows why. If she wanted him to sleep, why not just use her quirk? Asui asks, placing a finger on her chin. Izuku is confused as well, and he doesn't know what to say. Fortunately, he doesn't have to. Gyro speaks up, getting their attention. Found her profile. Already, Yaoyorozu says, a smile forming on her face. They approach the desk, crowding the space. Ayumu Miyako is written in big, and right beside it Izuku sees a picture showing a clear shot of Ayumu's face. Is that who you're looking for? Gyro asks. Izuku gives her a slight nod before realizing she can't see him and says yes. She scrolls down a bit for them to read the information, which there's very little of. Izuku doesn't know what he's expecting to find, what they're hoping to see. The silence is tense as if they were all waiting for something. Maybe something to confirm everything they've been thinking about lately, like some bold red letters that would say villain or wanted. Would it make things easier or worse? The name of her quirk is there, but it doesn't provide any new information. Hold on, Todoroki says and gestures to the top of the screen. Scroll back up. Gyro does, but it turns out to be nothing. They do this again for a couple of minutes, pointing out things or words that catch their attention only for it to be useless. Fuck, alright, this isn't gonna work, Katsuki says, gripping the side of the desk with both of his hands. I have to agree with Bakugo, Uraraka says, visibly upset by the statement. Izuku can't tell whether it's because they can't find anything or because she's on Katsuki's side. Gyro leans back in her chair, drumming the tip of her fingers on the side of her laptop. Sorry, I couldn't help you out more. Oh no, you did really great, Gyro. Yaoyorozu reassures her. Well, now you guys don't have much to work with, right? No one answers. It's true, they didn't learn anything new, or anything that could help them. Why don't we just ask her? Kaminari says. Everyone turns to him with mixed emotions plastered on their faces. We're not just going to walk up to her and ask if she has something to do with it, Dun's face. Katsuki responds bluntly. No, wait, Kaminari might have a point. Izuku is surprised to hear this from Yaoyorozu. He loves his friends, but he doesn't think Kaminari's idea is good. Hear me out. She lifts her hands. If we can convince her we've already figured out everything. She might tell us some things, Izuku finishes, and Yaoyorozu nods. He doesn't think it'll work, but another voice in his head tells him it might. Izuku doesn't know how much time they have left, if any, to figure this out. What other options do they have? The wind brushes against Izuku's cheeks, but the comfort it brings isn't enough to ease the growing anxiety inside of him. They had spent the rest of the day planning exactly what they were going to do and say and how. It's just him and Katsuki for now, to not be suspicious, but now Izuku wonders if they already are, or if Ayumu thinks so. Someone had brought up the possibility that the woman didn't actually have anything to do with the quirk incident. Izuku doesn't want to admit it, but he kind of hopes Ayumu is involved. He needs someone to blame, and Aizawa hasn't given him any updates on the police's search. He's scared he'll mess everything up. Relax. His head snaps to look at his childhood friend. Katsuki doesn't turn to him, instead, keeping his gaze focused on the path ahead of them. He looks confident, but Izuku can tell he's nervous too. Eventually, they arrive at the main door of the school. No one is there, it's too late, and it's Sare. They walk slowly, or more like Katsuki walks slowly, and Izuku follows. He doesn't mind. They're on a call with the others back in the dorms, but his friends have muted themselves. They had figured it would make things easier, that the other students would be able to step in if necessary, or hopefully just follow the information. They stand in front of Recovery Girl's office door before they know it, and neither one of them raises their hand to knock or reach for the doorknob. Izuku clears his throat and passes his arm in front of Katsuki, knocking twice and opening the door. The air is awfully uncomfortable, and Izuku wonders if they came too early. He opens the door further and the lamp turns on, the warm light contrasting the bleak room. Midoriya, sorry, the place is a mess, I just arrived, Ayumu says, turning her face to look at them. Her gaze settles on Katsuki. And Bakugo, glad to see you again. It's alright, Izuku can't help but say. It's so normal. She doesn't look like those villains he's fought before, with their fancy costumes and monologues. Looking at Ayumu with her back turned to them makes him realize she looks just like any civilian he would cross on the street. He glances at Katsuki sideways, and he can tell he's thinking the same thing. Izuku wonders if maybe they've been wrong. Well, come on in, I don't bite, she laughs. They'd been standing in the doorway for a few seconds now, and so Izuku is the first to step inside the room. He walks up to the bed like he always does, where Ayumu is still settling her things. She's looking through her small bag, taking out things and putting them back in. Instead of taking off his shoes, Izuku looks over his shoulder at Katsuki, who had stayed closer to the door. This what you're looking for? Katsuki holds up the transparent pill bottle in his hand, not handing it out to her but simply showing it. Izuku can see the exact moment Ayumu can connect the dots when she realizes they're her pills. She smiles shakily. Where did you find this? She takes a step forward to Katsuki, and he pushes his hand back. Her eyes flicker between him and Izuku. She looks horrified even though she's trying to stay calm. Found them yesterday in there. Katsuki vaguely gestures to the door leading to the attached room. She turns her head and stares at the door, gaping, without saying a word. Behind those blue irises, Izuku thinks he can make out something else behind those icy blue irises. Something like betrayal. That doesn't make any sense. She's the one working against them. It catches him off guard, and he thinks maybe it's a trick. He doesn't trust her anymore, and admitting it pains him. He thought she had saved him, but had she? MahouMou, he starts softly, and she turns her head to look at him. We know everything about the pills you put in my drink and your quirk. We know you're involved, somehow, in this whole thing. It's not much, and he was supposed to say more, but his mouth is dry. It feels as if he's turning on someone he trusts, had trusted. His heart is beating fast, and he has half a mind to put a hand on his chest to cover the noise, wondering if she can hear it. Izuku expects a fight, maybe, or MahouMou trying to make a beeline to the door. What he doesn't expect is for her to drop to her knees, her gaze empty if not for the faint glint of water building up in the corner of her eyes. A tear falls, and then she starts crying silently. Izuku has to stop himself from catching her, his hand twitching. I wasn't supposed to be here, she mutters under her breath. Izuku glances at Katsuki and sees him looking right at him, with the same confused expression plastered on his face. I was supposed to leave, she says louder this time, her voice cracking. He called me and asked me to help him, but I didn't know how. Who's he? Katsuki draws closer to them, probably understanding she has no intention of trying to leave or fight them. It's my brother. It's not his fault. He's not well. Please. Tears roll down her cheeks. Save him. I can't leave him. You're heroes, right? You could. She trails off, pressing the heel of her palms to her eyes. It's ironic how she's asking for them to help someone else when she looks like she needs it the most. Izuku realizes there might be more to the whole quirk incident than he had originally thought. That, maybe, this whole thing doesn't revolve around him. Izuku crouches down beside her hunched form. We'll help him, he says, because that's what she needs to hear, and because he knows that's what they need to do. But you need to tell us a little more. He said he had no other choice. Do you know where he is? She nods and holds her breath, then exhales. Yes, she wipes her eyes with her forearm. He has an apartment not too far from here. Both teens know this is as clear of an answer they'll get. And fortunately for them, she reaches for her bag and takes out a piece of paper and a pen, scribbling down something and handing it to Izuku. Wait, she doesn't let go of the paper as Izuku takes it. Let me come with you. Katsuki opens his mouth to protest, but she cuts him off. Maybe he'll listen to me if you're there. There's no way. Kaken, Izuku interrupts. It's okay, she's got a point. He might not want help from two random heroes in training. Please, she whispers, he needs help. Katsuki scowls, but agrees as long as she stays out of their way if something were to happen. She gives them a wobbly smile and nods. We'll save him, Izuku says, and he means it. They're one step closer to finding who's behind all of this. He wonders if they've blackmailed MahouMou's brother into doing this, and what was their goal? Is there actually anything behind this? Was Izuku simply at the wrong place at the wrong time? He wants things to go back to normal, because although it's only been a week, Izuku has never felt more exhausted in his entire life. He doesn't think he would be able to endure it for another week. It's not that wants to give up, he has hope now, but he believes he would if it lasted a bit too long. He sees no point in living a life where his all means being worn out after running for a few minutes or losing his focus at the slightest sound. He lets himself hope one last time. Izuku puts his chin in his jacket, trying to warm himself. He wishes he would have put on something thicker, not having thought about staying out so long, the cool breeze brushing his face. They're on the phone with Gyro and the others. They're trying to find a way to hack into the school system and give them permission to leave, as to not alert the teachers. Aizawa had refused to sign the paper slip, so this was their only way. MahouMou doesn't need anything, though. She already has her own card, and since she currently works at school, she can come and go whenever she feels like it. There's excited laughter on the other end. I got it. You guys should be able to leave school grounds, Gyro says. And so, he, Katsuki, and MahouMou take their leave. Izuku can't help but squeeze his eyes shut as they exit the gate, scared it might close on them. But to everyone's relief, it doesn't. They walk outside. The two childhood friends fall into steps, following behind MahouMou who's leading the way. Eventually, they arrive in front of a poorly maintained apartment building. Izuku is skeptical this is the right place. He thinks maybe MahouMou might just be stopping for a minute, looking around, but then she heads for the main entrance. She pulls the door open and holds it for them. Izuku hesitates before entering, but the tips of his fingers are freezing and he wouldn't mind some heat. He glances at Katsuki and they both enter. The woman closes the door behind them before passing past the two teenagers. The air is still just as cold inside, so it does nothing to help the shivers going through Izuku. MahouMou stops halfway through the corridor. She doesn't make any move to reach for the handle. Instead, she turns back at them. Katsuki clicks his tongue. He grabs the doorknob, and MahouMou takes a step back. And then, he opens the door. Shouta is sitting at his desk grading some papers when his phone starts ringing. He flips it over to look at who's calling him, though he already has a pretty good idea by now. Sukachi, he greets, after having visited the address the detective had given him. They hadn't been able to find any new information. They couldn't secure or bring anyone to search the place. Shouta had gone without a warrant. Not that he needed one, really. Quirk use for criminal intent was a serious crime, and it wasn't treated lightly. Still, they couldn't afford to bring any attention to themselves. The less the villain knew about them, the better. He had stayed inside the apartment looking for anything that could be useful. He had hoped maybe the guy would show up eventually, or anyone at all, but no one did. He had left after an hour or so, but not before finding multiple pictures of his student, Midoriya. Some had obviously been taken during the sports festival, but others were from when he had gone outside of school grounds, been with his friends, or by himself. It was very concerning, and he had wondered for how long this had been going on. Aizawa, sorry for not calling you sooner, the man said on the other end. There's something that's not right with this guy. Oh yeah, about that, Shouta interrupts him. What's his name? You never told me. Shouta feels kind of stupid for not asking earlier, but he hadn't given it much thought before. It had been irrelevant, but he couldn't know when he would need it. I don't remember by heart. You something, I think. Let me check. He can hear some typing on the other line, and then Sukachi speaks again. Ayumu Yukio. Time stops for Shouta. He knows it's not uncommon for people to have the same last name while not necessarily being close relatives, but this can't be a coincidence. Ayumu Miyako and Yukio both have very similar quirks that have something to do with sleep, and he guesses they're both around the same age. He should have seen this coming. He didn't even question the fact they'd found someone to help Midoriya so quickly, didn't think it was suspicious. Midoriya, I have to go. Wait, Aizawa, this guy he's... Shouta hangs up before the detective has a chance to finish his sentence. This can wait. His student, the one he was supposed to protect, might be in danger right now. He grabs his capture weapon before leaving and heads for the dorms first since they're closer to where he currently is than Recovery Girl's office. He slams the door open, startling a few students in the common room. It's not late enough for them to be asleep, so some of them just give him questioning looks. Has anyone seen Midoriya? He asks, a little frantic. They all look at each other, no one uttering a single word, shaking their heads. Shouta curses under his breath and speed walks to the stairs. He skips a few stairs and soon he reaches the second floor. Shouta fumbles in his pocket, searching for his key to everyone's rooms. As he goes to put it in the lock, he finds the door not completely shut. The pro hero pushes the door quickly, his heart racing. And then, he sees paper everywhere, plastered on the floor and stuck to the wall. It's organized in a messy way, and he can see they've been placed there with care. He moves forward and takes the first sheet in front of him. There are a bunch of different handwritings everywhere, words crossed out, and arrows pointing to different parts. It's about the quirk affecting Midoriya, theories, and facts. He reaches for another one. Half of the page has been scribbled over, but he can still make out most of it. It doesn't take him much time before he realizes it's about the paper slip they had asked him about, the one he refused to sign. The more he reads, the more he understands how much he'd underestimated his students could do. They'd figured out most of what he and Sukachi had found, if not more. He regrets not hearing them out, not signing the paper. At least then he would have been able to know more about their plan, and maybe help them. They would have done it with or without his help, had done it, so he might as well have helped them. They left. Shouta snaps his head to look at the person behind him, his eyes glowing. Gyro stands in the doorway, not seeming fazed by his quirk. She takes a step forward and stands beside him, her gaze fixed on the papers on the floor. Where are they? He asks. He knows his students haven't been kidnapped or anything like that, but he doesn't know if they're safe or where they are. They could be injured right now, and he wouldn't know. You know, it's kind of your fault, she tells him. He purses his lips. Shouta already knows it is. Part of it, at least. Though he doesn't have time to beat himself up over losing his students, he needs to find them. Gyro. He stands on his feet and puts his hands on her shoulders, lowering his neck to look her in the eyes. They could be in danger right now. She looks conflicted, as if deciding whether to tell him or not. They've already found him. Who? Ayumu's brother. She frowns. You didn't know. I just learned. That's why I'm here. He pauses. Please, I need to make sure they're safe. He's aware he's lost his students' trust because of this. He hadn't listened to them, and he had taken too long to figure this case out. He had barely checked on Midoriya to see how he was doing. She looks down. Midoriya and Bakugo went with Ayumu to her brother's apartment. She pulls out her phone. The others are following close behind. She shows him a map with colored dots on it. Their localizations. He wonders how they managed to leave without setting the alarms off. UAS security system was basically impossible to break or hack. As if reading his thoughts, Gyro speaks up. I helped them leave about half an hour ago, she says. Will they be in trouble? Looking at her now, Shouta thinks she looks so small and young, like a child that's about to be grounded. We'll see about that later. She shares their localization with him, and then he sprints off. He runs all the way to his car, because he doesn't know what his students are thinking. He did read a few of the papers they'd written and left on the floor, but it wasn't enough to figure out their exact plan. Shouta hopes he makes it on time, before something else happens, before it's too late. He goes past a red light and then tells himself he needs to relax, or else it'll take even more time. He grips the wheel harder, frustrated he's not there yet even though he's only left a few minutes ago. What's the worst that could happen in 30 minutes? Too much, and Shouta doesn't want to think about it. He startles when his phone starts ringing, the screen of the car lighting up. Sukachi Naomasa, it reads. He extends his arm to click on the green button to answer the call. Aizawa, why did you hang up on me? I've been trying to call you. I found him. Shouta cuts him off, his eyes fixed on the road. A second passes where the detective doesn't reply. What? Him. The guy. He hums. I'm heading there right now. My students found him. They'd been investigating without me knowing. They're with his sister, Ayumu Miyako. I don't know what she has in mind, but it can't be good. Damn, can't believe some kids beat us to it. Yeah, Shouta lets out a tired laugh. He presses on the gas pedal a little harder. Listen, you might want to send for backup already. Things could get ugly. Sure, I don't think you'll need it though. Shouta frowns. What do you mean? The apartment is dark, the only source of light being the moonlight seeping through the broken blinds. Izuku wonders if they should leave, but he can't take his eyes off the trashed room. Ayumu pushes past them, even though she'd been the one too anxious to open the door. Yukio, she shouts, her voice too loud for the heavy silence. It's me, I brought help. Still, no replies. She reaches for something behind the coats hung up on the wall and then the lights turn on. She walks in, unbothered by the mess covering every surface in the place. They step inside, the air thick and uncomfortable. Izuku hears something fall in another room, his head turning in direction of the sound. A door on the left swings open and a man stands in the doorframe. Yukio, it's the same man Izuku had run into at the convenience store. He looks more surprised to see them than in need of help. Miyako, he says, I didn't know you were coming. His gaze flickers to both teens. This doesn't feel like a rescue mission, like when Izuku had saved Uri or Katsuki. No, this feels like intruding inside someone's home uninvited. I'm sorry, I don't have time. He's talking to Ayumu, Miyako, but he's staring at Izuku. Yukio turns around and walks back into the room, leaving the door open. What? Why? Miyako replies, a crease between her brows. He comes back out a second later, carrying a sports bag in his hands. He stuffs some things laying around the apartment inside. Clothes, books, papers. I'm leaving. Starting a new life. You can't just leave. There's a child under your quirk. And you told me to take care of it until you figured it out. She gestures at Izuku, who's still standing beside Katsuki, feeling so small. He walks up to the freckled teen, his voice too close for comfort. And Izuku has to stop himself from taking a step back. I don't know who you are, or your friend there. He points at Katsuki, or what makes you so special. But I made a deal. He shrugs and backs away a little. Your life, for my life. The fuck does that mean? Katsuki places his arm in front of him protectively. Izuku wants to tell him he doesn't need him to protect him, that he can defend himself. But the words die away on his lips, and he can't move a muscle. They were supposed to help this man, or so he'd managed to convince himself of that an hour ago. If they had no one to save, then it meant Izuku had no one to help him get rid of this quirk. Miyako takes a step in his brother's direction. No, it's someone's forcing you, just tell me who. And then more quietly, please, talk to me. There's no one forcing me to do anything. He replies bluntly, and then he shakes his head and starts laughing. Of course, of fucking course. The one time I ask you to do something for me, you go and find a way to mess it up. You don't mean that, she counters weakly. The hurt on her face is obvious even though she's trying to hide it. Oh, I do way more than you think. And Izuku stands there, still. He wonders if this had been a bad idea. It probably was, but it's the only one they had. He should move, do something, anything. Maybe talk to them, would that work? He doesn't think so. A heavy silence settles in the room, and a few moments pass where no one speaks, and then the man turns to him. It's sleep you want, right? The teen wonders if the question is tricked, if he should answer no. But he nods anyway, because he's tired and he wants to leave. Yukio gestures for him to come near him. Izuku hesitates. His eyes flicker to Katsuki for a split second before he takes a step forward, pushing past the blonde's arm. He feels like a child in a room full of adults, out of place and unwelcomed. The man holds out his hand and Izuku understands he's waiting for him to reach out his as well. Everything happens so fast. Yukio grabs the teen's arm and twists it before forcing it behind his back, making him turn around and stand straight. He hears Miyako gasp and Katsuki curse in the background. Izuku knows this technique, knows how to get out of it. He doesn't lose time beating himself up over the fact he had fallen for this in the first place. Instead, he gets ready to activate his quirk and throw the man off of him. But then he feels something cold press against his head, and he hears a click. His breath catches in his throat, and he freezes. It's all too similar to the time Shigaraki had found him at the mall. He feels pathetic. How can he ever hope to become a hero like this? Yukio, the woman's voice is shaking. Let's talk this out. No, he shouts, and Izuku is scared he might press on the trigger if anyone else says another word. No, now you listen to me. His eyes meet Katsuki's. He gives him a serious look as if telling him to stay put and not do anything. The blonde frowns and opens his mouth to protest. But Izuku shakes his head slightly. It's barely noticeable, but he knows his childhood friend doesn't miss it, and so he stays silent. What's your quirk, kid? He pushes the gun harder against Izuku's head, making it turn on the side a bit. Super strength, he whispers. Yukio chuckles. You got lucky. Not everyone has your chance, you know. Izuku nods without meaning to. He knows he's been lucky, more than anyone else. But he guesses this is the price to pay for such a blessing. He thinks it's fair. Tears well up in his eyes, and he shuts them close. Not now, he tells himself. He has to stay strong. Oh well, quirks are all just curses in the end, he says. Miyako holds her hands up. Please, you don't have to do this. You don't understand. He sounds nervous, as if hearing his sister's voice made something churn in him. You never had the chance to. She draws a sharp breath. We're twins, do you know that? A hollow laugh escaping his mouth. Izuku isn't sure to who the question is directed to. Him, perhaps, or Katsuki, or both. We've got counter quirks, basically two opposites. Izuku has heard of those before. Sometimes twins would grow to develop the same quirk, or in less common cases, two different ones. Quirks able to cancel each other out, he mumbles. I see you're already familiar with the term, but yes, basically. Think of it as me being caffeine and Miyako some strong sleeping pills. It'd be fine if it ended at that, but it doesn't. The woman clenches her fists and lets them fall to her side, pursing her lips together. We give our quirks. She can't sleep while using hers. As for me, I can't sleep unless I'm using it. Yukio remembers the day he got his quirk. He was around 5 years old when he used it on his father without meaning to. The man had gone 2 full nights without getting any rest before he realized it was his son's fault. They were a wealthy family. Both his parents had minor quirks related to sleep, and his sister had figured hers out a few days before him. And then a party was thrown to celebrate the 2 siblings' new quirks. Oh, little Miyako. What a wonderful quirk that is. You'll be able to help many people with it. Do you want to be a hero? People had praised his sister before giving him pitying smiles and leaving. He could hear the hushed voice talking behind him, even though they knew he was there. How could a child understand the meaning of their words, anyway? In reality, he knows they were scared of them both. Of brushing against their skin and falling to the floor instantly, or not being able to close their eyes for weeks. It never happened, though. The only victims of their quirks were themselves. Yukio remembers going into his parents' bedroom, crying that he couldn't sleep, and them brushing him off, telling him to just go back to bed. He had run to his sister's bed and sobbed his heart out, telling her how much he hated his quirk, how he wished he had gotten hers instead. She had tried to put him to sleep, to no avail. His quirk blocked hers, and vice versa. She had stayed up all night with him, powerless to her brother's misfortune. What are children to do in this situation? The next morning, Miyako had brought up the issue during breakfast. Their parents had listened and agreed to go see a quirk specialist. That's when they learned about true counter quirks. It was extremely rare to see it happen in 2 unrelated individuals. Of course, some quirks could cancel other quirks, but these worked both ways. The doctor told them that, unfortunately, there was nothing they could do to help their son. He suggested he be put on quirk suppressants until they found a better solution. At first, his parents wanted none of it, but after many sleepless nights from their child, they gave in. Yukio had learned at a young age he wasn't like other kids his age, like his sister. She could live her life normally, with her amazing quirk. He saw him as a curse. They never found a better solution. Not his parents, or all those quirk specialists. He would have to wear an ugly bracelet at night, one that made his skin itchy and his stomach sick. By the time he entered junior high, he had worn the bracelet for too long. It was designed only for small children who had a hard time learning to control their quirks, not for teenagers. He doesn't know when it started, but at some point, he began using his quirk on his classmates, or teachers, people he would see every day. He would sleep soundly on those nights, and then the next morning his hand would brush against theirs and he would take it back. He felt guilty at first, but they only had to endure one sleepless night, while he would have to do it his whole life. No one knew what he did, though thinking back on it now his parents probably did, but chose not to say anything. They had given up on him a long time ago. Yukio, let's save people. Together, his sister had told him one day. She was sprawled out on his bed late at night while he sat on the floor. They needed to choose the place they would go study soon, but was there anywhere meant for someone like him? He scoffed. His sister had always been full of hopes and dreams, unrealistic. You know I can't be a hero with you, he told her, his eyes glued to the screen of the laptop sitting on his lap. No, I don't mean being heroes. She rolled on her stomach to look at him in the eyes. He frowned and gave her a questioning look. He had always thought his sister wanted to become a hero, never questioned it. It's what people had always expected of her, just like they had done with him. "Let's become paramedics," she said excitedly. He closed his laptop slowly and opened his mouth to ask her why, but she was faster than him and continued. "I've been thinking about this a lot lately," she explained. "It doesn't have to be that exactly, but I want to stay with you, and I think your quirk would be great for this." Her words had stunned Yukio, and now he gaped at her like a fish. He blinked away the tears that had started to build up in his eyes. How could my quirk ever be good for anything? She'd smiled at him, but not in the pitying way other people always had. "Sometimes, it's better for injured people to stay awake. I think, at least. Maybe I'm wrong, but I still want to try." He remembers watching all those movies with his sister where a character would shout, "Stay with me," to another dying one. Those scenes where not sleeping was a relief, a reassurance. It made his heart ache. Yukio agreed in the end. They both became paramedics, just like they had planned. He would use his quirk on people sometimes, when he deemed it necessary, because awake meant alive. And alive was good. Sometimes his sister would use hers on struggling victims when it was quicker. It was all going well, more than it ever had, but he should have known better. Good things never last. A year ago, an accident happened during a villain attack where a man had been seriously injured, causing external bleeding. Yukio had used his quirk on him, but the man had died before they could even reach the ambulance. The cause of death was blood loss, all because of him. Keeping him awake had increased his blood pressure, making the blood pump out even faster. The man's family had tried to sue him, and won. He lost his job after that. And then he was the same useless little boy he had always been. He had to move to another apartment, one that was more affordable. Miyako paid it for him. He didn't try to find work or do anything. He had nothing left, but then he found a stray cat and took it home with him. He could use his quirk on it, surprisingly. He would activate it at night since the animal stayed up then. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him. He lost it, too. One night, he couldn't find the cat. Normally, it would return home early in the morning, but not that day. He had gone out only to find the cat's bloody corpse splattered on the road. His life had been a series of unfortunate events. Yukio had nothing left in this world, nothing to offer, until he met him. He called himself All for One. He'd extended a hand to Yukio as he sat in an alley, his body shivering from the cold night. That's when they made the deal. Izuku's body had relaxed, or at least as much as it could considering the gun currently being held up to his head. He's waiting for the right moment to move, but he's scared it might make Yukio pull the trigger and shoot someone in the room. "Why are you telling us all this?" Izuku asks. It was the first time anyone had said a word since the man had started telling them all about his life. He can practically hear Yukio smile behind him. "Wouldn't you like to know?" His sister tries to reason with him. "It's not too late yet, Yukio. We can go home and..." "Go home?" He cuts her off. "There's no place like that for me, not here." He pushes the gun against Izuku's green curls, making his head turn to the side. "You want to sleep, right?" The freckled teen was about to nod, but then his eyes widened, realizing what the question implied. He opens his mouth and then a loud bang echoed in the room, followed by shouting and his body hitting the floor. Izuku's head is spinning, but it doesn't hurt. "Midoriya, are you hurt?" "Sensei." His teacher is standing there, right in front of him, pinning down Yukio on the ground. "The police are on their way. Sorry, it took so long." Izuku doesn't understand how they're here, but it doesn't matter. He lets out a breath he'd been holding. "Wait, don't hurt him," Miyako pleads. "Yukio, please, just let go of your quirk. We can figure it out." "You don't need to do this," she reasons. Her brother let out a dry laugh. "I can't, even if I wanted to." Katsuki helps his childhood friend stand. Izuku thinks he can see red and blue lights flashing outside and hear the sound of sirens becoming louder with each passing second. Yukio smiles, but not in a sad or bitter way. No, he looks happy, relieved, and quirkless. Izuku doesn't understand. His throat feels suddenly very dry, and he only manages to utter a single word out. "What? I'm quirkless," the man repeats. Even though he's pinned down by Aizawa and police officers swarm the room, pointing their guns at him, Yukio still grins. Not in a crazy, maddened way, this is a genuine smile, and that's what takes Izuku even more off guard. He can't find the right words, or maybe it's because he doesn't try to. He's sure it's the man who had used his quirk on him. He'd admitted it himself. It had only been a week since then. How had Yukio managed to lose it in such a small amount of time? Izuku wants to ask how and why. Well, he knows All for One has something to do with it, somehow. Had he taken his quirk? He couldn't think of another possibility. But even then, why would the villain be after a quirk that would take away his ability to sleep? Perhaps he hadn't known. "It doesn't, I don't." "Midoriya, don't listen to him. He could be lying for all we know." His teacher tells him, "Let's get you somewhere safe for now." Katsuki is still helping him stand. Izuku turns his head to look at Miyako, who seems to be at a loss of words as well. She looks right past them, her eyes meeting a pair identical to hers. A police officer goes to her with quirk suppressant cuffs. Her head snaps in his direction and she takes a step back. The freckled teen shoves his childhood friend's hand away. Wait, she doesn't have anything to do with it. His eyes flicker between his teacher and Miyako. Problem child, she brought you here. Aizawa finishes putting the other pair of quirk suppressant cuffs on Yukio. His gaze finally meets his, and Izuku takes a step back. No, she didn't know. His teacher opens his mouth to argue again and goes to stand up, but Izuku cuts him off. Please, she helped me. The pro hero's eye twitches and the green-haired teen pushes away the guilt building up in his chest. He closes his eyes and sighs, his eyebrows drawn together. Fine, he agrees, but she still has to go through an interrogation at the police station. It's protocol. Miyako gives a stiff nod. Izuku lets himself relax a bit when the officer puts the cuffs away. How did they get here? He wonders. Everything seems to be going in slow motion as they exit the building. It feels as if he's underwater, his head filled with too much to hold a thought. He had thought the air was cold earlier, but now he doesn't pay it any mind. The sound of sirens feels far away, which is odd because he can see blue and red lights coloring everything around him. Izuku thinks he can see some of his classmates, the ones who'd been helping him plan all of this, sitting on the ground by a car. He wonders why they're here. They lift their heads when they see him. Tsukachi'll give them a ride to the dorms, Aizawa says, putting a hand on his shoulder, making the teen startle. Bakugo, you can go with them. I'll drive Midoriya myself. I'll go with Deku, Katsuki states. I wasn't asking, the man responds. There's a finality to it that makes the blonde purse his lips and comply. Izuku lets Aizawa lead him to what he guesses is his car. His teacher opens the door for him, but he doesn't have the energy to thank him. He puts a hand on the door and goes to enter. Midoriya, someone shouts behind him. His ears clear, and his head turns sharply toward the voice. It's Yukio, his shining blue irises staring right at him and a grin on his face. The two police officers who are holding him stop, unsure whether they should continue in their tracks. He's wearing a blue sweater and dark jeans. Izuku wonders how he's not cold yet, or if he even feels it at all. Maybe he doesn't. That would make two of them. It's been the best week of my life, he speaks loudly. The moonlight shimmers above him, showing the gleam in his eyes. So, thank you. A tear rolls down his cheek, and then he's dragged towards the police car, someone putting a hand on his head to put him in the back seat. The last thing Izuku sees before the door is shut is the small smile Yukio gives him, and then he's gone. He stands there, unmoving, for a long moment. He stares at the spot where the man had been standing mere seconds ago. Aizawa tells him they should leave, and he doesn't argue. He gets in the car, putting his head down to go in the backseat, just like Yukio had done. There's a thickness in the air that hadn't been there on Shouta's way here. He keeps glancing in the rear-view mirror, but every time he finds Midoriya in the same position, looking out the window at nothing in particular. He thinks back on the conversation he'd had with Tsukachi when he'd gone to find his students. Yeah, Shouta lets out a tired laugh. He presses on the gas pedal a little harder. Listen, you might want to send for backup already. Things could get ugly. Sure, I don't think you'll need it though. Shouta frowns. What do you mean? That guy. I don't know how, but his profile says he's quirkless, Tsukachi says. It's just been updated a few hours ago. It's what I was trying to tell you. People don't just lose their quirks. Maybe the quirk-suppressing drugs from the Shai Hasekai have something to do with it. No, the man had mentioned all for one, and as far as he knew, the League and them didn't work together. When he had parked his car close to the building and had gone to enter the building, something had stopped him. Sickly 2op ... test ... There was a voice coming from the side of the building. He'd softened his footsteps and had walked along the wall, creeping up on the voice. He'd reached for his capture weapon and sprung in front of the people in the alley. Not just anyone. His students, all hunched over one of their phones, pure horror plastered on their faces. Once they had seen him, they'd startled a bit. No one had said a word, and the first thing to break the silence had been Midoriya's voice coming from the phone. ... RKS able to cancel each other out. Shouta's gaze had snapped to the screen, too far away to make out the image. He had walked in their direction and they'd let him. Sensei. Yayarazu's voice had cracked, but he could hear the relief behind her tone, or maybe it was desperation. He'd held out his hand, and Kaminari, who had been the one holding the phone, had given it to him. Shouta had ignored the electric shock he'd felt at the contact. The silly keychain dangling on the corner of the device had felt so out of place beside the scene shown on the screen. Midoriya, with a gun held up to his head. They were on a video call with him. The room was poorly lit, and the angle was bad. The person on the other hand couldn't hold the phone steadily, as if they were shaking. He tore his eyes from the screen to look at his students, and he saw them for what they were, children, terrified for the life of their friend. And understandably so. He swallowed down his fear. If they had seen just scared he truly was, they would have panicked. And so, he told them he'd take of it, that help was on their way. And then they told him it was Bakugo filming, and that they hadn't thought it would turn out like it. He'd kept his voice soft because it hadn't been the right time for him to scold them. And so they had listened to the villain recount his life story. Heard him talk about how he'd killed someone without meaning to. Shouta couldn't let himself feel bad for the man. He was holding his number one problem child's life in the palm of his hand, quite literally. Then Midoriya had spoken, despite everything. But the police had still yet to arrive. And the anxiety building up in the pro-hero's chest became too much. "You want to sleep, right?" Shouta had let out an audible gasp and had pushed the phone into one of the teen's hands. He had told them to stay put, but he couldn't hide the tremble in his voice. He had run across the side of the building, looking for the window that would match the broken blinds he'd seen in the video. He had gone inside the other night, anyway, and he remembered how it was on this side of the building, and on the first floor. The moment he had found it, he had hit his elbow as he could on the glass and broke the window. Bang! He had tackled Yukio to the ground, and the man had let out a surprised yelp, but it didn't ease the heavy feeling in Shouta's chest. Had he arrived too late? He had seen Midoriya on the ground, and then he'd heard Bakugo shout Deku. The hero called out to his student, no answer. He couldn't move from his spot, had to pin down the man. But then, the small teen had stirred. He had tried to keep his voice steady. "Midoriya, are you hurt?" He glances in the rear-view mirror again. His student hasn't moved an inch, and he grips the steering wheel a little harder. The ride shouldn't be that long, but it is anyway, or at least it feels that way. There's no one else at this hour on the road, but the fact they keep catching every single red light doesn't help at all. "I'm sorry," he says. Midoriya's head turns to him abruptly. "What for?" He tilts his head in confusion. "Everything," Shouta answers. He turns his head slightly to the side, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead of him. "I should have paid more attention before it even happened in the first place. But I should also have listened to you and the others when you came to me." The teen doesn't answer, and after a moment it becomes clear to Shouta he has no intention to do so. "It doesn't matter now though." He straightens up in his seat. "We'll find a way to fix this." He doesn't mean it when he says it doesn't matter, because it does. It's been stuck in his head this entire week and he's exhausted. He can't even begin to imagine what it must be like for Midoriya. Shouta really wants to go sleep now, and thinking about it makes something twist and churn in his stomach. His problem child won't be able to fall asleep, since Miyako is currently at the police station. When the villain had admitted to being quirkless, he had tried to soothe Midoriya. It's true, Yukio could be lying. But Shouta doesn't actually believe that, but the thought brings comfort, so he keeps it close. Izuku makes his way to the Height Alliance dorms, Aizawa walking beside him. His teacher isn't wearing his hero costume, he realizes. Instead, he has some black sweatpants with a gray shirt on, along with a dark coat and his capture weapon. His hair is pulled back into a bun, but there are a few strands that have fallen out. Aizawa had probably been doing his own thing before he'd rushed to go save him. Izuku feels bad for having bothered him like that. Finally, they arrive and Aizawa stops at the top of the stairs. "I'll be back tomorrow to see what we should do," he says. "Will you be alright until then?" Izuku doesn't look at him. He can't. He doesn't know why the man had just saved his life. Shouldn't he be more grateful? He gives him a stiff nod and pushes the door open. He hears Aizawa's footsteps go down the stairs and shuts the door behind him as quietly as he can. When he turns back, he realizes he's not alone. "Midoriya," Todoroki says as he stands from the couch. It's not the whole class who's there, only the ones who had been helping him plan this disaster as well as Gyro. Still, it's more people than Izuku would like to see, though he would never say it out loud. They turn to him, and some stand up, but no one takes a step in his direction. Despite it being the middle of the night, Izuku notices they're all wearing the same clothes from earlier today. Did they stay up because of him? "What's wrong?" Uraraka asks, and he opens his mouth but no words come out. He feels the familiar sting that always comes with the tears welling up in his eyes. He quickly wipes them away. He shakes his head, looking at the floor. He can't see the faces they're making, but he can feel them staring at him. "I can't do this," he breathes out. He starts walking toward the elevator so he can go in his room, even though he knows he won't be able to fall asleep. He doesn't make it very far before Todoroki catches up to him. He grabs his arm. "Wait, Midoriya, please." Izuku turns to face his friend, annoyed. He doesn't know why he feels like this. Maybe because they'd convinced him the plan would work, and it didn't. Maybe it's something else. But then his eyes meet Todoroki's tired ones, and he's taken aback. The room is poorly lit, and he hadn't seen how bad he'd looked from afar, but now that his face is so close to his, he can't look away. Kaminari and Katsuki are the first to appear behind Todoroki, and then the rest. They're all in a similar state. "They wouldn't be if it weren't because of you." A voice in his head nags Izuku, and he doesn't bother pushing it away. "I believed you." A tear rolls down his cheek. Izuku feels a mix of sadness and anger hit him all at once. He speaks louder. "I believed it when you said it would be all right, but it still isn't." A hollow laugh escapes his lips. "I shouldn't have trusted you." He rips his arm free from Todoroki's hold. He continues to walk, and for a moment he thinks they'll finally leave him alone, but then Uraraka speaks up. "It's not fair, you know." She doesn't shout, but it's still loud enough for Izuku to wonder if they'll end up waking other people up. He turns his head again and sees Uraraka cry. While you were in there, Bakugo was on a call with us, and we were just outside, in case things got bad. Her voice is shaking, and she tries to stop the tears in her eyes from falling, but it's not working. And then, we heard some shouting, but we couldn't see what was happening, and Bakugo FaceTimed us. Asui puts a hand on his shoulder to comfort her. We saw someone hold a gun to your head, and we had to watch, but we couldn't do anything. Izuku sucks in a sharp breath, and I know that's not fair to you, either. But I was terrified, and then they didn't let us see you. You just came back in. You want to leave already. Izuku holds his arms as if hugging himself. He hadn't known they had followed him, or that Katsuki had been on the phone with them. He must have kept it in his pocket and took it out when Yukio reached for his gun. But even that doesn't change the fact he hasn't been fair with his friends. I'm never going to sleep again. The words escape his lips before he can stop himself. His classmates look at him with shocked expressions. Kaminari gives him a shaky smile. We'll find a solution. Izuku shakes his head and turns back to face them. No, I'll never be able to sleep again. Not by myself, at least. A tear escapes his eye, and then another, but this time he lets them. Yukio, the man with the quirk, he doesn't have his quirk anymore, but it's still there, I can feel it. He places his hand on his chest and squeezes. He gave it to All for One, but he's in Tartarus now, has been for a while, so I don't know how it's possible. And, even if it was, there's no way the commission would let him use his quirk. There has to be another way, Todoroki says, though the look on his face betrays how little trust he has in his own words. He's standing a few feet away from everyone else, and no one dares take a step forward as if they were scared he would shatter if they did. And maybe he would, but right now he doesn't feel anything. The anger, resentment, all of it, vanished, leaving a hole in his chest where his heart should be. I don't really mind, because at least I've managed to save Yukio. His voice cracks, or well, that's what I should be thinking, right? He takes a step back, bent over himself. But then, who will save me? Katsuki is by his side before he knows it, keeping him from falling. Izuku bursts into tears, emptying his heart's content. Every little thing that had been building up over the past few days had gotten so heavy, so quickly. It's only now that he realized just how heavy it had become. It reminds him of the time when Katsuki found him on his second night, crying in the bathroom. He had gotten sleep since then, but it hadn't completely fixed his sleep schedule. Izuku feels exhausted. Kaken, Izuku grips his childhood friend's forearms. He hates how desperate he sounds, and how he keeps crying over himself. Don't leave me. I'm not going anywhere. Katsuki holds him tighter. Izuku had wanted to be left alone, or maybe he had managed to lie to himself about it, because somehow the blonde makes him feel safe. He still feels like a burden, like everything would be easier if he simply weren't there. But he's too tired to care, and so he acts selfishly anyway. I really want to sleep, he says barely above a whisper, falling to his knees and bringing Katsuki down with him. I don't care how, or if it has to be forever. Please, I just want this to be over. Don't you dare give up yet, nerd. Kaken, Izuku hugs him back, holding him like he was his lifeline. The only thing keeping him from drowning. I know. Katsuki doesn't let go, and he continues holding him as Izuku cries his heart out. It doesn't matter if everyone else sees him like this, nothing seems to matter anymore. Selfishly, he wishes someone else would have been stuck like this. The thought only makes him cry harder. Izuku loves quirks, he always has, but he doesn't know what good Yukio's quirk brings. He wonders how the man had survived so long with it. He thinks he can hear Katsuki whisper, you're okay, and it'd be perfect if only he could go to sleep right this instant. But he can't. He knows, because he's on the verge of falling asleep, has been since the ride in Aizawa's car, but something is stopping him. Why is it always me? He whispers. He wonders why those things always happen to him. Maybe he did something wrong and he can't remember. Or maybe it's the price to pay for the quirk he's been given. He should consider himself lucky instead of pitying himself. Yaoyorozu places a hand over her mouth and drops to her knees beside them. I'm sorry we can't do anything for you, Midoriya, she says and joins Katsuki in his hold. And then it's Kaminari. I didn't notice how much this was hurting you, he cries. They all make their way to him, one by one. It's uncomfortable and messy, everyone holding onto each other and trying to comfort Izuku. Usually getting hugged by so many people in this situation would be the last thing he'd want, but this is different. Eventually, the tears stop. Izuku still feels awful, of course, but his chest feels lighter. He has to remind himself he's not alone in this. Or well, he is, but he knows his friends won't give up on him. If he can't keep going for himself, he'll do it for them, and All Might, his mom, Aizawa, Yukio. Izuku has always done his best in life. There's no way he's going to stop now. He won't give up yet. Izuku is surprised by how well he's still able to stand in his sleep-deprived state. It's not like he could fall unconscious, though thinking about it now, he doesn't think he would mind. His friends have all pulled away by now, and Katsuki is walking with him to his room, making sure his legs don't give out halfway there. He doesn't know what he'll do for the rest of the night. His head is pounding from the lack of sleep, so he knows he won't be able to focus on anything, and his body feels too weak to train. They finally stop right in front of Izuku's door, and just when Izuku goes to say goodnight and close it, Katsuki steps in and plops down on the floor, his back resting against the bed frame. Izuku doesn't stop him, or well, doesn't have the time to. It's cold in his room, even though Izuku is still wearing the jacket he had worn outside. He stares at Katsuki, and when the other meets his gaze, he opens his mouth to talk and closes it when no words come out. "Were you planning on sleeping or something?" Katsuki asks bluntly. "No, it's just, I didn't know you would stay here," Izuku says. He closes the door behind him slowly, so as to not wake anyone. "I can leave if you want," Katsuki offers, though he makes no move to get up. Instead, he looks at the floor, and Izuku realizes he doesn't want to be alone after all. That's not it," Izuku says before adding, "You can stay." He goes to sit on his bed close to where his pillow is and brings his legs closer to his chest. Izuku thinks this might be uncomfortable or awkward with someone else, but this is Kaken, so it's alright. Katsuki takes out his phone. Neither of them talks. Instead, Izuku listens to the wind hit against his window, and to the small music of the game his childhood friend is playing. Izuku's phone is dead, probably due to the cold outside. He reaches behind his bed for the charger he keeps there and waits until the screen lights up. He scrolls mindlessly through some of his group chats, even though he's barely active on all of them. "Back there," Katsuki says, startling Izuku out of his thoughts. "I was starting to doubt if anyone would come." It takes the freckled teen a few seconds to understand what he's referring to, and when he does, he almost wants to ask if they really need to talk about it. "I wasn't expecting anyone at all," Izuku admits. It's true, he hadn't even known Katsuki had called for help. Not until Uraraka told him not even an hour ago. "Of course you would," Katsuki says. And Izuku notices he's not playing his game anymore, just going back and forth on his home page. "Felt so fucking useless watching you, and stupid for agreeing to go in the first place. It's not your fault. I know, it's not that." He closes his phone and runs a hand through his hair, still avoiding looking at Izuku. "It's just, I'm glad you didn't die," he mumbles. It takes Izuku by surprise, and he smiles. He'd been terrified at that moment, not knowing if Yukio would pull the trigger the next second. He wonders if it would have made things easier, having him die right there, but he stays quiet. "Me too." Early the next morning, Izuku gets a text from Aizawa telling him to meet him outside in a little while. Katsuki had ended up going back to his room to sleep for the rest of the day after his eyes had turned red and tired. Izuku tries to find some comfortable clothes and ends up picking up some gray leggings laying on the floor and his t-shirt that had sweater written on it. He decides to wear the same jacket he'd worn the day before to stay warm. He walks down the stairs and into the kitchen. He's surprised to see that no one's up by now, but then he remembers it's Sunday, and that most of his classmates usually slept in a little longer on this day of the week. Izuku isn't really hungry, but his entire body feels weak and he thinks eating might help. Nothing looks appetizing looking in the pantry, but he settles on a toast. He watches it turn into a golden shade and jumps when it's ready. He puts butter on it and eats it above the sink, to not make unnecessary dishes. It tastes like sand in his mouth, and Izuku didn't even eat half of it when he can't anymore. He ends up throwing the rest in the trash. When he steps outside, the lamp posts are still lit up and dark clouds crowd the sky. His teacher is already there, waiting for him. Izuku wonders if he had only just arrived or if he had been there for a while already. There's a concerned look on Aizawa's face once he notices him, but it's gone before Izuku can ask him what's wrong. Midoriya the man greets, "We should get going. Recovery girl wanted to see you." The teen follows after his teacher. What for? He stutters. He hadn't been injured yesterday, or earlier this week. "She wants to look you over because of how sleep-deprived you are," Aizawa says, turning his head slightly to look at him. "I'm not." Izuku stops himself. Okay, maybe he kind of is. Now that he thinks about it, he must look terrible. He hasn't taken a shower in a while, and he doubts the bags under his eyes have gotten any better. He doesn't ask any more questions after this, and instead, he follows the pro hero quietly. Sometimes, he blinks and he'll have walked several feet ahead without realizing it. He doesn't pay attention to it. They get there eventually. Recovery girl is seated at her desk, looking through some files, but she turns to them when they enter. She gives him a sad smile when she sees him. "Dearie, how have you been?" she asks, as if the last time they'd seen each other hadn't been a few days ago. "Good," he answers out of habit, and Izuku feels his face heat up when he hears Aizawa snort beside him. "I wanted to do a quick checkup on you. It won't take too long." She gestures to the bed closest to her desk. "You can sit over here." Izuku does as he's told and sits on the edge of the bed he'd slept on these past few nights. Sleep is tricky, especially the lack of it, the elderly woman says as she puts the blood pressure cuff on his upper arm. It's terrible for your immune system, and it makes it harder for your brain to process information or remember things. She explains, I want to make sure your body is able to handle your terrible sleep schedule. Izuku knows there's a hint of humor in her voice, but he's too tired to force a laugh. Recovery Girl does a few more tests. While chatting with him, after she's done, she writes something down in what Izuku assumes is his file and turns back to face him. Everything looks normal, from what I can see, she says, but if you notice anything out of the ordinary, make sure you come see me. He gets down from the bed and catches Aizawa taking his phone out to look at the time and putting it back in his pocket. The man sighs. Sukachi wants to see you regarding yesterday's events and ask a few questions. But if you're feeling too tired, we can reschedule for another day. His teacher says, oh, and no, I'd rather get done with it. Izuku doesn't know when they'll find a way to let him sleep. If they do, he doesn't know if Miyako will want to see him again. If he doesn't do this now, it'll only make things more complicated. Aizawa nods. I'll contact your mother so she can meet us there. As soon as Izuku steps inside the police station, he sees his mother's head turn to him abruptly. She looks tired, and it's obvious she's been crying from the way her eyes are rimmed and puffy. She stands up from the plastic chair she had been sitting in and hesitates before taking a step in his direction. Oh, Izuku, my baby, she says. Tears well up in her eyes and she puts a hand over her mouth. Izuku knows his mom gets worried easily, but he still hates when he makes her cry. He walks up to her and once he's close enough, she throws herself at him and wraps her arms around him. I'm okay, Mom, he gives her a reassuring smile. Izuku, she repeats, as if to make sure he was real. He holds her close to him because he owes his mother so much, and it's all he's able to do to comfort her. I'm so happy you're not hurt. Her voice cracks. Something in Izuku's stomach twists. He guesses he is all right, in a way. A better word would be alive. But can he truly be called that in the state he's in? She takes a step back and holds his face in her hands, brushing her thumb against his cheek. I wish I could protect you from everything, she breathes out. Izuku's mom pulls away to wipe her tears just as Tsukachi calls them to his office. They enter the room and Izuku takes the seat placed across the detective. Aizawa closes the door behind them and drags an empty chair to the opposite side of the desk, right beside Tsukachi. I hope you don't mind if Aizawa is there as well. He took part in the investigation to find the villain, he explains. Izuku's mom shakes her head. It's not a problem, she replies, though. I'm still not sure what you wanted to talk about. I don't want to take more time than needed, so I'll go straight to the point. Tsukachi glances at Izuku. Yukio, the man who used his quirk on Izuku, making him unable to fall asleep. Would you like to press charges against him? The green-haired woman frowns. Hasn't he already been arrested? She questions. Under normal circumstances, he would have. The detective swallows. But this is a rather unusual scenario. You see, he leans forward in his chair, resting his elbows on the desk. We couldn't find any trace that he does have a quirk, meaning he's quirkless, Izuku's mom finishes. Tsukachi nods before continuing. This makes it considerably harder for us to blame him for illegal quirk use. Still, he assaulted someone with a gun, which is a serious crime, but we'd need Izuku to testify against him. He lets his hand fall flat on the wooden surface softly. Otherwise, we have no reason to keep him here. She turns to Izuku and holds the arm of his chair. Izuku, I think we should take some time to consider. No, I don't want. It's not necessary. He stumbles over his words. Midoriya, Aizawa speaks with a calm voice. I know it's not easy, and we can't make the decision for you, but we're talking about a villain. He's not a villain. Don't call him that. Izuku says louder than he'd intended. He's not. You don't understand. He clenches his fists. Everyone thinks I'm suffering because of this entire thing, or that I'm angry at Yukio. But I'm not, he whispers. His quirk, it was hurting him. Izuku knows they can't understand, and maybe he can't either. His entire life, he's only wished for one thing. A quirk. Meeting people who wish to get rid of theirs always confuses him. He'd crossed paths with other people who saw their quirks as a burden, a curse, but this time had been different. All quirks could be used for good, he was certain of it. Until yesterday, at least. Perhaps they could also bring suffering. Maybe he'd always known, but had chosen to ignore it. He suffered a lot, because of it. I don't want to ruin the one good thing he has. Izuku doesn't say it, but he would bear this quirk until death if it meant he could save someone. He knows the others in the room understand this by the frustrated looks on their faces and the way they purse their lips. All right, his mom says, and it surprises Izuku that she would agree so quickly. As if reading his thoughts, she put her hand up. People might call me a bad mother for this, but I know I can't change your mind about this. I'm always worrying over you. And I'll never stop. She gives him a soft smile before turning her head to look at the other adults. So please, just make sure he's safe. Izuku hasn't given his mom enough credit for everything she's done for him. Sometimes, he forgets how well she knows him. He wouldn't be able to live with himself if Yukio had to endure this quirk for the rest of his life because of him. I'll make sure of it, Aizawa promises. He and Tsukachi exchange a look for a moment before the police officer lets out a sigh. We thought you might say something like this, he admits, looking at Izuku. But it doesn't matter. What does matter is what we do next to solve our current issue, which is the quirk still affecting you. Yukio mentioned meeting All for One, but wouldn't say much more while he was being interrogated, so our best bet would be to start looking there. The pro hero says, the thing is, he's been in Tartarus for a few months now, so it's unclear how he could have taken the quirk right after Yukio used it, that being a week ago. This reminds Izuku of how little they know, of how much time it'll actually take before they find a solution. They continue talking for a while, although Izuku doesn't say much. At some point, Aizawa's phone rings and he excuses himself to go answer the call outside. He comes back a few seconds later and looks at Izuku. Recovery girl just called. He says, Miyako is there. She'd like to speak with you once you come back. Izuku's eyes widen. She wants to see him. He'd been scared she might be angry at him for arresting her brother or not being able to help in the way she had hoped for, and she might be. But he lets himself hope she won't, and he lets out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Izuku can't stand how much time it takes for them to reach the gates of UA. The ride isn't necessarily long, but with the radio playing a terrible song, Aizawa tapping his finger on the steering wheel, and the leg he can't stop from bouncing, it feels endless. Aizawa parks the car just outside the gate and Izuku follows after him inside the building. Izuku is annoyed at how slow his teacher is walking, and he has to calm himself down before he ends up walking past him. What could Miyako want to talk to him about? He doesn't want to think about it, all the possible reasons. He calls her by her first name now because using her last name feels out of place after meeting her brother. He hopes she doesn't mind. They don't need to knock on the recovery girl's door, it's already open. He hears people talking, and he recognizes one of the voices belonging to the elderly heroine, and the other to Miyako. He swallows. He'd been eager to see her and talk to her, but now Izuku wishes he could have had more time to prepare himself. He walks in first, and immediately his eyes meet hers. At first, she looks surprised to see him, but then Izuku thinks he must have imagined it because the next second it's gone, and instead she smiles softly at him. Midoriya, it's nice to see you again. She sounds genuine, and Izuku feels relief flood his chest. It's nice to see you, too. He stutters. Did you wanted to see me? Izuku says, but it comes out more like a question. Miyako nods. Yes, although I had imagined somewhere more. She searches for her words. Private. Izuku doesn't miss the way she glances at Aizawa for a split second before focusing her gaze back onto him. He turns to look at his teacher when he feels a hand on his shoulder. There are a few things I need to discuss with Recovery Girl, but the teacher's lounge is available, he says. Is that okay with you? Miyako asks the teen. Of course, he answers. Aizawa lets his hand fall and looks right into Izuku's eyes. I won't be far if you need anything. There's something in the way he says it. Maybe it's the words or the tone he uses, but it makes Izuku feel safe. The teacher's lounge is just a few doors down the hall, so they get there quickly enough. He's been in this room many times before, when he would have lunch with All Might. Izuku stops in the doorframe to let Miyako enter first, and she thanks him before walking in, her arm brushing his from how little place he leaves her. She heads for the small stool, and places her bag to rest on the metal legs of her seat. This leaves the green couch to Izuku, and he's glad because it reminds him of the one he has at home. Once they've both sat down, Izuku takes the time to really look at her. There's something he hadn't noticed before hidden behind her navy irises, a kind of restlessness. The sweat on her forehead makes a few strands of hair stick to it, and she avoids looking into his eyes. Miyako, he starts, unsure. Why exactly did you want to talk to me? She holds her hands together and lets out a small laugh. I'm really obvious, aren't I? She shakes her head. I'm sorry, I wanted to clear things up a bit. About, well, everything. Miyako gives him an apologetic smile. Izuku thinks back on when Katsuki had found the pills she'd used on him, and he realizes she must know what he's thinking from the way she gives him an apologetic smile. I guess I should start from the beginning. She rolls her thumbs around each other. When I got my quirk, everyone was really happy for me, and I was glad, too. But then one night I found I couldn't sleep while using it. Miyako tells him of the night her mother asked her to use her quirk on her, just once, because she couldn't fall asleep. At the time, she had only just manifested her quirk a few weeks ago, so she had agreed without thinking about it. That night, she hadn't been able to sleep at all. She tells him how she still remembers how it had felt then, and how she thinks it must have been for her brother all those years. Our bodies didn't adapt to our quirks as well as the doctor had hoped. She explains, normally, quirks come with minor mutations to protect its user, but we didn't have anything like that. Izuku never takes the time to think about how discovering a quirk can be devastating for some people. He didn't have one at all until earlier this year, and he's grateful for it every day. But he can't ignore the pain some quirks bring. Then, of course, the accident happened with my brother. A shadow passes across her face. I couldn't do much to help him, except lend him some money. Our parents didn't want to, help. So it was just him and I. She turns her palms upwards, her left hand sitting above her right, as if she were holding something fragile. I didn't get to see him often, but when I did, he looked so unhappy. Izuku understands, or at least he thinks he does. He can't help but compare it to his own family. His mother never told him, but Izuku knows his father left soon after they learned he wouldn't develop a quirk. Since then, his mother has always cared for him all by herself. She shifts in her seat, but then, about a week ago, he called me. Miyako says, it had been a while since I'd heard him sound so cheerful, untroubled. He told me about his deal, and I didn't have the heart to tell him how wrong it was. She straightens up. He told me how he'd used his quirk on a hero student, you, so I tried to find you without telling him. Apparently, luck was on my side, because soon after recovery girl called the hospital and I knew it had to be you. Miyako looks so nervous, and Izuku feels like in a way it's his fault. On the second night, I couldn't come to see you, she continues. MahouMou, the woman who used her quirk on you, she won't be able to make it tonight, she had an emergency. Izuku remembers that Aizawa had been the one to tell him. The emergency, it was your brother, he observes. She nods. Somehow he found out I was helping you, and then we got into a fight. She swallows, and Izuku thinks she looks terribly young right now. That's when I knew he needed help, she whispers the last part. She lets out a long sigh, as if the recent events were finally dawning on her, and pushes her hair back. I wasn't entirely honest about my quirk. Or his, sort of. She pushes her hands to rest on her knees. I never actually put you to sleep. It was my brother's quirk that was cancelled out by mine. Izuku frowns. That doesn't. I always fell asleep right away. Or almost, he doesn't say. It takes him a moment, but then he understands. Oh, that's with the pills. He doesn't finish his sentence. The first night, I guess you were too exhausted and immediately fell asleep, and maybe because you believed what I had told you about my quirk. It didn't occur to me that was the reason, at first. I didn't know for how long I would have to do this, and I'd already lied about my quirk, so I made you drink the strongest sleeping pills I had access to so that you would fall asleep the moment I used my quirk on you. A knot in Izuku's stomach forms at the reminder he'd technically been drugged. And he had, but he keeps it to himself. Why lie about it in the first place? He asks instead. She looks down at her hands. I'm honestly not sure, she says. I think I was scared that it would sell me out and that the heroes would end up arresting my brother. Her expression turns sour. But well, I guess it didn't matter in the end. So she is upset. Izuku doesn't blame her. He guesses it makes sense. Miyako turns her head toward the window, angry clouds still filling the sky above the city. A moment passes where neither of them says anything. And then her eyes soften. Yukio, she says, amusement in her voice. His name means happy child. She turns back to him. Ironic, isn't it? His name is everything he never was, or had the chance to be. Not until this week. She shakes her head. That's why I can't be mad at him for doing what he did. But I'm sorry you had to pay the price. Tears well up in her eyes. And Izuku wants to say something to comfort her, but he can't think of anything at all. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. She shakes her head. No, I'm sorry, Miyako says. Midoriya, would you close your eyes for me? She asks softly. He hesitates, because he doesn't know why she's asking him that all of the sudden. Please, she adds. And he does. He hears some rustling of fabric and an uneasy feeling forms in the pit of his stomach. It doesn't matter whether I was born only a few minutes before him, I've always felt like his big sister, and I'll do anything to protect him, she says. Izuku opens his eyes, even though she asked him not to, and immediately he feels his breath catch in his throat. She's holding a gun towards him, the same one her brother had held up to Izuku's head. He doesn't move, he freezes just like he had last time. He tells himself to move, or do something, but he can't. He can see the way she's trembling, and how her lips are pursed together. I've only ever wanted for him to be happy, to not have a single thing to worry about, and you gave that to him. Her voice is shaking, and finally a tear escapes her eye. So, thank you for letting my brother rest. Another tear rolls down her cheek. I'll leave my quirk with you, so that you can, too. Miyako pulls the gun up to her temple and smiles sadly. I hope I'll find sleep in death. She pulls the trigger. Don't. A bang echoes in the room, similar to when Yukio had missed him, but this time it's muffled. Time slows down. Miyako falls off the stool and Izuku stumbles over the coffee table sitting between them to catch her, but it's already too late. A puddle of blood is starting to form where her head is lying. And then Izuku's clothes turn red when he takes her in his arms. He tries to shake her and tells her to wake up, but she doesn't react. He can't let go of her, because if he does it'll mean it's real, and he knows it can't be. If someone had to die in the end, it should have been him, not her. He should have broken his neck after falling from the climbing wall, and should have been shot by Yukio a few seconds earlier. Anything but this. He starts sobbing. He holds her in his arms, blood slipping through his finger where the bullet had entered. Izuku doesn't know how much time passes as he cries his heart out. This is all his fault. Izuku rocks himself as he holds Miyako's head in his arms. He begs her to wake up, but she stays quiet. Her eyes are half-lidded, as though she were a child on the brink of sleep. Izuku can still see the blue of her irises, this shade that had made him feel warm. Now as he stares into her stiff gaze, it makes him feel lost, as if he were floating in the middle of the sea. There has to be a way to undo this. This can't be permanent. MahouMou, wake up. His voice is hoarse from crying, but he continues calling her name. He presses his palm to the wound on the side of her head to stop it from bleeding, but it doesn't do much. Izuku barely registers the blood slipping through his finger, his own heart beating so loud he can barely hear himself. Miyako, please. Izuku should do something, anything, to help. But he can't think of anything at all, so he stays there instead, unmoving. He thinks there's a bird trapped inside his ribcage where his heart should be, its wings flapping frantically to try and find a way out. The door slams open, but Izuku doesn't tear his eyes away from her lifeless form, even though he can't stand the look on her face. Her pale skin makes her seem sick, or maybe terrified, but with the way every crinkle on her face is relaxed, she looks at peace. Suddenly, there's a hand on his shoulder pulling him back. No, Izuku shouts. He tries to hold her tighter, because if he lets go she'll be dead and it'll be because of him. No, wake up, his voice wavers. Midoriya. Izuku shoves the hand back when it tries to pull him again. But now the person behind him grabs him more forcefully, pinning his arms to his side. Let go of me. I can't, I have to. He chokes on his words as he kicks his legs in an attempt to break free. Izuku tries to use his quirk, but the moment green sparks appear, it's gone. Hey, look at me. It's his teacher's voice. Izuku realizes. Aizawa turns him around so that he can face him. He puts both his hands on Izuku's upper arms to keep him from moving. Another set of footsteps stops abruptly at the door. Chiyo, call an ambulance. There's an unusual urgency in Aizawa's tone, but Izuku doesn't care or pay attention to it right now. He has to help Miyako. Sensei, Izuku's voice cracks. This can't. His eyes widen and he gasps. Iri, she could save her. I have to find Iri. Kid, stop. Breathe with me, okay. Izuku hits his teacher's chest weakly, but the man pulls his head against the crook of his shoulder anyway. I'm so sorry. Izuku doesn't know how much time passes where he sobs into his teacher's shirt and lets himself be held. His back is turned to Miyako's body, but every time he blinks the scene where she pulled the trigger and fell on the floor replays in his head. At some point, more people flood the room and Aizawa helps him stand, even though Izuku doesn't want to leave. Everything is blurry, and he doesn't understand what's going on around him. He moves his hand to keep the blanket resting on his shoulders. Since when does he have a blanket? There's a ringing in his ears blocking every sound around him, kind of a loud static. He hears someone calling his name, but he doesn't pay it much mind. Whoever they are, they must be talking to someone else. Except it doesn't stop, and Izuku can vaguely feel someone shake his shoulder, but he just finds it annoying. ..ri.ya.id. This can't be real, no. He'll see Miyako tomorrow, or later, when she's feeling better. For now, Izuku decides to hide away in a far corner of his mind. He thinks about last week when he'd had lunch with his friends and they'd all been laughing without a care in the world. Or maybe he did have worries at the time, but he doesn't remember them. Izuku is brought back from his thoughts when he feels something sharp prick his finger. He looks up and is met with an unfamiliar face. Izuku draws his hand back and the woman gives him a reassuring smile. Hi there, are you with us? Izuku frowns. Yeah. She nods encouragingly. Can you remember where we are? Izuku looks around for a moment and starts to feel nervous he's taking too long to answer. Yue, he utters out. She asks a few more questions, about what year it is, or his birthday, and Izuku answers all of them. Aizawa stands beside him. He was hit by a quirk about a week ago and it's been messing with his sleep since. So some things might be explained by that. The man explains. The kind woman nods and turns back to the small device in her hands that had been used to draw some of Izuku's blood. A quirk, you say? She questions, her brows drawing closer in confusion. That's weird, she mutters. Was there perhaps a time limit? Not that I'm aware of, Aizawa frowns. Well, I don't see anything for a quirk factor, she says, turning to Izuku. She sees the confusion in his face. When a person is affected by a quirk that doesn't match their DNA, it shows up on this little thing, she explains, holding up the device. Everything seems fine with you, physically speaking. You mean it's just gone? Aizawa asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. She smiles, seems like it. She rises from her crouching position. That's a good thing, isn't it? A moment of silence passes where no one says anything. Gone? No, he needs Miyako for that. And she's in recovery at the moment. I don't understand, and really, Izuku doesn't. They end up sitting on the stairs in front of the school's main building. waiting for someone to update them on Miyako's state. Izuku and Aizawa couldn't go with her in the ambulance, and the teen had turned down his teacher's offer to go wait at the hospital. He thinks it's weird how the ambulance didn't leave yet, how it's still parked right there. He doesn't think much of it. It's going to be fine, he tells himself. Izuku startles when an officer comes out of the building. The man has a cat mutation, and it takes Izuku a few seconds to realize it's the same person who'd been there at the USJ. He hadn't noticed the police arrive, either. Sansa, Aizawa greets. The man gives a slight nod in return. Were you the ones present during the incident? He questions. Izuku gets to his feet. Yes, he says. The officer looks awkward for a moment before he finally speaks up. There's no easy way to say this. He sighs. Ayumu Miyako died from severe blood loss. By the time the paramedics arrived on the scene, there was nothing they could do. I'm very sorry. Izuku doesn't understand what the man's words mean. There must be some kind of mistake. I'm guessing you're Midoriya, he asks, and Izuku gives him a small nod. The officer pulls out a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and hands it to him. We found this in the victim's bag. Izuku takes the paper and stares at it. We thought you might like to have it. Midoriya Izuku is written on it. Izuku looks back up to the officer saying goodbye and watches him head to his car. He sits back down on the stairs, hands trembling. Aizawa is still there, but he looks into the distance as to not intrude on the green-haired teen. Hesitantly, Izuku opens it. It's nothing long. In fact, it's extremely short, but it's enough to bring tears to his eyes. My quirk should have cancelled out my brothers if all went well. Doing this meant I would never find sleep again, so please understand I am sorry, but I do not regret it. I love my brother, and I chose to save him by saving you. I hope you can rest peacefully. Love, Miyako. Izuku folds the paper again, and the events finally dawn on him. She won't come back. Saying it out loud makes everything much more real, and his last string of hope finally breaks. He'd known her for a week, but it had been enough for him to get attached. He had tried to help her and had failed miserably. In the end, she had been the one to save him. He looks into the distance. The raging clouds that had been there since early this morning start to let small drops fall flat on the ground. Still, no one gets up to move. You can't always save everyone, Aizawa tells him, but his voice is calm. Expecting this from anyone would be unreasonable. You did all you could. She was right in front of me. And I, Izuku whispers, the words dying on his lips. And I, he put a hand over his mouth, and finally the tears fall, even though his eyes hurt badly from how much he's already cried today. I couldn't help her, sensei. Aizawa took him in his arms, and Izuku would have been embarrassed in any other situation. But not now. No, right now. All he can think about is how much he's failed this one person who'd put so much faith in him. He holds Izuku as he cries. I've got you. A few months later, Izuku stands still, his eyes staring down at the dull rock in front of him. Miyako's grave. Around him, the air holds a soothing stillness, only broken by the small droplets of water bouncing off his umbrella. He crouches down to place the blue hydrangeas above the ground where she rests. Ever since that faithful day, Izuku had been able to sleep by himself. He should have been grateful, but most of the time he would wake up in bed drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest, remembering the moment Miyako had pulled the trigger or all her blood seeping through his fingers. Of course, it's not as bad as it used to be, but he still gets nightmares every now and then. Izuku doesn't visit her grave often. In fact, he hasn't come back here since her funerals. But last night had been particularly miserable, and so he decided to come here. He hears footsteps approach him from behind and turns his head when they stop right beside him. Izuku is surprised to see Yukio stand there, but not as much as he thinks he should be. He's wearing a beige sweater underneath a gray overcoat. He turns to look at the flowers he'd just placed, the water streaming from the tips of their melancholic petals. You know, the man starts, I don't like you. He pauses for a moment, and Izuku wonders if he had come all the way here just to tell him that. Or maybe that's what I've been trying to convince myself of, so that I wouldn't feel bad after using my quirk on you. Izuku doesn't look at him, and he can't imagine what face Yukio must be making right now. Do you feel bad? I mean, he seems to think for a second. I don't think I'll ever feel bad about getting rid of my quirk, he says. But after Miyako and I had a fight, I started feeling terrible to have put you through this. She made me realize how much I'd messed up. He explains, so when I saw you I thought I could fix this. By killing me? Izuku asks. Yeah, Yukio answers truthfully. I thought if I used my quirk on you like All for One wanted, it'd be the last time I'd ever hurt anyone because of it. He chuckles dryly. But in the end, I guess I did it anyway. They fall back into silence, and somehow Izuku takes comfort in it. He thinks Yukio might be the only one to understand how he feels, probably even more than him. He doesn't know how losing a twin might feel, and he never will. Izuku doesn't think he's missing out on anything. She was the only one to ever truly see me, what I felt or who I was. Yukio says, I know even today she wouldn't blame me, and she probably never has. That's just how she is. He lets out a shuddering breath. She'd say it was worth it. A beat passes. Was it? Izuku asks. Yukio purses his lips. No, even though he wishes he could. Izuku can't get himself to be mad at him. He often thinks of ways he could have saved Miyako if he'd done something differently. If they hadn't let her come with them to see her brother. If Izuku had never gone out at all on that Sunday night. Or maybe if he hadn't gone with her inside the teacher's lounge. He knows it's useless. That instead he should use it, grow, learn from it. But he can't. The heroes raided All for One's hideout. At least one of them. Yukio spins his own umbrella over his head, the gentle rain falling all around them. They found quirks, hundreds of them, all bottled up in glass jars. Izuku frowns, and when he turns his head he sees the man still staring at his sister's grave. You probably don't know about it. It's not public information. The commission made us promise to keep quiet about it. Izuku doesn't understand what he's talking about, but he lets him continue anyway. There were, names on those jars, including mine. He utters. And so they called all those people whose quirks had been taken by All for One, and they asked us if we wanted them back. Apparently, that's how he would store the quirks. The freckled teen is too stunned to say anything for a moment. Did you take it? He asks. Yukio swallows and nods stiffly. I don't know what made me accept. Maybe it's because I felt like I owed it to her, or something. Wait, so, you have your quirk. Izuku feels dread rush through his body. Had everything all been for nothing? Him suffering like that? And Miyako dying to save him, was it all in vain? Oh, no. It's still right here. The man reaches into his pocket and takes out a glass jar that fits the palm of his hand. There's a glowing liquid of an icy blue swirling inside it from the sudden movement. I'd need to drink it all to get it back, but that's the last thing I want. I don't know what to do with it now. Izuku stares at it. I think you should have it. Izuku lifts his gaze to look at Yukio. For what? Keep it? Get rid of it? I don't really care, honestly. He admits, but I can't stand to have it on me anymore. It reminds me of. He doesn't need to finish his sentence. Izuku understands what he's talking about. He extends his arm a bit and Yukio places it in his hand and says, thank you. The streets are empty where Izuku walks, making his way back to UAS campus. The rain had started pouring much harder after he'd left the cemetery. His shoes are soaked and it makes his feet feel terribly cold. Izuku thinks back on the time Night-Eye had died. He hadn't cried as much then, even though he'd known him for as long as Miyako, almost. But no, it's different, because this time he'd actually seen her die. And because she had asked him to save her, by saving his brother, and he had ultimately failed to do so. Yukio had been ready to give up everything to get rid of his quirk. And somehow it reminds Izuku of himself. He remembers when he was a child, going around the house, trying to blow fire or attract small objects toward him, then finding out he was quirkless. He also remembers in middle school, still hoping to get a quirk and become a hero. He wonders what would have happened to him if All for One had found him before All Might, if he would have asked the man for a quirk. The sky slowly starts to get darker, and his umbrella slips from his grip because of the harsh wind. Izuku runs after it until he reaches a bridge, and then the umbrella falls into the river. He clenches his extended hand. He's not too far away from the school, but still, he blames himself for dropping his only protection against the rain. There's no point in rushing to get under a roof, his clothes already drenched in water. Izuku leans on the rails of the bridge and takes out the jar Yukio had given him earlier. He turns it around in his hand, examining it. Is this small liquid really the cause of all those horrible events? Is this what led to Miyako's death? Her suicide? Izuku takes in a trembling breath. There's no one to blame for this. It's not the liquid's fault. Nor is it Izuku's. She's dead now, and she won't be coming back, but Izuku can't do anything about it. And maybe that's okay. She gave up her life so that her brother could live the life he's always wanted, so that Izuku could continue to live his dream unbothered. He squeezes the jar a little harder and takes a step back. He'll never forget about Miyako, but it's time he lets go. Izuku throws the quirk in the air with as much force as he can gather, blinking away the rain mixed with his tears. The adrenaline he felt moments ago is replaced with relief flooding through him. He clutches his shirt just above his heart, attempting to contain the overwhelming feeling in his chest. I'll become a hero, he shouts, and then I'll save people and give them the help I couldn't give you. He won't fail ever again. When Izuku gets back to the dorms, he tries to open the door quietly, hoping to go unnoticed and failing miserably. The moment he steps in, every head in the common room turns to look at him. Oh my god, Midoriya. We were about to call Aizawa cause you were taking so long. Kirishima exclaims. Deku-kun, you're all soaked. What happened? Uraraka asks, worry evident in her voice. Izuku stands still awkwardly. I kind of dropped my umbrella, he says, but it comes out more like a question. Yaoyorozu produces a towel and hands it out to him. Here, you'll catch a cold if you stay like this, she tells him, and Izuku thanks her. He dries his hair as best as he can while heading up to his room to change clothes. He had thought he had gotten used to the cold outside, but now that he's taking off his shoes, he realizes he simply can't feel them anymore. Izuku squeezes the water out of his drenched clothes on his balcony and leaves them out to dry on the side of his bed. As he's changing into more comfortable clothes, he wonders if he should go back downstairs to see his friends. Well, they're probably expecting him to at least say goodnight, and he doesn't want to disappoint them. When he goes back to the common room, Katsuki is in the kitchen washing the dishes with the help of some of their classmates. "Can I help?" Izuku asks with a soft smile. Walking towards the sink, the blonde clicks his tongue. "Did you even eat yet, nerd?" As if to answer his childhood friend's question. Izuku's stomach rumbles, and he feels his face heat up. He had completely forgotten about eating today, except for breakfast. "There are some leftovers in the fridge," Katsuki says. It turns out the leftovers are actually katsudon. Izuku puts the food in a bowl before putting it in the microwave. Once he sits down at the counter and starts eating, he looks up at Katsuki. "Kaken is so amazing," he says, and Katsuki shakes his head, his back still turned to him. Izuku means it. The katsudon reminds him of his mom's cooking, and he hasn't had the time to visit her lately. This is nice, he thinks. It's certainly not perfect, but he likes it. He gets up to wash his bowl and goes back to head for his room. "I'm going back to my room. Good night, everyone," he says. He's about to turn around when Kaminari speaks up. "Wait, Midoriya, aren't you staying?" he asks. Izuku frowns. "Stay for what?" His friends must have read the question on his face because the corners of their lips turn up. "Sunday movie nights, you know." Gyro winks at him. Of course, it's Sunday. These past few weeks, he hadn't stayed to watch the movies his friends had put on in a while. And honestly, he was starting to feel a little tired. Kaminari even went out to buy some snacks, she adds excitedly. Izuku's eyes widen. "I thought you guys stopped doing that." Kaminari scratches the back of his neck, his cheeks redder than usual. "Well, we did, but I don't know. Today felt special. Mina and we were the ones to decide whose turn it is to go out to get the snacks." He lets his eyelids close again, a tear escaping and hitting the table. "And it was my turn, but I asked you to go instead because I'm lazy." His voice cracks. Izuku smiles sadly at the memory. Kaminari probably still feels bad about not going out on that day. And even though Izuku had tried to reassure him it wasn't his fault, his friend had gone out of his way to do this. "All right," he says, slowly making his way to the area where almost everyone is sitting at. He can see the way Kaminari's shoulder relaxes at his word. And now he's glad he had chosen to stay. He plops down onto the green couch, a color similar to the one he has in his house. Like the one in the teacher's lounge, where Miyako. No, not tonight. Tonight, he wants to enjoy the time he spends with his friends. And he won't let anything ruin it, especially not his thoughts. They end up watching some pre-quirk movie about superheroes, but Izuku's not paying that much attention to it. Instead, he looks at his friends, those people he loves so much. Uraraka is squeezed between him and Isui, and Katsuki has his foot resting on top of Izuku's. Yaoyorozu and Gyro share a blanket on the floor, taking in hushed voices. They hold cups of tea in their hands, their backs resting against the couch. There's Ida not too far away, already sleeping, and Izuku thinks he looks so peaceful like this, not a single thing to worry about. "Guys," he says barely above a whisper, but they hear him anyway and lift their gazes to look at him. I love you all so much," he says. They all smile and draw a little closer to him, warming his heart. He's certain he'll be all right from now on. Of course, there will be some hard times, but he knows his friends will be there for him when it happens. For now, all he can do is enjoy this moment. And so, Izuku leaves all his worries for tomorrow, and he sleeps.